Sniper Cutie was hitting the target very accurately with her huge rifle. It was easy for the cutie to kill with her rifle, and she shouted that it was not even a challenge for her. Boss Bloodfox told the surprised sniper that she had never met a strong opponent before. The woman said that a strong elite could dodge a sniper's bullet, adding that she would realize this when she met someone who could dodge her bullet. During the battle with the protagonist, Honey realized she had met a strong man. She pulled out a knife. The sniper shouted in flight very menacingly that she would not give up. The protagonist calmly broke the sniper's knife with a strong blow. The surprised little cutie wished in a weak voice that the protagonist would go to hell. Ife in the clearing menacingly beat the cutie on the ass and asked who taught her sniper shooting. The sniper was uncomfortable and ashamed. She yelled at the Golden Eagle to stop. The sniper shouted at the angry assailant to stop immediately. He added that she wasn't even spanked by her parents. The protagonist replied sternly to the girl that he would do it on their behalf. Cutie thought very angrily to herself that Burkett humiliated her very badly. Suddenly the sniper felt during the spankings a tide of paternal love. The cutie with a faded look said that she was wrong and asked Ife to punish her. The guy slapped the snapper on the head and asked sternly who taught her to be indecent. The sniper girl sitting near the tree asked the guy to tie her harder. The protagonist told the Sioux girl that he sees some movement and he will go and check it out. He added that his girlfriend is safe. Ife slipped Beauty Sue his jacket and said that he will leave her for a while. The protagonist heard the girl replied that the girl told him not to worry and to just walk. Beauty Sue thought to herself confidently that she wasn't worried at all. A month ago during a special mission, the girl along with Burkett encountered difficulties. The girl was sitting on the shore. She coughed after they got out of the water. In a weak voice, she asked the boy for a dagger. Burkett replied to his companion that a dagger would not help her against a strong enemy. The girl said fearfully that she could not be captured and needed the dagger to kill herself. The protagonist said confidently that he would get the girl home alive. The guy handed the girl his tunic and said he had to leave for a while. At the same moment, the beautiful Sue felt completely reassured. The girl looked at the back of the protagonist and it gave her confidence. Burkett's silhouette gave a sense of security for the girl even when surrounded by enemies. On the other side of the forest, assassins attacked the police line. Then the sword warrior sped up to strike his opponent with a swing. The girl ducked just in time to avoid a dangerous sword strike. Another enemy ran behind. The policeman jumped up from her seat to avoid being caught by the sword. She then jumped up and neutralized the attackers with powerful leg kicks. From behind the policewoman, a woman called Pearblades suddenly appeared. Lynn shouted angrily that her opponents had gotten what they deserved. The policewoman felt someone coming up behind her. The woman threw the policewoman far to the side with a powerful blow. Her opponent prepared to attack. The paired blades shouted angrily to the policewoman that this was not the end. The assassin activated a special skill called Wind Blades. Pair Blades waved her weapon in all directions. Lynn was forced to step back. The woman angrily asked her rival, "How could she like that?" Lynn responded by screaming from the blows. The protagonist approached the clearing. He watched the confrontation between the policewoman and the assassin with great interest. The woman accelerated and attacked the policewoman with a move called the Tornado Splash. The twin blades with weapons in their hands prepared for another attack. The woman told her opponent that she must have a rank B. In doing so, the Lynn was able to avoid many attacks. The girl told strictly that she had a rank C. She gave the assassin her name. The woman sternly asked her rival why she didn't give up. Lynn threatened the assassin that she would arrest her. The twin blades accelerated and shouted at the rival to get ready to die. Ling thought to herself fearfully that she wouldn't be able to dodge. At that moment, someone commanded the policewoman from behind to step back. The pair of blades lunged at their opponent. The policewoman bounced aside. The girl thought surprised and happy to herself as to how she dodged. In the end, the policewoman decided to bravely go forwards against her rival. Lynn dodged with a quick and professional movement and managed to stab the assassin in the back. The paired blades couldn't figure out who was talking in the bushes next to them. Lynn turned around and looked carefully into the thicket. She couldn't figure out who was standing there. The main character was speaking in a hoarse voice from behind the trees to the policewoman. Lynn realized excitedly that she could see the mysterious mastermind in front of her. Ife decided to help the girl with the identity of the mysterious mastermind. At this time, someone's footsteps sounded. Another woman approached the battle scene. The police Lynn turned around to the side. She spotted another assassin. The woman said she would deal with the policewoman. She added to her subordinates that they should find Burkett. The policewoman Lynn asked with interest to her rival, who was she? Paired blades ran off to the side. She yelled to her colleague that she was leaving a ling on her. The black-clothed assassin turned toward the policewoman. There were tears in her eyes. Lynn asked excitedly to her rival why she was crying and are they in cahoots? The woman threw off her black clothes and said she wasn't crying at all. A hired killer called the Red Widow pulled out a chainsaw and yelled that she was glad she could kill someone. A policewoman naively asked her rival why she was undressed and very revealingly dressed. The chainsaw killer said she wasn't a nun, but it was easier to pretend that way. The line yelled at the woman to stay away from her. The Red Widow told the policewoman it was time to die. The chainsaw-wielding assassin angrily lunged at the policewoman. Paired blades ran through the woods. She thought to herself that Burkett was able to take out the sniper cutie. The assassin thought excitedly to herself that Burkett was able to take out their formation. The woman trotted through the woods. She realized that Burkett must be somewhere nearby. Looking closely, the assassin found the boy in the woods. The assassin grabbed the weapon and thought angrily to herself that her target was about to die. The assassin at full speed decided to kill the protagonist right on the spot. Ife heard the noise and swung his fist. The woman thought that Burkett had weaknesses. The assassin looked closely at her opponent. The guy stopped suddenly. The paired blades knew that Burkett never hit women. She swung her weapon at him. Paired blades swung her weapon to hit the guy. The assassin was surprised at how very quickly Burkett crouched down to dodge the blow. Ife was squatting. He decided fearfully to himself that danger was very close for him. The protagonist raised himself up and bumped his head right at the assassin between his legs. The paired blades was very surprised and embarrassed by the whole incident. After 15 minutes, the protagonist told the interviewer modestly that his name was Lee Yifei, and he worked as a bodyguard. The assassin said that she knew that the guy was Burkett. She added that he belonged to the Blood Fox squad. The guy asked with surprise, "What kind of assassin puts herself on display?" Paired blades angrily reminded that Burkett does not attack women. Ife said modestly, he doesn't want to see women's tears. That's why he doesn't like to kill women. The woman menacingly told the protagonist that she didn't believe him. She reminded him that Burkett didn't hurt her. Very shyly, the protagonist told the woman to look at herself. Ife shyly shouted to his shocked rival that Tay had wet herself. The paired blades looked at herself in surprise and realized that the guy was right. At this time, the Red Widow was using a chainsaw to try to hit the policewoman. The woman knocked the saw into the ground. At that time, the line bounced far back. The Red Widow shouted to her terrified rival that she was going to die. At that moment, something very distracted the assassin's attention. She looked away. The Red Widow noticed her fellow paired blades run out of the forest crying. The woman sternly asked the assassin what had happened to her, and if she was all right. Lynn decided to herself that it was the mysterious master who had defeated Pair Blades. The Red Widow couldn't understand what Burkett had done that had caused the assassin to be in such a sorry state. The woman decided that they should retreat. Ona shouted to Golden Eagle that they weren't done yet. With that, both assassins turned around and ran off into the thicket of the forest. Ife looked all around. He decided to see if the Lin girl was okay. The protagonist saw the policeman heading towards him frightened. Ife couldn't understand how the injured girl could run so fast towards him. The policewoman was screaming for the mysterious master to take her as an apprentice. Ling rushed after the protagonist. She still mistook him for the master. Ife ran with all his might. He realized he couldn't let the girl see him. The policewoman yelled after the guy to stop. After that, she ran out to the edge of the forest. The policewoman was very surprised and amazed at what she saw. Sue said excitedly to the guy to not continue so much. Ife replied to the beauty that he was almost done. Lin noticed the guy sitting next to the girl near the tree. Ife told Sue that he was going to do it. Police Lin was very much amazed at what she saw and screamed. Sue said she was in a little pain. Ife replied tensely to the girlfriend that he was going in. The policewoman ran up and tapped the protagonist on the head from behind. She said he was a pervert. A puzzled Ife explained to the policewoman that he was only helping his girlfriend put on her shoes. The guy helped Sue put on her shoes. He said she twisted her foot after he left. The pretty girl thanked her friend. Police officer Lin apologized in a confused and frightened voice. Lin thought to herself that it was the mysterious master who could disappear so quickly. After that, the policewoman looked closely at the protagonist. Lin was very wary when she saw the white shirt on Yifei. In a stern voice, the policewoman commanded the protagonist to wait. Lin approached the guy and wanted to ask him something very important. The policewoman pointed her finger at the guy and asked him strictly about his white shirt. Ife thought to himself that the girl has gotten smart. Lin said the shirt looked familiar. The policewoman asked the protagonist if he works at the same place as the mystery master. Beauty Sue got very funny. Lin asked the protagonist how handsome is the mysterious master. Ife decided sadly to himself that he overestimated the policewoman's intelligence. The girl Sue told the policewoman that she saw the master when he was passing by, and the master's very handsome. Sue said the master looked like a classic Chinese with a sense of confidence. Lin shouted happily that the master looked like her idol Leonardo. Yifei pointed his hand in the direction and said that the master was heading to the Dragon Temple. Lin thanked him. Lin ran through the forest and joyfully called out to the mysterious master. Lin thought to herself that the master couldn't have gone far away. She saw a suspicious guy in the temple. The policewoman approached the stranger from behind and asked him to take her as an apprentice. The guy turned around and the policewoman saw the crook with the big nose she already knew. Lynch was petrified and frozen with surprise. She realized she wouldn't find the master. The crook ran away and shook the policewoman that he would never pretend to be a priest again. The Lion hit the crook from behind. Pretty Sue asked the boyfriend, did he leave her to save the policewoman, Yifei explained to the girlfriend that it was an emergency. Su told the guy she wasn't angry. He'd saved her life before. The protagonist asked the girlfriend to repeat the last sentence. Xu Yingying appeared. She said she had brought medicine for Su. The pretty girl was sitting on the bench. Yifei was massaging her leg. Su's girlfriend thanked the guy. She put on her shoes and said she was no longer in pain. Ingen asked the main character if he took good care of Miss Su. Yifei replied that he took care of Miss Su as if she were the empress. Miss Su turned to the main character and said that he did take care of her. After that, the beauty said that the protagonist just call her by her name Mengshin. After that, Su suggested to Xu Yingying to talk about business. At the top of the hill stood the bloody fox. She asked her subordinates, "Does she see Berkut now?" The Red Widow confirmed the guy's identity. Nearby sat a woman wielding a pair of blades. The leader asked sternly, how could her subordinates lose? The blood fox told the sniper cutie that they had spent a lot of effort to save her. The cutie remembered being spanked by the protagonist and said he had great strength. The leader demanded that the paired blades tell her why they failed. The assassin with tears in her eyes said that her opponent was very fast. She promised that she would kill Berkut next time. The blood fox said that Berkut was able to easily get into the minds of the two cold assassins. The leader said that they needed to retreat. Pairblades replied that retreating would be a failure of the mission. Blood Fox sternly said that they had accomplished the mission since they had lured Berkut out. She said that he would live for a couple more days. The Bloody Fox communicated with upper management. She said the information about Berkut not attacking women was complicated. The top boss asked a subordinate if she was back. The Blood Fox replied that she was back. The woman sat down and said that the squad had completed its mission. The big boss was not happy. The Blood Fox was very surprised after this reaction from the head boss. Bloodwolf pointed his sword at the woman. He said that those didn't kill Berkut. The woman sternly asked Bloodwolf, did the man want to discuss personal matters? The guy said menacingly that Berkut didn't have any weaknesses. The head boss said that so far the Blood Fox had lured Berkut out and they had accomplished their mission. After that, the head boss asked the Bloodwolf, can he defeat the main character? The Bloodwolf stood and listened intently to what the leader was telling him. The guy angrily said that he was a former member of the protagonist's team. Bloodwolf added with confidence in his voice that he would kill Berkut. Yifei was riding in the car at this time. The protagonist was sitting behind the wheel. He was distracted and looking at his companion Fanking. The disgruntled woman grabbed Yifei's ear with her hand and told him to look at the road. Fanking thought to herself. She didn't understand why she had a love affair. The woman asked the guy why he was taking her to the main office. Yifei replied that he was simply replacing an employee. The guy thanked the companion for using the ring as a distraction that night. The woman asked the guy if he thought she was promiscuous. Protagonist asked with surprise, why would he think his fancy acquaintance was promiscuous? The woman said she was divorced after 3 years. After marriage, her husband betrayed her. The main character told the girl that it was absolutely not her fault. Fang Qing replied to the guy that he had a very nice speech. The woman looked closely and noticed the protagonist watching her from the sidelines. Yifei told the woman not to worry, and he would keep their night a secret. The protagonist watched with one eye the Fang Qing in a neighboring chair. The woman menacingly asked the guy where he was looking. Yifei explained to his companion that he was looking in the rearview mirror. Yifei told the woman that he would wait outside. The woman got out of the car and said that she was feeling better. The main character said cheerfully that good people should look forward to the future. After that, the woman smiled and thanked the protagonist. Yifei smoked and told the woman Fang Qing joyfully to go ahead. The protagonist looked at Fang Qing with an admiring gaze. The protagonist picked up the phone and called his friend Su Mengxin. Su was at the spa at the time. She told the guy on the phone that she had heard the bad news about Ying Ying. She added that Yifei should come to see her tomorrow night. Sula informed on the phone that she would talk to the guy in more detail when she met him. The protagonist got worried. He didn't realize what bad news could be about Injin. At that time, a girl came out of the building. She asked on the phone to be picked up by Min Sheng. A servant followed the girl carrying boxes. The girl's name was Su Huan. She was the eldest daughter of the vice president of the main office. She shouted at the servant that he couldn't even bring a couple of bags. Suddenly, Huan saw the protagonist in front of her near the car. The girl thought she saw the driver who works in her company. Jiwan demanded the guy to help her carry her bags. Yifei replied that he was just a driver for the company. The girl sternly told the guy that she would fire him if he refused. The protagonist sternly told Huan to watch what she said. When the girl got angry, she shouted that she was the daughter of the vice president of the company. The employee then called the protagonist by name. The employee named Van told the girl that the protagonist was new and didn't know all the rules. Yifei asked the employee why he was here. Van said they would talk after they moved the girl's things. Then he told his boss that they would move her things right away. The girl demanded that the subordinates move. Yifei asked Van why he had moved to the main office as a security guard. The guy replied that he was transferred. He also added that one cannot complain about Su Huan. Wang said worryingly that Su Huan takes other people's men away and then leaves them. He also added that the girl has a grievance against Boss Shu. The main character thought to himself about the daughter of the vice president of the company. Wang was carrying things along with the protagonist. He said it's sad that a rich woman somehow doesn't take care of him. Yifei heard Ji-Wan girl address someone angrily beside him. Huan asked the Fang King woman very menacingly, how dare she show herself in front of her? Su Huan angrily asked the woman He Fang King angrily, how dare this one appear in front of her? Fang Qing was very amazed and frightened when she saw Su Huan in front of her. The protagonist and his acquaintance Wang looked on with great excitement. Suddenly a man came up behind Su Huan and called out to her. The man's name was Chen Mingsheng. He was He Fang Qing's ex-husband. He apologized to Huan for being late. Woman Fang Qing was very much startled to see her ex-husband Minsheng. The man asked his ex-wife with very great surprise, "Why is she here?" Huan said angrily that Fang Qing had come to cause trouble. She told Cheng that she got the invitation card for tomorrow's party. He Fang Qing said with a smile on her face that she came to report back and was on her way out. Zhu Yuan smiled a fake smile and said that she wanted to share the wonderful news. The girl said with a smile that they will get married next month with Minsheng. Fang Qing squeezed out a smile and said that she congratulated her interlocutor. Juan said quietly that Mingsheng licks her fingers when they go to bed. After that, Huan angrily told the woman not to let her see her again. She also said that Minsheng had told her all about Fang Qing. Huan then told her that other men might be interested. Fang Qing said in a crying voice that she had already been transferred to the branch. She asked the girl, what does she want from her? Ziwan said that when she removes Xu Yingying, she will be the head of the company. Ziwan stepped back and said that she wanted to get married. Ziwan said that she would first slap Fang Qing and then kneel before her. The woman was amazed at the request. The protagonist was worried. He looked around anxiously. Yifei looked at his familiar woman. Fang Qing said fearfully that she would just leave. Huan grabbed her subordinate by the hair and yelled that she didn't need permission to hit her. At this time, the protagonist decided to act. He hit the girl with a burst of speed. The man was very surprised. The people around him were very surprised when Yifei hit Huan with a flying kick. The woman flew far to the side. She stood up and said, "Who dared to hit her?" Yifei put a bag over his head. He shouted that his name was Burkut's friend and demanded that everyone stop hooliganizing. The main character asked Fang Qing to play along. Huan asked excitedly, and Yifei, "Is he really a superhero?" At this time, there was a commotion. A huge number of guards ran to help Huan. The guards rushed over and surrounded the protagonist from all sides. One of the guards shouted that the protagonist must die. At this time, the chief of guards appeared. The protagonist looked at the chief and thought he'd seen him somewhere before. The security captain named Hu asked sternly who dared to harm the President Su. The chief sternly ordered his subordinates to kill the protagonist. Yifei apologized to the guards for being rude. The protagonist beat up and disarmed most of the guards at high speed. The head guard was left alone. He shouted to his opponent that he would show him his special skill. The head guard said he would show his muscle strength. His clothes cracked on him. The Hu guard angrily replied to the protagonist that it's time to start. After Yifei beat up the security chief, the guard tearfully apologized. Huan saw her firm's security guard kneeling and apologizing to the protagonist. The Minsheng man yelled at the guy to stay away. Then the guy put a green hat on the Minsheng's head and punched him in the face with all his might. The main character said that he hit Minsheng on behalf of He Fang Qing. Su Huan sat on the ground and looked at the beaten man with great pressure. After that, the protagonist approached the frightened girl and said that her turn had come. Su Huan was very much frightened. Yifei beat the woman with slaps on her ass and said how dare she seduce another man's husband. After the beating, Huan felt that the protagonist had a special technique. Yifei grabbed Fang Qing's girlfriend by the arm and fled with her. The woman told the protagonist that he was funny and asked how he came up with such a thing. Yifei explained that he took a bag from the things he helped carry for Huan. The guy was standing with his girlfriend near the seashore. Fang Qing picked up the mask and said it was funny. Yifei smoked and asked the woman if she felt better. The woman remembered something funny and smiled and said it was funny. Then the girlfriend standing next to the guy kept laughing at something of her own. After that, Fansin cried because of the weight of the whole experience. The woman tearfully thanked the protagonist and said she was free to go. Yifei told the girlfriend that it was very good that she thought about it. Suddenly, Fang Qing shoved the guy to the ground. The protagonist asked the woman fearfully what she was doing. He reminded her that she was being conservative to him. Then the woman put his paper bag over the protagonist's head. Fansin popped on top and yelled to Yifei that she wanted to thank him for saving her. Fang Qing kissed the protagonist with all her passion. The surrounding passers-by looked in amazement at the shaking car on the embankment. On the evening of the second day, the protagonist arrived by automobile at the Loon's residence. The protagonist was surprised to notice that there were many expensive cars parked near the building. The protagonist remembered and wondered what it all meant. Yifei remembered Su's girlfriend telling him about the bad news about Boss Shu. The protagonist went to the front door. He introduced himself and said Miss Su had invited him. The guard told the guy that he already knew everything and invited him in. The protagonist entered a luxurious mansion. There were many guests around. They didn't like that he came to the banquet in formal clothes. The guy thought to himself that he wasn't invited from the beginning. Su Mengxian had called him here. The boy looked over and saw a pile of delicious and very appetizing food on the table. Ife decided that he would look for a girlfriend after he'd had enough. Suddenly, the protagonist heard two girls from the side approaching him. Ife was consuming food. One girl offered him a drink with her. The girl asked the protagonist why his clothes looked funny. Ife replied that he was simply waiting for someone. The girls in evening clothes were called Li Xinyue and Sun Lianyao. Xinyue told the guy that they were also waiting for someone and offered to have a drink with him. Milo, the main character, chatted with the girls and drank with them. The guests at the party couldn't understand who the guy in the shirt was standing next to the beautiful celebrities. At that time, another guest came up. She turned to the main character. Suwan, in evening attire, asked the main character strictly how did he get here. Ife replied cheerfully to the woman that there was no one at the back entrance, and he had snuck in for food. The girl laughed and said cheerfully that the main character is very funny. After that, the girl cheerfully asked, "Who in their right mind would sneak in here to get food?" Su Huan looked at the guy angrily. Su Huan could not understand how the protagonist ended up here and which branch he worked in. An expensive car arrived outside the residence. The guard greeted Mr. Sun. The guy asked the guard, "Are there really girls Li Xinyue and Sun Lian Yao inside?" The guard confirmed to the guest that the girls were inside. Su replied that he was coming. Then the guy went inside the building. He thought he would have success today. Sun Ziqiao decided arrogantly to himself that he would tame two girls today. Next to him was Sun Junjuan. The girl Ziwan turned to the side and looked at the arriving guests with great attention. Juan greeted the guy and suggested that Mr. Sun discuss Huayang's company. Juan wanted to complain to the guest about Shu Ying. The guy's son walked past the girl. The guest said cheerfully that Guy Li is very interesting. He knows a lot of things. Yifei replied to the girls that those two have great knowledge. Guy's son came up. He grabbed the guest with his hand and menacingly asked Xinyu and Lanyu, how dare they reject his invitation. Sun looked unhappily at the protagonist and said that the girls were talking to a strange man. Juan looked at everything going on with interest. She wondered what the guy would be able to do. The guest angrily asked Sun, what does he do in public? She demanded that he leave Xinyu alone. Sun was still holding the girl's hand. He yelled at the guest to go have fun with him. The main character approached. He grabbed Suna's arm and demanded that he get out. Ife gave the guest a stern and threatening look and told him to show respect. Sun looked at the protagonist unhappily and asked who was he. The guy fearfully pointed at the protagonist and said that he was a jerk bodyguard. Juan became curious because Ife was in a fight with Sun. The protagonist surprisedly greeted Mr. Lee Sun standing next to him. The guy knocked back the protagonist's handshake and said that he had injured his friend. Sun told the protagonist that he was being used by Shu Ying as a hired dog. Yifei told the guest that he was not welcome here. Sun angrily called him a bastard. Two girls came over. They scrutinized the protagonist's hand. The guests took turns asking the guy about his hand and suggesting he call a doctor. One of the guests said that the beauties absolutely hated violence. Sun's boyfriend was violent and lost his advantage. Xinyue pointed her hand at the guy and said no violence. Yifei was between the girls. Sun looked with envy at the main character. He decided that he should be in his place. Then the angry guy's son swung around to hit the protagonist. The protagonist grabbed his opponent's fist on the fly with his hand. Sun asked angrily to Ife, is he going to stick his nose in other people's business? The protagonist said sternly to his rival that he started it first. The guy angrily said his name is Sun Ziqiao, and he is a graduate of the Capital Academy. He added, he will tear the protagonist apart. Ife asked in surprise at his rival, how did a loser like him get into the army? Sun shouted to the protagonist that he was dead. The guests chatted in surprise about Ife insulting Mr. Sun. The guy confidently shouted that the protagonist was going to die. Juan called Ife an idiot. Guy's son confidently shouted that the protagonist is about to die. Someone came up and yelled for everyone to stop. The banquet manager Kuai came over. He asked sternly who was making noise and why was he being disrespected. Kui cheerfully asked Sun if he had come to see him. Sun responded by greeting the manager. Sun told the manager that he had something to tell him. The guy then pointed at the main character and said that he was a disgrace to the banquet. Tsui turned around and looked at the protagonist with great suspicion. The manager asked Yifei to leave as he was inappropriately dressed. Tsui said sternly that this banquet is top class. He added that losers who can't buy expensive clothes can't come here. Sun's boyfriend was overjoyed. At that time, he heard a girl say something. Xinyue pointed at Sunya to the manager and said that he was not appropriately dressed either. After a pause, he asked why Sun was dressed inappropriately. Koi explained that the guy's son is a friend of manager Zhao. He once again demanded the protagonist to leave. Ife absolutely calmly explained to those present that he was not a guest of this banquet. The sinewy girl was surprised to think how could the guy get here if he was not a guest. Manager Kui shouted threateningly to the protagonist to get lost. Sun told the protagonist that he was a petty thief and a loser. He asked how dare he flirt with the women he had his eye on. Jiwon watched and wondered what the protagonist would do. Ife explained that he was not a guest, but he was a friend of the owner who invited him herself. Manager Kui said sternly that the owner was Mr. Zhao. Ife was surprised when he realized that the girl, Su Mengshin, was not the owner. Sun said strictly to the protagonist that he might fly out after one word from him. The surrounding guests started to insult the protagonist in every way and told him to get out. Ife felt dislike from all sides and shouted for him to leave. One said joyfully that watching this embarrassment made her happy. The guy offered the girl a drink. Someone approached the girls and asked how on earth they could be in company with Ife. Guy's son told the protagonist that Shu Yingying's girl made his brother angry last time. Sun Guy then held his hand out to the side and pointed to the exit. Sun Guy said that the main character should go back and tell Mrs. Su at the main office that she should apologize to Mr. Sun. The people around him were very excited looking at the protagonist and expecting him to leave now. The protagonist looked long and hard in front of him. He realized that he had to leave. Sun once again told Ife to get out because he was no match for him. At that time, footsteps were heard. A man came up and asked who was here to leave. Zhao's manager and the guard came over. He looked sternly at what was going on. The guard looked around angrily and noticed the protagonist standing there. Manager Kui was startled and surprised by the appearance of Manager Zhao. The man walked towards the protagonist. Tsui asked the manager, "Why is he here?" The guard came over and greeted the protagonist. He shook his hand. He thanked Ife for protecting Miss at the Dragon Temple. Ife replied proudly, "That's what every military man should do." The guard said Miss Su sent him to thank the protagonist. Zhao's manager hit the manager with a swing. Kui asked the man resentfully, "Why did he get hit?" Zhao angrily told his manager that he was a blind idiot. Kui fearfully wanted to explain something. The man strictly told the manager that the main character was a guest of Miss Su. Zhao's manager was very surprised to hear such words from the security guard. Zhao then shouted to the manager that he was fired. Zui began to apologize to the manager. The guests present watched the situation unfold with great surprise. The security guard politely asked the protagonist to apologize for all the problems. The protagonist replied that everything was fine and that his enemies were just a couple of small potatoes. The guard said he was glad the protagonist wasn't angry. The man thought to himself that Ife was an old acquaintance of Miss. The guy didn't understand how the guard could be here. At this time, the manager wanted to apologize to Sun. Without looking at the boy, angrily called out his name, Sun Zikao. The boy responded fearfully. Sun stood fearfully and listened to everything the guard told him. The guard sternly said he knew Sun's identity because he had trained him. He yelled that the protagonist wanted to kidnap his women. The girls replied to Sunya that they are not his things. They have no business with him. Grozny's guard said that Sun Ziqiao was a scumbag in the squad and remained one after his resignation. He commanded the Xian and Sun guys to leave. Both guys were very shocked. Sun didn't want to leave the banquet. The guard told the main character that Miss Su was waiting for him. Ife thanked the girls for their help. Sun Guy was very angry. He threw the manager Tsui to one side and the chair to the other. Guy's son shouted menacingly to the guard that he was allowed even to sample the performance of the Soaring Eagle squad. Sun told the protagonist to make his boss Xu to be wary. From this day forward, Ife was surprised and worried. He found it hard to believe that the guy was trying out to join the Soaring Eagle squad. Sun turned around and angrily shouted to everyone present that he was leaving. Li Xinyue's girlfriend were excitedly and dreamily discussing the protagonist. The protagonist was walking down the corridor with the guard. Ife realized that someone wanted to do something to Ingen's company. The guard turned around and asked the protagonist, "Does Tot feel depressed because of Sun Zijiao's threats?" The guard said that Sun wanted to join the squad but was quickly kicked out. After that, Fei and his companion went to the right door. The man opened the door and told the guy to go in. Inside the room, the protagonist saw a beautiful half-naked beauty Su. Ife was amazed and shocked. He didn't know what to say. The girl Su also looked at the guy in silence. The guy who came in was very embarrassed. He didn't even know what to say to the girl. The guard peeked through the door and asked what happened. Ife very abruptly shoved the door open and closed it so that it hit the man in the face. Beauty Su asked romantically to the protagonist, "Does she look good?" Ife shouted scaredly to the girl that he didn't want to accidentally walk in. Miss Su giggled and asked the guy, doesn't he know to knock before entering? Miss Su went behind the transparent partition and closed it. Miss Su asked Ife if he was too disappointed that she wasn't changing clothes in front of him. The protagonist was embarrassed. He didn't know what to say. Suddenly something caught his eye in the distance. Ife was surprised to see Su's underwear lying on the floor next to him. The protagonist thought to himself excitedly, Mengxin's underwear is very exciting. Afei wondered, can his acquaintance hide her wild nature? Suddenly, Su opened the curtain and said she was ready. Afei abruptly hid the girl's underwear in his pocket. Su told the protagonist that she found out that there are people who are after Xu Yingying's company. The guy replied to her that it could be rich kids. Su told the guy that he had already saved her twice, and now she wanted to help him. She went to the door. Belle opened the door. There were many people inside. Su told her companion that the most important people of the city would be at this banquet. Ifei would have the opportunity to make new connections. All the guests welcomed the beautiful Su. They were delighted to see her. A man apologized for his grandson's antics. Another guest called Miss Su a dear investor in the city. One of the guests asked excitedly, "Who is walking next to Miss Su?" The girl smiled and said that she would introduce her companion to those around her. Miss Su said that the main character was her cousin. She added that he worked at Huayang Trading Company. The guests were surprised and amazed that the small security guard was actually a member of Su's family. People around the protagonist began to approach him and get to know him. Someone offered Ifei a job. A very excited protagonist wanted to ask Su Mengxin something. The beautiful woman told him that Huayang's company was safe and that she had repaid him her debt. After the banquet at the Loon residence, the protagonist came and knocked on the door for VIP guests. The manager invited the protagonist to come in. There were guests sitting at the table. At the head of the table was Su Girl. Ifei looked around the guests excitedly. It was hard for him to realize that they were all waiting for him. The beautiful Su told the protagonist that she wanted him to introduce the two ladies at the table. The girls said hello to Ifei. Su explained to the guy that these ladies were very famous presenters in their city. The main character asked the excited girls why they hid from him that they were celebrities. Li Xinyue told the guy that he had also hidden from them that he was from Su's family. Su told all the guests that each of them should help her cousin who works in this city. At this time, a man jumped up abruptly and banged his hand on the table. Beauty Su asked Chairman Sun, "What does the man want to say?" Chairman Sun bowed and asked the protagonist to apologize for his grandson, Sun Dungeon. Ifei waved a conciliatory hand at the man. Suddenly, the guy felt something and stopped talking. The protagonist noticed Su Mengxin's girlfriend under the table stroking his leg. Ifei saw the girlfriend looking at him. Her hand was on his thigh. The protagonist thought excitedly to himself that the girlfriend's hand had gotten very close already. Ifei remembered excitedly to himself how he found the girl's panties and thought about her touch. The protagonist felt his girlfriend's hand and thought of her getting even closer. Ifei could hardly contain his emotions and thought that he couldn't stand it if this continued. The guy felt like a soldier in battle who reported that he couldn't hold out much longer. The protagonist felt tensely that he might lose this battle. Ifei could hardly contain his emotions from the girl's continued touching. The guy sitting at the table suddenly cried out. The protagonist heard the guy's name Sun Quanon from somewhere. As if coming to his senses, Ifei asked sharply to his interlocutor, "What did he say?" The man stood up and apologized fearfully. He thought that the protagonist was not so easily led. Ifei thought that he never heard what the man had just said to him. Ifei, looking at the girl's hand, thought he could have been a little harsher on her. The man stood up and said in a confident voice that he would give his interlocutor a luxury car as an apology. The beauty Su took her hand away from the protagonist's leg. The guy exhaled quietly and wanted to say something. Suddenly, the protagonist was startled to feel Su put her hand on his leg again. When he concentrated, he realized that someone was touching his left thigh. He looked closely and saw Xinyue's hand on his leg. The protagonist couldn't understand why the lead Xinyue was touching him. He was afraid that Su Mengxin might see them. The guy got worried because Yu Girl's hand moved even higher. Ifei visualized himself as a soldier again. He was thinking about how he would protect the tower. Suddenly, there was an explosion from behind. The soldier saw a beautiful girl with a gun in front of him. She shouted for them to go boldly forward, for peace. The man excitedly noticed how the guy was holding back the shout. Su looked excitedly at her friend. The protagonist looked at the man sitting across from him with a formidable gaze. Mr. Sun was frightened. He shouted, "He will give the guy a house as an apology." Su thought that her acquaintance guy is a deal expert. Ifei thought sadly to himself that he had a formidable look because of the girl's hand. The main character imagined realistically as a soldier being killed by a girl with a gun. Ifei still had no way to relax as he was touched by Xinyue. Li Xinyue, looking at the guy, decided, did he really lie to see her reaction? A woman in military uniform shouted to the soldiers, "They have captured the tower!" The protagonist felt he couldn't fight back, and he felt cowardly. Ifei realized that he had surrendered and could not resist. Xinyue thought fearfully to herself what she had just grabbed. The man couldn't understand why the protagonist couldn't calm down. Ifei turned to Chairman Sun Yu in a broken voice. The protagonist asked the man sternly what the man had just said. The surrounding guests looked at the guy's angry reaction with great excitement. Chairman Sun realized that all his suggestions had failed. He decided to do something else. The man told the protagonist that he would give him the shopping street of Wangzhou and apologized again. Sue said with a smile to the man that they accepted his apology. She thought to herself that Berkut had put on a good show. Beauty reported that her cousin was no longer angry and they had reached an agreement. The protagonist wanted to tell his girlfriend that he wasn't angry at all. Ife saw Xinyue tugging her hand at his leg. The guy realized that his actions were being distorted at the expense of trying to keep himself in control. The main character, looking at the seductive girls at the table, decided that they were real hellcats, while the makeup artist was walking around the locker room and couldn't find her thong. Beauty Sue stood up and told Chairman Sun that the matter of his grandson was settled. Then the girl told Strictly that she had heard a dangerous rumor. Sue got up from her seat and reported that someone wanted to take action against the Huayang Trading Company. The man and the guy looked at the girl with excitement. Sue paced around the room and talked about the investment in the Chamber of Commerce. Beautiful Mengson said she didn't want to hear anything negative in the press. The girl turned around and threateningly asked the guests present if everyone had heard her. The guests got worried. They assured the girl not to worry. After the meeting, Sue told the boy that she had repaid him for saving her. Ife happily thanked the girlfriend for what she had done for him. Belle Sue said that she had already sent someone to notify the Sun family. The girl asked for the Zhao manager to come over to her. The man presented a gold card on a platter. Sue told her friend that it was a local VIP card. The pretty girl handed the guy the card and told him he could come here whenever he wanted. The girl said that Zhao's manager will formalize all the property donated by Chairman Sunem. Zhao told the girl that he would do everything. The man decided to himself that he should try his best to have a chance for promotion. Ife was surprised by the luxurious interior of the room. There were bottles of drinks on the table. The guest decided that a lot had happened today. He needed a good rest. He walked over to the couch. The guy sitting on the sofa felt great. He poured wine into a glass. Ife held the glass in his hands and thought to himself that he hadn't had such a good chill in a long time. At this time, the guy heard two girls enter the room. He distracted himself and looked away. The main character decided to drink more wine, as he was sitting in a public room. The girls approached Ife and hugged him from both sides. The guy felt shy. Xinyue asked in a romantic voice, "Is the guy really their VIP guest from the capital?" The guy asked the two girlfriends, "Are they really drunk?" The girl replied that they drank a little more because they are excited. The excited protagonist decided he had to get out of here. The guy jumped up abruptly and told the girls to wait. Trying to keep his cool, Ife asked the girls to listen to his story. The guy started telling the girls a story about a raven who found a bottle of water but couldn't drink it. Ife then excitedly reported that the raven flew to the river to find rocks with sticks and fill her bottle. The guy reported that at the end of the story, the raven put the last stick in the bottle and the water came out. Xinyue asked with interest to the guy, "Does the guy really want water or want to put a stick in the bottle?" The protagonist shouted excitedly to the female interlocutors that they had misunderstood. Xinyue told the guy cryptically that they wanted to thank him for protecting them from Mr. Sun's molestation. The girl put the guy on the couch. The guests told Ife cheerfully that they would give him a reward. The guy felt that he couldn't move. After that, both girls pounced on the protagonist. He couldn't resist anymore. The raven, with a branch in his teeth, asked for someone to help him find a stick. The raven showed that there were two identical bottles filled with water in front of him. 3 hours later, the raven lay on the earth near the vessels, feeling that he had not drunk so much water for a long time. The main character was lying exhausted on the couch. He was smoking silently and tiredly. Behind the guy lay two girls under a blanket. Ife reassured himself that he had to do it. The protagonist quickly got dressed and ran out of the room. He wanted to leave as soon as possible. Near the entrance, he was met by the girl Sue. The guy, very frightened, apologized to the girl for the inconvenience. The beautiful Sue told her acquaintance that she was done with her work and could take him home. Ife was leaving with his girlfriend. Sue asked the guy, was he bored in the break room? The protagonist replied that he was fine. Beautiful Sue was driving around town in a red race car with her friend. The girl arrived with her companion at his apartment. She suggested him to go together to his house. The guy, together with his girlfriend, went up in the elevator and went to the right floor. The protagonist and the beautiful Sue got off the elevator on the 7th floor where he lived. To himself, the guy thought fearfully that the girl had reached his floor, although usually people say goodbye at the bottom. The guy told the girl excitedly that his apartment was here and thanked her for giving him a ride. Sue replied with a smile that she would walk her friend to the door. The main character was scared and worried. He didn't know what to do. The guy suddenly thought to himself that maybe his girlfriend wanted to come to his house. Ife realistically imagined that his girlfriend would offer to test the durability of his bed. The guy was getting more and more worried about what might happen after the Sue came over to his house. The guy, along with his companion, walked down the hallway and felt increasingly anxious. The main character stood at his door. He was in no hurry to open it and thought to himself what he should do. Ife held the key in his hands and realized that the daughter of a powerful man was standing next to him. The protagonist thought to himself how he should behave with the family of Sue's girlfriend. Suddenly, the beautiful Sue told the protagonist that she was ready to go now. Ife felt relieved. He thought to himself the daughter of an influential person wouldn't do something like this. The guy waved to the girl and said goodnight. Sue went to the next door and told her companion that they would see each other tomorrow. Ife was very much taken aback when he realized that his companion lived next door to him. The guy excitedly asked his girlfriend if she should live in a mansion or a luxury suite. Sue replied that she wanted to live like a normal citizen. Belle said with a smile to her friend that he looked trustworthy, and she settled next to him. Ife said happily that he had already thought of something. Beauty Sue leaned over to the protagonist and asked, "What has he thought of himself?" The girlfriend smiled and asked, "Did Ife think she was going to visit him?" The startled protagonist waved his hands and said, "That's not what he meant." Sue turned around and told her companion that she could believe him. She said goodbye until tomorrow. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend and thought she was very cheeky. Ife went into his apartment and was greeted by Su Yui. Shan arrived at the airport. She was texting her sister Shu Ying. Shan was sitting on an airport chair near the luggage. She was waiting for her sister and her brother-in-law to arrive. The next morning, the weather was nice and bright. The main character woke up in his house. Ife got up, stretched, and prepared to go to his room to have breakfast. Suddenly, the guy heard from the kitchen a very familiar to him laugh of a girl. Ife thought to himself with fright that it was Mengxian's voice. He couldn't understand how Su had gotten into his house. When he opened the door, he heard the guest tell the maid, Shu Yui, not to cause trouble for the guest. The guy looked out and saw a very frightening dish with eyes on the table. The beautiful Su was cooking a huge omar. She told the maid that she should add some spices to the seafood. Yui replied that she would make a note of it. The guy told her friend apprehensively that there was no spice in the box at all. Girl Su greeted her friend and told him that he was awake. Ife asked his girlfriend how she knew his maid Yui. Su replied that she met Yui when she was returning from the grocery store. The guy looked apprehensively at the huge omar he was offered for breakfast. Ife didn't want to eat that kind of food. It disgusted him. He remembered to himself that Su had done him a big favor yesterday, and he couldn't disappoint her. He activated his special army techniques to shut down his taste buds and began to quickly devour the food. Suddenly, Omar grabbed the main character's sticks with his claws. The guy was really startled. He looked at his breakfast with a frightened look. Ife shouted fearfully that the crab wasn't ready yet. His dish was still alive. The protagonist told his girlfriends fearfully that he would be making his own food. 10 minutes later, Ife explained to his girlfriend that Yui owed him money and that she worked for him. Su replied to her friend that she knew everything. Beautiful Su asked the protagonist if he was free on Saturday so he could keep her company. Ife sipped from his glass and said he wouldn't be busy on Saturday. At this time, a chase was going on at the other end of the city. A group of people were chasing a guy. The fugitive was running through the alleys at breakneck speed, trying to escape his pursuers. The angry guys were yelling at the crook in the green sweater to stop. Man menacingly asked the guy how dare he provoke their swimming pool. The crook saw a wall in front of him. He realized he was completely stumped. The man sternly asked the guy how dare he sell life jackets next to their swimming center. After that, the man threatened the crook that he would torture him. At that time, there was a noise from outside. A policewoman ran up and kicked the man with all her might. The crook with the big nose looked at his savior in surprise. The guys were very surprised that a policewoman had appeared in front of them at such a moment. Lin sternly asked those present what they were doing here. After that, the guys turned around and started to run away. They were yelling that they didn't have a chance. Then the woman turned around and looked at the crook standing next to her. Lin twisted the intruder and asked why he was always there when she was catching someone. The crook yelled tearfully that he wasn't doing anything illegal this time. The policewoman thought to herself excitedly that she had been in a bad mood lately because of the mystery man. The girl recalled the figure of the mysterious man to herself for the umpteenth time. Lin looked to the side and saw the protagonist. She wanted to ask him about the disappearance of the mysterious master. The policewoman decided to drop everything at once and ran to the protagonist. The crook thought to himself joyfully that he was saved again. Lin shouted to the protagonist to stop. Lin walked towards the protagonist and demanded that he stand. Ife greeted the Lin officer in a calm voice. To himself, he was displeased with such an encounter. The policewoman said excitedly that the protagonist and the mysterious master disappeared at the same time and were dressed identically. Ife thought happily to himself that the policewoman finally got it right after thinking well. The joyful Lin told the dumbfounded protagonist that he was most likely a friend of the mysterious mastermind. That's why they wore the same clothes. Ife answered the policewoman something inaudible. To himself, he thought to himself that the girl had someone with brains. Lin asked the protagonist if he could help the mystery master show up on Saturday. The guy replied that the mystery master was busy. The policewoman turned around and told her interlocutor that she was leaving it up to him. Yifei remembered that he had to accompany Mengxian on Saturday. The protagonist arrived at the house of Hao Yang Trading Company. He stood outside a large automobile. The guy greeted his boss. Ingen told the subordinate that she had bad news. The girl said that her younger sister was coming to visit her. For this reason, Yifei had to move in with her for a while. The guy said grudgingly that he was getting really sick of all the trouble already. Ying Ying, sitting in the car, said back to the guy to go back to work. Shu Ying Ying told the surprised protagonist one last time that he would take a walk with her and her sister Shan tomorrow. Yifei couldn't understand why the girls had asked him to meet them tomorrow. He imagined himself surrounded by all his girlfriends who wanted him. Yifei thought about it and decided that some higher power had organized it. Fengqing suddenly appeared at the side. She said hello to the guy and asked if he was free. Yifei began to tell the woman with all his might that he was busy tomorrow. Fengqing shouted after her that she wanted Yifei to take her to a place with documents. The main character couldn't understand how it was possible for him to meet so many girls in one day. The guy thought about it and decided that he would refuse Ingen's request no matter how she asked him. The guy immediately imagined how he would unequivocally reply to his boss that he was busy. The protagonist decided that he would explain to his boss that even an ordinary employee like him has pride. Yifei, confident, went to his boss to tell her right away. The guy opened the door to the office and turned to Ingen. The girl at this time held a meeting and tapped her hand on the table. The protagonist noticed how the boss scolded her subordinates very severely for the decline in sales this season. Ingen told the employees that they were not managers, but trash. Yifei listened to the girl's words with fear. She yelled that if things continued, she would fire everyone. The girl turned around and asked the protagonist, why was he looking for her? The guy ran out the door and apologized for interrupting Ingen. The protagonist stood alone in the street. He wondered what he should do. Yifei thought to himself that he could refuse to meet Lin. He went to the police station. The girl was very much displeased. Lin asked the protagonist strictly if he knew what happens if someone turns her down. On the floor next to her sat the detained crook. The policewoman threateningly said that she would beat the intruder with a truncheon and then send him to jail. She shouted to the crook that he was always there when she went to arrest him. The girl asked the protagonist why he didn't look well. Yifei replied excitedly that he was fine and was going to try his luck. The protagonist went to see his girlfriend Sue. Mengchen asked the guy softly, why did he want to see her? Yifei looked at his roommate and was struck by her softness and smile. He realized he couldn't refuse her. The protagonist knelt down next to the surprised girl and realized he couldn't say anything to her. At the same time, an important meeting was taking place in a warehouse outside of town. The guy's son was walking through a large hall. There was a huge number of fighters standing around. Sun walked up to the head boss and told him that he had to collect the rent. The head boss in return asked surprised, how does the guy want to get his payment? Sun angrily asked the boss to help him kill the main character. He held out a picture of Yifei. The head boss smiled and told Sun that he promises to fulfill everything. The guy was surprised that the head boss knew the main character. The head boss angrily commanded his subordinates Blood Wolf and Blood Fox to get busy killing Burkut. Next to the boss were his subordinates, professional assassins. The boss told the assassins cheerfully that it was time for their show. The girl Shan arrived at her sister's mansion. She took a small dog with her luggage. Shan joyfully shouted to her sister that she was now in her care. Ingen replied to the guest that they had prepared food for her. The girl said with a smile and joy that she had arrived on time and would even have time to eat. The main character walked over and greeted the Shan girl warmly. The guy looked at the doggy in the arms of the girl and decided that it looked familiar to him. Suddenly the dog broke out of her arms and ran away. Shan called out to her pet. Yifei watched in amazement as the doggy pounced on a pillow on the floor. Ying Ying asked her sister how long she would stay with them this time. Shan replied that she would stay for about a week. The guy offered to help his guest carry her things to her room. The girl turned around and said she could do it all by herself. Yifei thought excitedly to himself that the girl was embarrassed about what had happened. The protagonist remembered to himself how he once slept next to Shan. After lunch, the girl told her sister that she was tired and would go and rest. Ying Ying said that her sister was no longer the same as before. The dog at that time snatched the fish from the table. Shu said instructively to the protagonist that Shan is still weird. At midnight, Ingen and Yifei stood by their sister's door and listened carefully. When they entered the room, the guy asked his girlfriend if they could relax now. Ingen couldn't understand why her sister was quiet at this time. Shu reminded her friend that her sister was very abrupt last time. Ingen recalled Shan's past behavior and how she made tea for them. In a stern voice, Shu told her subordinate that they would have a fake date this Saturday. Through this, the Shan theories would be completely destroyed. The protagonist was very much surprised and frightened because a date was planned. The boss reminded the subordinate that the date would be fake. She clarified, "Is there something he's unhappy about?" Yifei replied, "That's not what he meant." Yifei thought to himself that if the mass date had happened earlier, it would have been very bad. Guy realized now that his girlfriends might see him on a date with his boss Chu Yingying. The protagonist frightenedly realized that this would be the end for him and the destruction of his relationship with his girlfriends. The protagonist decided with certainty that he had to refuse his boss and stop everything. Ingen overheard the subordinate suggesting that they cancel the fake date because they might be exposed. Ingen replied to the boss that they should find other options. Ingen told the protagonist that after the assignment was over, she would transfer him to the administrative department where there were many beauties. Yifei heard about the reward. The guy happily told the boss that he loved dating. Ingen replied to the subordinate that they would do it. The protagonist couldn't understand why he had made an impossible promise. The protagonist sat in his room at Ingen's mansion until dawn. In the mansion, the girl Shanshan was sleeping peacefully and deeply in her room. All the main characters' girlfriends were resting in their homes and sleeping in deep sleep. Yifei looked at the clock and realized that the day was about to start. The guy, after a sleepless night, came up with a plan. After concentrating, the protagonist told himself that the date operation was about to begin. The next day, the protagonist went outside, preparing for the ordeal. Yifei looked sadly and unseeingly in front of him. He realized that this moment had come. The guy realized that he might fail. At that time, the girls called out to him. The passers-by were surprised by the appearance of the beautiful Ingen and her sister Shanshan. Yifei said calmly that he was fine. Shanshan replied and apologized for disturbing the date. The protagonist looked at his girlfriends and realized that they needed to be taken somewhere. Yifei pointed to a cafe and told them to wait for him there. The protagonist got into the car and quickly drove to the meeting place with Sue. He had a plan. The guy jumped out of the car and thanked Shanshan for waiting. Yifei needed preparations to execute the plan. He suggested that the girlfriend stop by the candy store. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend Sue and realized he needed to take her somewhere. At the cafe, the guy told his girlfriend that he left his phone in the car. He added that he would go and get the phone and asked that Mengxin wait for him. The main character realized while running down the street that he needed to create a distraction. Yifei realized that he needed to separate him from all his girlfriends as soon as possible. The men on the street looked at the police line with amazement. They admired this beautiful lady. Lin was very displeased. She looked at her watch and realized that Yifei and the mysterious master were late. The main character ran up and called out to the Lin girl. She turned around in his direction. The policewoman asked, annoyed at the protagonist, "So why did the protagonist come alone?" Lin asked, insistent at her interlocutor, "Where is the mysterious master now?" Yifei pointed the girl's hand in the direction and said, "The mysterious master is there." The policewoman shouted to the guy to wait for her. Yifei on the run shouted that he would help call the mysterious master. To himself, the guy thought excitedly that the Lin girl was very close to the rest of his girlfriends. Yifei realized that now Lin girl and Ingen girl are very close to each other. He needs to separate them soon. The policewoman thought unhappily to herself that the protagonist can't even do something simple. Lin turned to the side and noticed some couple on a bench on a date. The girl thought excitedly to herself that the only master misunderstood her. She only wanted to be his apprentice. Suddenly, something caught the policewoman's attention and she looked away. Lin saw the silhouette of the mystic master she knew. The policewoman ran after the stranger with all her might and yelled for him to stop. Lin ran after the guy and yelled for him to wait. Yifei thought happily that he had led the policewoman away. The protagonist turned into an alley and noticed that he was in a dead end. Yifei realized that his stalker had caught up with him. Ling shouted at the stranger not to run away. The protagonist asked the policewoman in a stern voice if she was looking for him. Ling was amazed because she had finally met the mysterious master. The girl said with suspicion that the voice of the interlocutor seemed familiar to her. Yifei questioned the policewoman in a hoarse voice. So why was she looking for him? Lin excitedly replied to the interlocutor that she wanted to become his apprentice. The guy replied that she didn't meet his requirements. Ling decided to pull down the veil that was hanging between her and the stranger. She said she could handle it. The protagonist was scared. He realized that the policewoman was about to pull down the veil. The girl shouted angrily for the mysterious master to accept her as an apprentice. The policewoman was very much surprised after she saw the coverlet being pulled off. The protagonist stood in front of the interviewer with a bag on his head. He asked the Lin, "Is she ready?" The policewoman was very surprised to see the real mystery master in front of her. Lin had very realistically imagined how she would meet the mystery master. This guy would be very happy if she found him. The girl imagined how the mystery master would hit on her and she would fight him off. In the policewoman's dreams, the mysterious master would be an attractive and passionate lover. Lin pointed her finger at the protagonist and asked sternly, "Why is he wearing a mask?" Yifei asked the girl, "Does she not believe him?" Yifei, as the mysterious master, asked the girl in a serious voice, "Why did she want to become his apprentice?" Lin shouted loudly to the master that she agreed. To herself, she looked at the guy's back carefully. The mysterious masked master said that he was an ally of Burkut and a friend of women. At this time, the guy's phone suddenly rang. Yifei thought excitedly that he had been away for a long time. It could have been Injin or Su Mengxin calling him. Ling obediently dropped to her knees and started begging the master to take her on as an apprentice. Yifei thought fearfully to himself that he would fail if Lin Qiang kept him longer. He asked the girl sternly, asked the girl if she was sure she wanted to be his disciple. Guy sternly asked the girl why she wanted him to be her master. Lin emotionally replied that she needed a master to learn how to punish evil and help the weak. The guy smirked evilly and asked the girl, is that really the only reason she wants a master? The girl was very surprised and amazed at such a question from the guy. Guy strictly asked the girl, does she simply want to fulfill her desires in the form of fame, money, and reputation? Lin looked at the interlocutor excitedly. Lin was frightened herself. She couldn't believe that this was what her desires were. Yifei pointed his finger at his interlocutor and asked her menacingly, what made her become a police officer? The guy looked menacingly at the girl and told her to stay here and answer herself. The girl didn't know what to say. She wondered to herself what she was doing all this for. Lin fell to her knees. The guy turned around and started to walk away. He ordered the girl to think about it and then tell him. Lin asked the guy excitedly, where can she find him? Yifei told the girl he'd show up. As he came around the corner, Yifei activated his special army technique of super acceleration. The guy's cell phone rang. Yifei noticed it was Ingen's girlfriend calling him. After that, the guy ran at full speed towards the restaurant. At the restaurant, Yifei was waiting for his familiar girls. They started to worry, not understanding where the main character had gone. Suddenly, a woman named Heifang Qing appeared in front of Yifei. She asked the guy with interest, what's he doing here? The protagonist asked the woman fearfully, where did she come from? Ying Ying noticed Heifang Qing standing outside. The woman explained to the guy that she was delivering documents and happened to see him. Shu Ying looked out the window and said that the man on the street was wearing a mask. So he is not a very good person. Ying Ying said unhappily that Yifei was very slow. She wanted to call him back again. If his phone rang, she would definitely hear it. The protagonist realized that he had to think of something urgently. The girl from the restaurant was looking at him intently. The protagonist hugged and cuddled the Fang-King woman. He addressed her with tender words. Yifei told the woman that he had come to save her. Then he kissed her. Fang-Qing woman was amazed by the protagonist's actions. She didn't resist him. Fang-King couldn't stand anymore. The protagonist held her in his arms. Shu Ying, sitting at the table, impatiently decided to make another call to the protagonist. Suddenly, Ingen heard Yifei call her out of the blue. The guy, as naturally as possible, explained that he was late to the girls because of the traffic jam. Ingen said grudgingly to the guy that he was very slow. Yifei explained that he couldn't find a parking space. The protagonist remembered soothingly to himself how he managed to make it at the last second. The protagonist was able to quickly put the unconscious Fang-King on the bench. Yifei ran very quickly from the bench to the restaurant to his girlfriends. The protagonist listened to Ingen but could not concentrate on her words. Suddenly something caught his attention. Yifei was startled to see a girl named Su Menin on the street. Ying Ying sternly asked him if he was listening to her. Yifei watched Su girl looking around very carefully. She was searching for him. Ingen angrily asked the guy where he was looking. The protagonist grabbed Su Ying by the shoulders and put her in front of him. Yifei thought to himself that he should cover himself with Ying Ying so that he would not be seen by Su Mengxin from the street. Out loud, the guy said that he had a couple of surprises for Ingen in honor of the anniversary. Su looked through the window into the restaurant. She saw that the girl inside looked like Shu Ying. Yifei carefully and excitedly looked out the window. Ingen asked the guy with great interest. Asked the guy what kind of surprises is he talking about. Yifei told Ingen to wait. He added that he's about to bring surprises. The main character ran outside and called out to his familiar girlfriend, Su Mengxin. Yifei asked why Su was in this place. The beautiful girl replied that it was boring in the store. She decided to take a walk. At that time, Lin was standing in an alley. She was thinking excitedly to herself about why she had become a policewoman. The policewoman was looking at her hands and thinking about her desires. Suddenly, something very distracted the policewoman. She looked away. Lin peeked out of the alley and noticed people in long hoodies. She realized they looked familiar to her. The policewoman excitedly recognized the assassin among the people on the street. The woman wielded a chainsaw and was known as the Red Widow. The policewoman then ran after the people walking down the street. She shouted very threateningly at the assassins to stay where they were. The leader commanded the Red Widow to take care of the policewoman. Their plan could not be thwarted. The Red Widow took out a chainsaw and lunged menacingly at the policewoman. The Lin was very frightened. At the last moment, she was able to bounce aside. The Red Widow slammed the chainsaw into the ground. The Red Widow angrily yelled to the policewoman that they were finally meeting again. The policewoman scurried away from the puffs of dust and prepared to defend herself against the assassin. Lin got into a fighting stance and told the assassin that she wouldn't let her do anything this time. At that time, a flight with important guests arrived at the airport of a city. A young girl in a long blue skirt got off the plane. The girl looked around and said that she had finally arrived in the city and was on her way to Ingen's house. The bearded man said in a sly voice that they had arrived secretly this time. The man sitting in the suitcase the girl was carrying said it would be a surprise. The girl listened to him with surprise. The man dreamily and cheerfully said that the expression on their faces would be very shocking. The girl carried the suitcase through the airport. The man envisioned aloud how they would arrive at Ingen's home. The man dreamily imagined jumping out of the suitcase and scaring Ingen and Ifej. The man imagined how the main character along with his girlfriend would be very frightened by his appearance. The girl sternly told the man not to show any fantasy. The man asked, "Does she have any other ideas?" The girl dreamily suggested Batman and Catwoman. The man in the suitcase didn't like that suggestion at all. The girl told the man in the suitcase to wait for her while she got directions. She stepped aside. The girl didn't notice that someone else's suitcase moved off to the side, knocked over her suitcase, and stood in its place. As a result, the man Xu Zhengguo ended up in the suitcase that the acquaintance had taken with her. The girl didn't notice it. The girl turned around excitedly and looked for her suitcase with the man inside. The girl ran over to her suitcase. She said grudgingly to the man inside that he was not allowed to move. At this time, the man Xu Zhengguo was lost in the crowd. He was being carried away in his suitcase by a stranger. At this time, the police lane continued their deadly battle against the Red Widow. The policewoman was very tense. She could hardly dodge her rival's attacks. Once again, the Red Widow wanted to take down the policewoman with her chainsaw. The killer swung the chainsaw in all directions. The Lin was struggling to dodge. The policewoman looked anxiously at her rival. She noticed that the assassin had opened up. The policewoman jumped to a safe distance. She prepared to fend off another attack. Then the Red Widow swung her chainsaw once again. The policewoman bounced aside. Red Widow asked her rival, "Is she attacking the lower half?" The policewoman realized that the assassin was stronger and faster than her. She thought about retreating. The policewoman frantically decided what to do in such a situation. Lin remembered the words of the master who asked her what motivated her to go the way of the policewoman. Lin shouted excitedly to herself that she would not run away anymore. She dreamed of becoming a good police officer. Red Widow swung her chainsaw and lunged at the policewoman. Lin reassured herself. The policewoman noticed a huge fire extinguisher standing next to her. Lin frantically came up with a plan using the fire extinguisher and the log. The policewoman grabbed the fire extinguisher and decided to use it against the Red Widow. Lin released the foam from the fire extinguisher. The Red Widow continued to swing the chainsaw. The whole place was covered in foam. The assassin looked around and couldn't figure out where the tench had gone. The assassin waved her chainsaw in all directions. She shouted angrily for her rival not to hide. The Red Widow shouted angrily that the police officer was hiding like a turtle. At this time, the police officer shouted loudly from outside that she was on her way. Lin ran headlong against the Red Widow with the help of a large log. The policewoman shouted to the assassin that she would not hide anymore. The Red Widow was very frightened. The protagonist was walking around town with the beautiful Sue. The girl told Ifei that the guy was taking a very long time to park. Sue asked the guy with interest what happened to the policewoman. Ifei replied that Lin Qiang had never recognized him. The protagonist said thoughtfully that Lin is always reckless and impulsive. If Lin faces a real threat, she might get hurt. The protagonist realistically recalled and visualized the image of the policeling. The protagonist sternly told his girlfriend that Lin would end up just like him. After that, Ifei suggested to his girlfriend, Miss Sue, to go and watch a movie. The girlfriend wanted to take the guy's hand. The protagonist told scaredly to girlfriend Sue that someone might see them. The policeman flew at high speed with a log against the assassin. The Red Widow shouted angrily to her rival that she would saw them in half. The policewoman pointed the Polino against the chainsaw in the Red Widow's hands. The chainsaw embedded itself in a huge log. The assassin realized her weapon was stuck. Lin shouted in an angry voice that she didn't become a policeman because of her father. The policewoman with tears in her eyes angrily shouted, "Why did she become a policeman?" She shouted that it was her dream. She shoved the assassin away from her with a log. The Red Widow fell to the ground. She was crushed by the sawn log. The assassin lay on the ground. She couldn't get up or even move. The policewoman started to walk away. The Red Widow asked Lin, wasn't she afraid of being sawed? The policewoman turned to the Red Widow and said she wouldn't be afraid of such a thing. Ling shouted goodbye to the assassin that if she had been afraid, she would have made a bad policeman. The Red Widow, lying under a log, said in a barely audible voice that she had lost. The main character and his girlfriend came to the Soaring Eagle movie theater. Yifei and his girlfriend were sitting in a dark theater. The guy asked the girl, "Is there something wrong?" Sue replied that everything was fine. The main character suddenly remembered that he forgot to buy popcorn and Coke. Yifei got up and told his girlfriend he'd go out and get some. Sue agreed. The main character thought he still had time as the movie was going on for a long time. At this time, someone called him from outside. Yifei saw his familiar girls walking towards him. He asked surprised, "Why did those come out?" Ying Ying and Shan Shan were walking towards him. Shu told the protagonist that they had decided to go look for him. The protagonist thought to himself that things weren't going according to plan. The gift roses were in the car. Shan Shan asked the protagonist if he wanted to go to the movies with his sister as a gift. Shu went to the movie theater. She told the protagonist to buy popcorn. A frightened Yifei shouted to his girlfriend Ingen to wait for him. Yifei remembered that his girlfriend Mengxin was sitting inside the movie theater. At this time, Shanshan came up behind the protagonist. Shanshan put her hand on the guy's shoulder and said she hadn't forgotten what happened. Shanshan then pointed her finger at the guy and said that she would bring them both out as revenge for that day. The main character listened to Shanshan's words with excitement and fear. After that, the girl headed to the movie theater. Yifei yelled for Shanshan to stop. Yifei thought excitedly to himself that if all the girls were inside the movie theater, he would be finished. Yifei thought to himself with hope that it's dark inside the movie theater and the girls won't be able to see each other. The protagonist remembered how inside the movie hall the audience sat on the chairs in the dark. Inside the movie hall, the girl Shanshan was watching a movie. It was hard for her to see that the main characters in the movie were not together. Yifei thought happily to himself that Shanshan girl had finally forgotten her purpose. The guy noticed that his familiar girl Su Mengxin was sitting right in front of them. Yifei glanced furtively to the side. He figured everything would be fine as long as Ingen didn't recognize Su. The protagonist noticed that Ingen was dozing off leisurely. He decided to open a bottle of Coke and drink. Shanshan gave the protagonist a stern look. She realized that he had asked her sister out on a fake date. Shanshan realized that the protagonist didn't know Ying Ying very well if he didn't know that she falls asleep watching movies. At this time, the protagonist was opening a bottle of Coke. Shanshan looked at him in surprise. Shanshan looked at the main character and Ingen sitting next to him with surprise. Shanshan in the dark thought it was the girl. Ingen reached out her hand and held on the protagonist. Yifei continued to open the bottle. Shanshan looked at the guy and girl and couldn't figure out if those are really a fake couple. At the same time, Yifei was pulling the cork off the bottle. The cola spilled out of the bottle because of the pressure. Shanshan looked at this with astonishment. A frightened Shanshan noticed how everything splashed on the Ying girl's face and body. The protagonist noticed the water splashed on his girlfriend Shu's face. The protagonist took out a handkerchief and started wiping Ying's face. Shanshan thought to herself, surprised that the guy and the girl were just kissing. Shanshan looked at the main character and his girlfriend and decided that they were a couple after all. Su's girlfriend heard a noise behind her. She turned her head. Then Su coughed loudly and symbolically. She thought that people these days are very shameless. Su couldn't figure out where the main character had gone. She picked up her phone and wanted to call him back. The protagonist was startled to notice that Su's girlfriend sitting next to him had decided to call him. Yifei quickly thought that it was very good for him that his girlfriend Ingen had fallen asleep next to him. The protagonist grabbed the popcorn and rushed over to the SU girl with all his might. Yifei sat down on the chair and told his girlfriend in a calm voice that he brought her popcorn and Coke. Su was surprised that the guy was already here. Su turned around and said to the main character, "There's a couple hugging in the back." Yifei realized very excitedly that Su's girlfriend was just talking about him. At that time, the protagonist met his girlfriend Helen on the movie screen. The guy told the girlfriend that he still loved her. Helen replied to the guy that she wouldn't mind if he dated more than one woman at a time. Yifei turned to the side and noticed that girl Su didn't like the man from the movie. Su said with a smile that she would kill a man like that from the movie. Yifei in a frightened voice asked the girlfriend, would she really want to kill such a man? The girl told the protagonist that she was joking. The protagonist thought to himself that he mustn't exactly be discovered. At that time, a woman was walking down the street carrying a suitcase with a man inside. The woman's attention was occupied by a telephone. At that time, a police line ran past her. While running, the police line stepped on a small pebble. The pebble flew and hit the bag. The man inside the bag woke up unhappily to a noise. The man thought to himself where he was. He realized he wasn't home yet. Then the man decided that he was hot and decided to undress without anyone seeing him. After thinking for a while, the man decided that he was a respectable man and could not be seen without his clothes by Ingen and the others. The man lying inside the traveling suitcase thought that everything was very beautiful. Gradually, the man began to get bored with everything. He could not realize where he was. Then the man suddenly heard the woman carrying him in the suitcase say that she would be there soon. The passenger in the suitcase carefully peeked through the hole. He saw a strange woman carrying him. The man couldn't understand where he was, what was going on, and who was the woman driving him. Finally, the man decided to get dressed first. He sensed that this was not going to be easy for him. The man felt that it was very cramped inside the suitcase and he could not get dressed. At this time, the woman told someone on the phone that she was there. A woman was talking to someone on the phone and asked if the person she was talking to was at the Soaring Eagle movie theater. A woman was standing near the entrance to the movie theater and said she was at the location. The man inside the suitcase couldn't figure out where the Soaring Eagle movie theater could be. Then the man looked out of the hole in the suitcase and realized that the woman had taken the wrong luggage. The woman told someone on the phone that the right things were in the suitcase and she would bring them over. The man inside the travel bag became very frightened and agitated. The passenger realized that if the woman opened the suitcase, he would refuse to be completely naked. The man decided to save himself. He quietly apologized to the strange lady. For the sake of his reputation, the man yanked the suitcase open, and it rolled down the street. The man realized that he had to run. Passers-by looked in amazement at the rolling suitcase. The travel bag was traveling at such a speed that it picked up the wind, blowing the girls around the passers-by. The man mentally apologized to the girls, but he didn't care about them now. The man thought to himself that nothing would prevent him from returning to his wife. Two schoolgirls were walking down the street. One of them pointed in surprise at the suitcase. The schoolgirl looked startled at the strange suitcase rushing towards her. The man realized that he had to change his trajectory. As a result, the suitcase tripped on the ground and flew far upwards, frightening the schoolgirl. The frightened girl looked in amazement at the flying suitcase. The schoolgirl pointed at the bag with its legs sticking out and said it was the suitcase monster. The man thought to himself that the little girl reminded him of the girl Ingen, who was also so small. A group of girls in black robes stood at the bottom. The leader noticed the flying suitcase and told her subordinates that she could handle it herself. The leader then smashed the suitcase down with all her might. As a result, the suitcase and the man flew onward with all her might. The women in robes decided to go ahead with the plan. The man fell unconscious on the sidewalk from the forceful impact of the flying suitcase. At this time, inside the movie theater, the show was still going on. Ife was sitting surrounded by girls. Ife told the protagonist that she was a little stuffy and would go outside for some fresh air. Ife told his girlfriend to take her time. As soon as Sue got up from her seat, Ife ran at full speed to his girlfriend Ingen. The protagonist looked closer and happily noticed that Su Yingying was still asleep. He thought to himself that he was safe because Shan hadn't noticed anything. Suddenly, the protagonist felt someone put a hand on his palm. Ife, frightened, thought that he was touched by Injin, who might have noticed him along with Mengxin. The Shan girl sternly asked the protagonist where he had just gone. Shan suspiciously reminded the protagonist that he was hiding from his sister for some reason. Shan then sternly asked Ife, "Is he cheating on his girlfriend Ying?" Shan showed the protagonist his thong and said it had fallen out of his pocket. Ife remembered that he found those panties in Mengxin's room and forgot to retrieve them. Shan said that her sister doesn't wear such underwear. In as calm a voice as possible, the protagonist said that Shan was wrong. Suddenly, Shan abruptly reached up to the protagonist and grabbed the protagonist by his tie. Shan sternly asked Ife, why was the thong in his pocket? Shan asked the protagonist suspiciously, why didn't the protagonist know that Ingen always falls asleep in movies? The protagonist asked with interest, does Shan's sister always fall asleep at the movies? Shan said, how could the protagonist be Yingying's boyfriend if he didn't know such simple things? Suddenly, the protagonist and Shan noticed how they started to approach each other. Shu Yingying's girlfriend in her dream wrapped her arms around the protagonist and Shan. She brought them closer to each other. Yifei whispered for Shan to be quiet or her sister would wake up. Shan threatened the protagonist that she would tell her sister about other women's underwear at Ifei's place. The protagonist angrily asked Shan why she was so stubborn. Shan didn't like being called stubborn. Shan grudgingly told the protagonist that she hadn't forgotten what had happened that day. The protagonist couldn't understand if Shan was so upset about that incident. The angry Shan pointed at the protagonist and said that she would bring him to justice. At that time, the sleeping Ying mumbled something to herself and moved her hands, causing Shan and Ying to kiss. Shan felt awkward and scared. She wanted to get free. After a short pause, Shan's girlfriend shoved the protagonist away from her. The protagonist frightenedly thought to himself that the Shan girl might scream now. The protagonist realized fearfully that Shan's scream might wake up Ying. Yifei realized fearfully that Ying might catch him and the girl in the act. The protagonist realistically imagined what would happen if Shu Ying woke up. Yifei realized he had no choice. He immediately apologized to Shan for what he was doing. Afterwards, the protagonist kissed Shan to stop her from making any noise. The protagonist thought to himself that he should finish the successful operation and date. After kissing the protagonist for a long time, Shan stopped resisting. Shan's girlfriend ended up fainting after the kiss. Yifei noticed that Shan wasn't saying anything and wasn't looking at him anymore. The main character gently shoved Shan away from you. He thought for sure the girl would stop talking. In his mind, the guy apologized to Shan girl. At this time, Ingen came to her senses and opened her eyes. Ying looked around carefully. She couldn't understand where Yifei had gone. Ingen looked at her sister in surprise. Could she have fallen asleep watching a movie like that? Yifei was walking through the theater. He looked at his phone and realized that Mengxin's girlfriend was waiting for him again for a long time. Yifei didn't notice that the door was opened by a disguised criminal with a big nose. The protagonist noticed his girlfriend Sue. He waited a little to calm down. Yifei looked at Sue sitting alone on a bench near the flowers. Sue asked the protagonist, "Is the movie already over?" Yifei said he left a little early. Sue asked her friend, "Why did he leave early?" Yifei said he was bored. The girl said romantically that she felt depressed watching such a romantic movie for the first time. The protagonist sat looking at his girlfriend on the bench. There was an awkward pause. The protagonist looked at the disgruntled girlfriend who sat silently next to him. Ife thought to himself fearfully that he had chosen such a romantic movie by chance. The protagonist realized that he needed to say something to relieve the tension. Ife didn't have time to say anything. He heard some girl on the side suggesting to sit here. Ife heard Ingin's voice. At this time, Shu and her sister in an embrace wanted to sit on the bench. The slightly battered policeman sat on the bench and wanted to meet the mysterious master. Ife looked around and was surprised to see Lin Chong sitting next to him. The guy turned back and noticed a familiar female silhouette on the bench. When he looked closely, he realized that his friend He Fangqing was sitting on the bench. Ife found himself surrounded on all four sides by girls he knew. It was a battle of wills for him. He didn't know what to do in such a situation. Ife realized that he was surrounded by 4 women, and he couldn't handle it. The protagonist looked on all 4 sides. He saw the figures of the girls he knew. The protagonist couldn't understand why all the girls sat so close together. Ingin thought to himself where Yifei could have disappeared to. The guy looked carefully around. He realized that if at least one of the girls called him, they would reveal him. The protagonist immediately had to think of something to get out of this situation. Ife realized that all the girls had to stay on their benches so that he wouldn't be discovered. The protagonist realist imagined that he might be exposed by the girls again. The worst thoughts occurred to Ife. He realized that being exposed would be the end of the world for him. Ying asked her sister if Ta could see where the protagonist was now. Shan sat very agitated. Ying looked at her sister with great suspicion and asked what was wrong with her. Shan replied that she was fine. She wanted to call the protagonist and ask what was going on. Shan was very worried. Suddenly, the protagonist appeared on the bench. He greeted the girls in as calm a voice as possible. Shu Ying turned to the protagonist sitting next to her with great suspicion. Ying asked the guy very sternly, "Where did he come from so suddenly?" Ingin asked the guy, "Where was he all this time?" Ife remembered sitting on the bench next to Sue and thinking about his problem. Suddenly, the protagonist's cell phone fell out of his pocket. The protagonist realized that he was being presented with a good opportunity. Then the protagonist looked under the bench and realized that he had hope. Ife told his girlfriend Sue that his phone had fallen and he would go and look for it. His girlfriend agreed. The protagonist decided to crawl under the bushes to the side where Ingin and his sister were sitting on a bench. Ife happily thought to himself that he could use this small garden to move in any direction. Ife calmly said that he left just before the end of the movie. He asked Shan confirmed his words. Ying turned to her sister Shan with excitement and interest. Suddenly, the girl jumped up and ran away. The protagonist shouted after Shan. 10 minutes later, the man in the suitcase woke up. He couldn't understand where he was. The man had a headache. He remembered that he had just been sent on a flight. The man was wearing only the suitcase. He noticed people around him looking at him and discussing something. A crowd began to gather. The man realized he needed to escape immediately. As he ran away, the man noticed someone carrying a bound girl on his shoulder. When the man looked closely, he noticed that it was a relative of his acquaintance, Shan. The man shouted threateningly at the stranger to stop. The leader told the chop to subdue the man. The man was completely calm. He saw the warrior turn toward him. Then the warrior pulled out a huge sword and told the man that he could go no further. The man calmly told the kidnapper to leave his daughter alone. The kidnapper was unaffected by these words. He stood there holding the sword in front of him. The man looked menacingly at the warrior. He wanted to warn him what would happen if he didn't let his daughter go. The black-clad warrior struck the man with all his might, knocking him to the ground. The fallen man didn't give up. He got up and kicked the kidnapper with all his might. The man was able to hit the kidnapper in the head with his kick. Chop wanted to hit the man back. The man quickly bounced back to a safe distance. The man with the menacing look turned to the kidnapper, Chop in black. The man said that if anyone touched his daughter, he should be ready to feel his fury. The man stood and glared menacingly at the kidnapper. He clenched his hand into a fist with anger. The kidnapper with the sword didn't take the man's threat seriously at all. Then the father accelerated with all his might to attack the kidnapper. The sword warrior stood still and waited for the attack. The warrior swung his sword to strike the man with a thunderous strike. The man professionally and skillfully dodged the blow. He prepared to attack back. The man swung around and tried to strike the kidnapper with an army fist punch. The black-clad kidnapper became agitated. He held his sword in front of him. The man prepared to attack again. After that, the man accelerated and decided to use the fist punch and the tank jerk move. The kidnapper silently and carefully looked at the man. He prepared to defend himself. Yifei looked at the fleeing Shan and asked what happened to the girl. Ingin replied that the guy should leave her sister behind. Ingin thanked the protagonist for his good work today. She handed him a handkerchief to wipe his face. The protagonist looked at Ingin with excitement and disbelief in return. Yifei told Shu that she smiled. Ingin asked what did she do wrong. Yifei told the girl that she should smile more often. It's very nice for her. Ingin said that she finally got a good night's sleep. She said that she hasn't relaxed in a long time because of the problems in the company. Ingen started to talk about the problems in the company because of the hostile takeover. Yifei asked if the girl helped Su Mengshin. Ingen replied to the protagonist that because of him, she got Su Mengshin's support. Ying Ying smiled and looked at the protagonist. She asked him to be her real boyfriend. The protagonist was very puzzled by such a proposal at such a time. After that, Shu Ying sat closer to the protagonist. Zhu said to herself as if she was just kidding. The main character's cell phone rang and he said he had to take this call. The protagonist took the phone out of his pocket. He looked to see who might be calling him now. The protagonist saw that the caller was Su Mengshin's girlfriend, who was right next to him. The protagonist turned around and ducked under a bench. He told a surprised Ying Ying that he would look for something. Yifei quickly crawled through the flower bed. He decided to get to Su Mengshin that way. The protagonist thought to himself that it was good that this flower bed was hiding him. Yifei was very happy that he had a chance to solve his problem for now. The protagonist crawled to a bench and noticed that a woman Fanking was sitting there. The guy realized that he had taken a wrong turn when he had just crawled across the flower bed. Fang Qing woman was very much surprised by the appearance of the protagonist. Yifei stretched out on the bench. He realized that he was on the side of the flower bed where Fang Qing was sitting. The protagonist thought to himself excitedly that he had come to the wrong place. He remembered where his girlfriends were sitting on which bench. Yifei was worried about what to do now. He didn't even look at the Fang Qing. The woman asked the protagonist in a sly voice where he had gone so quickly. Fang Qing suddenly seemed to suspect something. She studied the protagonist with an attentive gaze. Yifei waited anxiously for a question from the woman. Fang Qing decided to ask the guy directly. The woman asked if Yifei had been on a date with another girl by any chance. Yifei thought fearfully did the woman guess. Out loud he said that he simply had business here. Fang Qing turned around and told the guy that she believed him. The protagonist thought the woman was very gullible. The woman told the protagonist that he was very brave to do that to her in public. Yifei wanted to say something back. Fang Qing then put a paper bag over the protagonist's head and told him not to say another word. The woman suddenly kissed the protagonist and said that he was her masked hero now. The protagonist didn't resist in any way. This kiss was a big surprise for him. After the kiss, the protagonist felt overwhelmed with romantic feelings. Fang Qing then told the protagonist calmly to go and do what he had to do. The protagonist was surprised. He wanted to say something in response but changed his mind. Yifei told the woman to forgive him. Then he ducked under a bench. The protagonist raced through the flower bed. He realized that he couldn't disappoint his girlfriend, and he had to succeed. The protagonist ended up running from one girlfriend to another, spending some time with them on the bench. When he was sitting next to Ingen, the protagonist noticed that there was a rally going on in the park. While the girl looked away, the protagonist ducked under a bench with lightning speed. Yifei thought to himself that thanks to the bushes, he could easily come and go. The protagonist had already completely learned the exact route to each of the girls. He was ready to complete his operation. After another move through the flower bed, the protagonist climbed out onto the bench where the police line was sitting. The protagonist thought annoyed that he had gotten the wrong direction again. Meanwhile, the man in the suitcase continued to fight against the kidnapper. After another blow, the father managed to knock the kidnapper down in flight. The man menacingly reminded the warrior of his daughter. He swung to strike. The father shouted angrily to the kidnapper to let go of his daughter. He tried to hit the warrior with punches. The man struck his opponent with his fists, but could not hit him. The kidnapper remained on his feet. His eyes were still glowing red. The man looked at his opponent with hatred. The chop warrior kept swinging his sword to hit his opponent. The man ducked. The already tired man looked at the kidnapper in black. The kidnapper cheerfully told the man that he was old, but he knew a couple of tricks. Then the warrior shouted menacingly that he would show the man his true strength. The angry father couldn't figure out how he could defeat his armored rival. The warrior kept swinging his sword in all directions, trying to hit the man. The kidnapper used different techniques with his sword to finish off his opponent. The surprised man stared at his opponent. He could not understand how the warrior was able to execute the crescent moon strike. The kidnapper once again swung his huge sword. The man managed to dodge. The warrior swung the ball over his head. The man decided to use a tank kick to defend himself. Then the man swung the warrior's left arm with a powerful punch. From the powerful blow, the warrior dropped his sword. After that, the kidnapper prepared to fight with his hands. The man stood still and fought off all his opponent's attacks with his hand. The warrior swung his leg to strike the man with all his might. Only now did the man realize that his right hand was still inside the suitcase. The chop kidnapper kicked the man with all his might. He flew far away. The man in the suitcase flew far away over the square. After a long flight, the man in the suitcase landed right in the center of the flower bed where the protagonist was. The warrior said surprised that the man had disarmed him with only one hand. He would now wait for their next meeting. The protagonist climbed out of the shop near the police station. The Lin was surprised to see the protagonist. The protagonist realized that he was in the wrong place again. He needed to do something urgently. Lin asked the guy suspiciously, Where is the mysterious master and why is he here? The protagonist abruptly threw off his jacket and pulled out a paper bag. He pointed in the direction and told the girl that there was a UFO there. Lin turned around to the side. After she looked at the bench again, she saw the master there. The policewoman was very happy that the mysterious master had finally come to see her. Ife was very much surprised that the girl still didn't understand anything about the master. Lin said admiringly that the master had appeared very mysteriously. The protagonist thought to himself excitedly that he was close to being exposed. The policewoman thought it was difficult for the mysterious master to move around with a bag on his head. Lin imagined her walking up to the foreman and removing the bag from his head. The policewoman took off the bag on the master's head to see his real face. After removing one bag, another gray bag would be left on the foreman's head. The foreman sternly asked the policewoman, "What is she doing?" Lin was amazed to see another mask on the master's head underneath the mask. The girl refused to believe it. She went over and pulled off the gray mask. Underneath was a light blue mask. After that, the girl took off another mask and saw that the master was covering his face with a green mask. Lin noticed that the next mask on the master's head was bright pink. The policewoman thought that it was impossible that the master's appearance could not be seen. The master demanded the girl to stop immediately. Lin apologized. The master realized that he had to think of some reason and chased the girl away. The mastermind sternly told the policewoman that he needed her help. He informed her that there was a group of criminals in the neighborhood. Lin was very much astonished because the mystery master knows everything. Suddenly, the policewoman dropped to her knees and addressed the master. Ling bowed to the master on her knees and asked him to take her as his apprentice. The policewoman shouted unequivocally on her knees that she had already thought of everything. The master asked the girl in surprise, had she really thought it over? Lin told the master that his instructions had allowed her to look deep into her heart and choose the true path. The policewoman said excitedly that she was impressed as the master could detect criminals. In an important voice, the master said that he knew in advance that the criminals were here. Suddenly, the protagonist felt that there was a bunch of people gathering nearby. People gradually began to surround the flower bed where his girlfriends were sitting. The master knelt down and put his hand on the girl's shoulder. He told her in an important voice that he was taking her on as his apprentice. Lin became very emotional. At this time, Master said in an important voice that he was entrusting Lin with her first mission. Lin listened carefully to the master and said that she would do anything for him. They were standing near the flower bed at that time. Ife told the girl that she should help him evacuate the two ladies to the left and right of the flower bed. Lin waved to the main character and said that she was on her way to fulfill his instruction. Ife looked and saw some suspicious people nearby. He thought that those people might be hunting the girl Mengxin. The protagonist decided he had to protect his girlfriend Sue. She was sitting on a bench. He went over to her. The protagonist hugged his girlfriend excitedly. Sue looked at the guy very carefully. The protagonist told his girlfriend to listen to him. Sue was very excited. Ife told the girl that there were some suspicious people approaching now. He told her to go with him. Su Mengxin looked carefully sideways at the suspicious people. Ife looked at the bench and happily noticed that the police Lin had already made contact with his girlfriends Shan and Ingin. The police Lin was saying something very fervently to the girls sitting next to her. Ife looked around him and felt very uneasy. The protagonist saw strangers nearby and he was very much disturbed by them. At this time, a man in a suitcase lying in a flower bed woke up. He felt that he was in pain. The man lying among the flowers in the flower bed could not understand where he was. Suddenly, the man heard a guy next to him talking to a girl named Mengxin. The man saw the main character standing next to the beautiful Sue. The man was very much surprised and worried because Li Yifei might be dating another woman. The disgruntled man thought that he was mistaken about the main character, and that Yifei might actually be a womanizer. After thinking for a while, the man decided that he should stop the protagonist now. The protagonist looked around and noticed that the three girls he knew were leaving. Yifei decided to himself that he too would now leave with his girlfriend Sue from this place. As a result, the operation would end successfully. Suddenly, the man in the suitcase called out to the protagonist very menacingly. The man menacingly got up from the flower bed and called Li Yifei loudly by name. The man asked sternly to the guy. Yifei was amazed and frightened to see his uncle here. The man threateningly commanded the protagonist to stop it immediately. Sue was very surprised to see the man. Yifei asked the agitated uncle how did the man end up here. The uncle reminded the protagonist that the man was dating his daughter. He asked sternly, "Does Ingjin know what Yifei is doing here?" Very agitated, the protagonist asked for uncle to listen to him. The uncle pointed his finger menacingly at the protagonist and said he could see what was going on here. Yifei told the man to just look around. The uncle decided to obey the protagonist and turned back to see what was going on. There were a bunch of passers-by standing near the flower bed. They were looking at the man in the suitcase with interest and taking pictures of him. The uncle stood among the flowers and looked at the passers-by in surprise. The uncle was very frightened and embarrassed. He could not even move. The man covered his hands in fear. He could not understand how he had helped him to get into such a situation. People were standing around and were still taking pictures of him. The voice of the girl Injin came from the side. She sternly called out to her father and the protagonist. Ying Ying asked the boy and father with interest, "What are the two of them doing here?" Xu Yingin looked at the man and asked, "Why is he completely naked?" She asked the girl Su what she was doing here. The protagonist was silent. Xu Ying sternly addressed him by name. Ying Ying pointed her finger at the guy and asked the protagonist angrily, "What is he doing here?" The protagonist realized he was dead. He couldn't think of an excuse. A man looked at the protagonist in surprise. Suddenly, someone called Li Yifei by name. Someone warned the protagonist that he had danger behind him. Suddenly, the assassin stabbed Yifei in the back. Everyone was very surprised. The main character's girlfriends were shocked by the attack on him. The main character started to lose strength and fell to the ground. The woman shouted menacingly that she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and the beginning had been made. The man, together with the girl, looked at the assassin in astonishment. The protagonist felt his strength fading. He couldn't even reach the knife in his back. The woman in the blue cloak was pleased because she was able to reach the protagonist. The man pointed at the assassin and said, "Is she really one of those who kidnapped the Shanshan girl?" The protagonist questioned the man in astonishment. "Was the Shanshan girl kidnapped?" The woman said menacingly. Her comrade also targeted the protagonist and his friends. The man threateningly demanded the woman to return his daughter. Yifei shouted to his uncle to stop. The protagonist sternly promised the man that he would bring the Shanshan girl back. He asked that the man take Injin and the other girls out of here. Uncle asked the guy what about his wound. After a long pause, the man excitedly realized that the main character wanted to help the girls. The man commanded the girls that it was time to leave. Injin shouted for the protagonist to come back soon. The man harshly ordered the protagonist that he had to make sure he survived. The woman told the uncle cheerfully not to worry. She added that no one would leave here so easily. The protagonist sternly asked the woman, "Did he hurt her in any way?" The woman said that the guy would die anyway and she would tell him everything. She said that Stick sends his regards to Yifei. The main character remembers himself about Stick. He killed once in the forest in the Congo. The woman explained that their boss is Stick's younger brother named Joseph. It was he who ordered her to kill the protagonist. The assassin shouted to the guy, "Ifej, that enough talk." The woman swung her whip and threateningly shouted to the protagonist that he was going to die. The woman prepared to strike Yifei. Suddenly a guy with a sword appeared at her side. The guy called the woman an idiot and slammed his sword into her whip, protecting the protagonist. The protagonist looked carefully at the stranger who landed in front of him. Yifei realized that he had seen the guy who had just protected him somewhere and once before. The woman in the blue cloak snapped out of her seat and ran sharply to the side. The woman frightenedly asked the guy called Blood Eagle, "Did he betray them?" Blood Eagle calmly told the woman that she was just stupid. The protagonist calmly told the assassin that she was stupid. At that time, a knife fell out of the protagonist's back. He told the woman that she had revealed all the secrets to the enemy before he might have died. The knife fell to earth with a clang. Yifei told the woman that she had succumbed to his provocation and revealed herself. The protagonist told the woman that she was just as dumb as her blade-wielding counterpart. The woman menacingly and excitedly asked the guy what he said. At this point, the guy Blood Eagle raised his sword to the woman. He shouted for her to stop! Blood Eagle commanded his subordinate to finish her mission, and not to worry about the If. Blood Eagle pointed his sword at the protagonist and said that they would celebrate their own reunion. The woman looking at the protagonist thought that this must be the power of the Golden Eagle. The woman told the Blood Eagle that she was going back to her group. A crowd of people gathered around. They didn't understand why the guy with the sword was here. Yifei told Blood Eagle that they could settle their business elsewhere. Blood Eagle told the protagonist that he was still naive. He said that if he wanted to find the woman he wanted, that he should follow him. Bloody Eagle turned around and started to walk away. He yelled to the protagonist to catch up with him. At this time, the protagonist heard a sudden noise. A stranger appeared in front of him. The warrior in a straw hat gave the protagonist a sly look and asked him if his name was Golden Eagle. Disgruntled, the protagonist asked the stranger who the stranger was. The warrior said his name was Tsu, and he was a disciple of the Blood Wolf. Tsu's warrior was level S. He was armed with chain blades. Tsu swung his chain blade and shouted to Yifei that if he wanted to find the girl, he had to kill him first. Tsu swung the chain blade in all directions. He shouted to the protagonist to show him what he could do. The protagonist watched his opponent with the utmost attention. Yifei accelerated to strike his opponent as quickly as possible. The protagonist was unhappy that Tsu was using a chain blade against him. Tsu proudly said that he uses a colored blade. He is the most famous owner of it. The protagonist told his rival that he had never heard of him. Tsu cheerfully replied that Yifei would hear of him soon. Waving his blade in all directions, Tsu said he had to show the protagonist the level of his skill. Tsu then swung the blade at the protagonist with all his might. The protagonist was able to deflect the blade without moving. Yifei asked the protagonist did he really want to kill him with such a pathetic move. Z asked the protagonist, is that what he thinks of him? Tsu used his battle skill called the Chain Blade of Hell against the protagonist. The protagonist was frightened and excited as the chain blade flew around him. The protagonist looked at his opponent Tsu with great attention and excitement. Tsu waved his blade and said excitedly that he would get the head of the Golden Eagle himself. The protagonist accelerated and jerked forward to avoid being struck by the blade. His opponent's deadly weapon did not intimidate the protagonist. Yifei was able to jump aside to defend himself from another blade attack. The protagonist was very quick and professional in dodging and fending off the attack. Tsu Warrior was very much astonished and annoyed. He thought it was impossible to defend himself against his attack. The protagonist, with quick movements of his hands, fought off the blades and started to grab the chains. With a sudden movement of his hand, the protagonist grabbed the chain. Tsu was frightened and agitated. The protagonist twirled the grabbed chains in his hands and asked his opponent, "Is this really his weapon?" Yifei twirled the chains in his hands and said they looked pretty funny to him. The Z-Warrior was amazed and frightened. He didn't understand how this could happen. The main character ran up to his opponent and grabbed him with his hands. He yelled that he had caught him. Tsu's warrior was surprised and frightened. The protagonist yanked the chain to wrest it from his opponent's hands. Tsu menacingly said that if the situation came to this, he should use his super move. Yifei rustled his opponent's mouth. The protagonist menacingly looked at the warrior with his hand on his face and told him not to talk anymore. At this time, on the other side of town, the warrior Blood Eagle caught up with one of his subordinates. The guy told the kidnapper named Chop to follow him. Chop wanted to ask the master something. Chop turned around and asked the commander, "Why did they take this woman with them?" Chop asked Blood Eagle, "Does he think he'll lose?" Blood Eagle said, "No one can stop a high-ranked man like the protagonist." Yifei at this time crushing Z to the ground. The protagonist pinned the beaten warrior to the ground and said it was over. Blood Eagle told his subordinate judiciously that what they needed now was stealth. The protagonist calmly walked off to the side. Tsu was lying on the ground. Blood Eagle said that if Yifei escaped, it would become a problem. The Chop warrior was very much astonished and displeased by his commander's words. Blood Eagle said that the Tizu fighter had already lost. Chop shouted that Tsu was once the leader of the Soaring Eagles team. Chop held the kidnapped girl on his shoulder. He asked how could this be possible. Bloody Eagle told his subordinate that he would find out. Suddenly, Bloody Eagle heard a suspicious noise near him. He decided he was right. At the same time, he heard footsteps. It was the protagonist approaching his enemies. The warrior Chop shouted in fright. He saw Burkett in front of him. The protagonist sternly asked the kidnappers, how dare they touch a man close to him? At that time, shooting started in the center of the city. People were running in all directions and demanding to be rescued. Another soldier was shooting upwards and shouting at people to get out of here. A cab driver in a suit didn't understand what was going on. He had just found a job, and this had happened to him on his first day. The driver got into the car and thought to himself that he was lucky to get the job. The cab driver drove off and thought to himself that he needed to raise the fare until the chaos was over. One of the passers-by, the driver offered to take him out safely at $500 per person. The guy yelled to the cabbie that he might as well rob him. Suddenly, a potential customer appeared in the cabbie's path. It was a man in a suitcase. The man stood looking at the cab car in disbelief. A group of girls stood next to him. The driver was very surprised to see many beautiful ladies around him. The driver looked at the girls and said to himself that they were all beautiful. The cab driver admired his female passengers and wondered whether he should take them home. The man said sternly to the cab driver that he should take the girls. The cab driver replied that he does everything without any problem. The driver then slyly told his customers that he would give them a discount and take them home for $2,000. After a short pause, the cabbie apologized in an apologetic voice and said he was wrong. The driver told the passengers in a cheerful voice to get in. The man told him to wait. The man asked the cab driver with interest, "Does he think his daughter and the other ladies are beautiful?" The driver, after a short pause, shyly said that the girls were indeed beautiful. The man smilingly told the driver to jerk off in front of him right now. The cab driver was embarrassed by such a request. He didn't know what to say to the man's suggestion. The man threateningly wanted to repeat to the driver what he had just told him. The man once again asked the chauffeur to hurry up and jerk off. Ingen asked excitedly to her father what he was doing. The cab driver asked the man in astonishment what he wanted him to do. Fang Qing woman asked very unhappily, "What is going on here?" Beautiful Sue said, with a smile to the other girls, that she realized exactly what was going on. The man put the driver on the hood and suggested to go and fight in the forest. One of the girls said that the uncle would not ride along with them. The cab driver backed away with the man into the woods. He imagined himself as a pilot during a military battle. The pilot shouted that a fighter jet had appeared in front of him and he was now aiming at it. The pilot saw the enemy plane in the sight in front of him and prepared to shoot. The pilot shouted angrily that the enemy pilot had finally been caught. The pilot then pressed a button on the handle to open fire and engage the enemy. The pilot yelled to shoot down the enemy fighter immediately. At this time in Park Forest, the driver finished granting the man's wish. The cab driver said they were already finished. He asked, "Can he take someone already?" The man smiled and told the cabbie they should try again. The driver was scared and surprised. He didn't feel like trying again. The man turned around and walked with the driver to the park. He told the girls to wait a while. The Sioux girl told her friend Ingen that Uncle was doing all this for their common good. The pilot ended up in a dangerous sky battle again. The enemy locked him up. The pilot looked around the cockpit and shouted how dare the enemy underestimate him. Then the pilot made a quick maneuver and got into position to attack. The pilot hit the enemy plane and angrily shouted that he was now ace. As the cab driver came out of the woods, a man came up and told him to do it again. The pilot in the plane yelled that he needed help as he was surrounded by lots of enemy planes. The pilot was yelling that his plane could no longer operate and he was requesting a parachute. At that time, the plane was hit by an enemy plane and started to burn. The pilot screamed in an exhausted voice that his plane had exploded. The man patted the driver on the shoulder and said that he was now calm. The girl Shu Yingying asked in a stern voice to her father, "What is happening now?" Beautiful Sue said cheerfully to the other girls that she understood everything. Sue explained that they were all very beautiful. Uncle was afraid that the driver might have bad intentions for them. That's why he delivered him to do so. Ingen asked excitedly to her father, "Isn't the man going to ride with them?" The man turned around and looked at his daughter. He answered her that she had told him the right things. The man looked away and saw the armed men. He realized he couldn't stand to see the situation escalate. The uncle called the police Lin very proudly a responsible officer. The Lin told the man that she wasn't going either. She would disperse the crowd. At this time, a woman with a blue cape walked up. She laughed when she saw the man. The man pointed his hand toward the girls and said they should leave. Ingen wished her father to be careful. Lin said she was going to disperse the crowd. The woman asked the man, "Where did he come from?" She added that no one could escape the attack of their assassination team. The man asked the stranger, "Are those the assassination team?" And then the uncle said menacingly that he had crawled out of the pages of SWAT history. The woman stood with her whip and looked at the man in amazement. The woman then ordered her subordinates to grab the old man. The blue-cloaked assassin was then stunned. The man began beating her warriors. In just a few blows, the man neutralized the assassins. The woman looked around and saw that she was completely alone. The man took the pants off of one of the warriors and put them on. He said he was overcome by a familiar feeling. The man clenched his fist and said he felt like he was back during a special forces battle. The uncle then told the kidnappers that they would deal with his fists. The man, after disarming some of the warriors, started running away. The woman yelled for him to stand. The former SWAT officer beckoned the woman with his hand and told her to follow him if she had the courage. The commander commanded her subordinates to grab the man. The woman told the soldiers to capture the Chinese scout alive for her. The woman said slyly to herself that the forest was their territory, and the man would not have the advantage there. The woman decided that she would watch the man fight unsuccessfully for his life. At this time, on the other side of town, the main character was preparing to confront the Blood Eagle and the Chop. Ife asked the Blood Eagle why he had joined the terrorists. The protagonist demanded that Blood Eagle answer him. After a short pause, Blood Eagle calmly said that there can't be two leaders. Ife replied to his rival that he wouldn't believe him. He reminded him that they were once best friends. Blood Eagle asked the protagonist with interest, "Were they really friends?" Blood Eagle stood at a distance. He asked Ife, "Can friends be far apart?" Ife demanded of his rivals to let the girl go. He added that he didn't have time to talk. The protagonist told Blood Eagle that they would discuss his behavior later. Blood Eagle asked the protagonist grudgingly, "Why is the girl so important to him?" At that time, footsteps were heard. It was a Chop warrior approaching the protagonist. The protagonist saw in front of him a huge tall warrior with a big sword. Chop threateningly told the protagonist that he was denied access. The protagonist calmly looked at his rival and told him to get lost. The warrior swung his huge sword to strike the protagonist. The protagonist quickly dodged to defend himself from the warrior's attack. Ife decided to use a technique called the Dragon Palm attack against the warrior. With a powerful blow, the protagonist threw his opponent far away. After that, the protagonist told the Blood Eagle that it was his turn. The opponent looked at Ife without any emotion. Suddenly, the Chop warrior returned and prepared to attack the protagonist. The warrior hit the protagonist with all his might, knocking him to the side. The protagonist prepared for another attack. He realized he couldn't hit Chop that easily. Chop said he had specially made armor. This warrior had S-class. Chop threw his sword on his back and told the Golden Eagle that they were starting round 2. Chop reminded the protagonist that he was able to destroy the nanosuit with his bare hands. The warrior said that his armor could absorb the energy of Ifei's blows. Chop told the main character menacingly that he didn't stand a chance this time. The warrior then shouted menacingly to the head hero that he would take him down. He prepared to attack. Chop ran with his sword against Ife. He yelled for the protagonist to go to hell. The protagonist jumped back. The warrior's sword flew right in front of his eyes. Then the main mountain jumped up from his seat high up to avoid the Chop. The protagonist started bouncing back with big steps to protect himself from the Chop. Blood Eagle watched the battle closely. Ife at this time accelerated to pound the ground with his foot. With a powerful kick, the protagonist slammed his foot into the asphalt so hard that it cracked. After that, the protagonist kicked a rock and it flew towards his opponent. The Chop warrior saw the stone coming at him and prepared to defend himself. The warrior then swung his sword at the stone, and it shattered into pieces. Ife realized that it was too bad that the stone was in pieces. Chop was standing right in front of him. The protagonist prepared to use a punch with the skill 8 trigram palm. The protagonist hit his opponent's head with a big swing of his hand. Ife thought to himself after the blow that he had a bad feeling. Chop calmly adjusted his helmet on his head and said that Burkett's memory wasn't getting any better. Chop said that his armor could absorb the main character's energy. He kicked Ife's leg. The impact of the blow knocked the protagonist far away from the warrior. Chop threatened the protagonist with a huge sword and said that he would definitely lose. The Blood Fox Squad is the most feared assassination organization in Southeast Asia. The organization has been trained by war and fighting in the mountains. All members are experienced assassins. A strong alliance of assassins once defeated the powerful kingdom of Lijiang. The forest is a huge net that can capture a man who has escaped. The leader told her subordinates that she would lead a team to capture the old man. The subordinates need to deal with the policewoman. The dagger killer said she understood. The cutie sniper said the man ran off into the woods and put himself in a tough spot. The blue-cloaked assassin decided to catch the man in the woods. One of them reported that the target had not been found yet. The commander told them to remain persuasive. Suddenly, a man's hand came out of the woods in the direction of one of the warriors. He grabbed him at once. Then the man jumped out and prepared to slowly attack his opponent. Then the man knocked the soldier off his feet with a very strong blow. He couldn't even fight back. The other soldiers saw that their colleague was under attack. The man grabbed the gun from the soldier. The man pointed the gun at the other soldiers who were nearby. With accurate shots, the man struck his rivals dead with the pistol. The soldiers grabbed their assault rifles and began firing in the man's direction. The former Special Forces soldier grabbed the body of one of the soldiers and covered himself with it, protecting himself from the bullets. The man carefully took out a grenade and pulled the pin. He then threw the grenade in the direction of the enemies. One of the soldiers shouted that a grenade had been thrown at them. At the same time, there was a huge explosion. The woman heard a noise. She was surprised and didn't understand what was going on. The man anointed the ash strips on his face and said that he had not smelled that odor for a long time. The former Special Forces man said it all reminded him of the days when he fought. The man was now armed with a pistol and an automatic rifle. He was ready to keep fighting. At this time, in the woods near the pedestrian zone, the former commando was fleeing from assassins. The man ran through the forest. The soldiers chased after him and fired at him with automatic weapons. The commander shouted sharply to his subordinate to stop. The soldier, unaware of the danger, was walking forward and unexpectedly hit a stick lying on the ground. Then a huge stake rose from the ground at full speed towards the soldier. Very quickly, the soldier was impaled by the huge stake with sharp teeth. The commander wasn't scared at all. He saw his subordinate just died. Then the commander stepped on the trap and the sharp teeth pierced his leg. The commander cried out loudly while someone approached him from the side. The leader couldn't move or run away. He looked at the approaching man with fear. The man pointed a gun at the ringleader and said he was going to die. The ringleader pleaded and shouted loudly for the man not to shoot him. The man shot the bandit with a pistol. The sound of the gunshot echoed around the neighborhood. The leader came to the place where her men had been killed. She looked around carefully. The woman noticed that the soldiers had been struck by traps made of wooden spikes and stakes. As she looked around, the leader realized that everything looked as if they were running into the hands of an experienced fighter. At this time in the city in the pedestrian zone, the protagonist continued his battle with the warrior. Warrior Chop accelerated to attack Ife at full speed at once. Chop warrior with a threatening look and with a big sword ran at the protagonist. Ife looked at the Chop running at him with great excitement and fear. Chop slammed his huge sword into the ground with all his might. The protagonist managed to dodge. The protagonist swung his arm to attack his opponent back. The Chop warrior calmly told Ife that it was useless to attack him because of his powerful armor. The warrior said that his armor was specially designed to protect him. At this time, the protagonist hit him with a swing. Warrior Chop wondered how it was possible that his armor didn't protect him. Blood Eagle was watching the battle between the protagonist and Chop. Chop grudgingly shouted that his armor should have self-disarmed all of Ife's internal energy. The protagonist menacingly asked his opponent, did he really think he could only handle internal energy? Ife concentrated his fighting skills and prepared to use them against Chop. The protagonist prepared to use a skill called explosive hammer movement. The protagonist struck his opponent with a powerful uppercut. The Choppa warrior's helmet came off. Ife was still standing on the road at the time. The Choppa warrior's huge metal helmet was lying in the middle of the road. The protagonist walked over to it. Ife then crushed the warrior's helmet with a powerful blow. The protagonist looked menacingly at the Blood Eagle and said that it was just the two of them. Ife looked at his opponent and said menacingly that no one would stop them now. Panic continued in the street. People were fleeing in all directions in fright. The police line shouted to the citizens not to be afraid and to calm down. At the same time, a policewoman from behind was telling the frightened people how to walk. Behind her came a sniper, Cutie, and another assassin, paired blades. The woman told the sniper to stay where she was and she would deal with the policewoman. Sniper Cutie watched with interest as her colleague headed for the Lin. The woman was walking slowly behind the policewoman. People were still running around. Suddenly the woman felt very bad. She felt shivering and weak. The woman remembered that she felt as bad as the time she fought with Yifei. After that, the assassin felt so bad that she started to fall off her feet. Lin saw a strange woman falling. She ran up to her and asked if she was all right. The policewoman took the stranger in her arms and said she would carry her out of here. The policewoman was carrying the stranger in her arms. She was getting worse. The woman cried out. She thought she had just moved a little and had another bad feeling. Lin asked worriedly to the woman, should she be examined? The stranger replied that she was fine. The policewoman didn't realize the woman had a gun in her hand. The assassin realized that she couldn't let the policewoman examine her because she had a knife. The woman then carefully and discreetly removed the knife from her pocket. The woman held the knife behind the policewoman. She waited until she was distracted. Suddenly, the policewoman lifted the woman she was holding in her arms with her knee. Lin told the stranger to get ready because she was going to rush forward. The policewoman then ran forward at full speed, holding the stranger in her arms. The woman felt like she had been kicked twice in the ass and now needed to go to the bathroom. The assassin felt a discomfort and an unpleasant sensation in her body. While in a city block, a female superhero found a bomb in a building. A woman in a Captain America costume stood and scrutinized the bomb. Captain America said the bomb would go off in 10 minutes and that everyone should get out of here. The women ran. Captain America yelled that they had to make sure people were safe when they evacuated. With that, the superheroines all made their way to the exit and the building together. The women started pulling in all directions on the doors. They couldn't open them. The captainess launched her shield and shouted menacingly to open the door. The shield with the white star flew at high speed towards the door. The woman in the policewoman's arms felt even worse. She was not feeling well at all. The woman raised her knife. She decided that she couldn't let the policewoman carry it any further. Lin looked at the stranger with excitement and attention. She said it didn't look good. The policewoman noticed that the stranger was traumatized. She asked the woman, did she not want to burden her? The policewoman thought to herself, annoyed, that she was a complete fool. Lin yelled that a police officer has a duty to help civilians. She ran even faster. The superheroine told Captain America that she deserved her title. Captain America said she was honored. Another superheroine said the captainess attacked with her shield to block the door from closing. The door then suddenly closed completely with a big noise. The superheroine couldn't understand why the door closed and what happened. The assassin in the arms of the policewoman was getting more and more uncomfortable. She couldn't take it anymore. The superheroines gave it their best effort. One of them yelled the door was about to open. The masked assassin thought to herself that this shouldn't happen. The woman excitedly realized that it couldn't happen. The assassin realized that she might lose her relevance. At that time, she was carried by a Lin. On the other side of the city, under the evening sky, the protagonist was preparing to fight against the Blood Eagle. After a long silence, the Blood Eagle addressed the protagonist by his nickname Berkut. Blood Eagle looked menacingly at his opponent and said that he was the same as before. At this time, the defeated warrior Chop was still lying on the road, looking at the protagonist from afar. Chop thought to himself that Ifei could be the master's partner. Berkut handled their attacking team. Warrior Chop thought to himself that everything the master told him could be true. At the same time, the main character accelerated to hit his opponent with all his might. Blood Eagle bounced aside very quickly. He said that Berkut could attack not only with his palm, but also with his fist and foot movement. Blood Eagle turned around on the spot. He thought, could there be someone on the ground so similar to the Golden Eagle? After that, Blood Eagle jumped up. He realized that his opponent was a versatile genius. Ifei took a side and thought he had already gotten rid of the Blood Eagle. The protagonist saw a girl lying there. He realized that he had to save Shanshan. Suddenly, an obstacle appeared in front of the protagonist. It was the Blood Eagle returning. Blood Eagle asked the guy if he wanted to save someone. At this time, he was standing on his sword. Blood Eagle calmly balanced, standing on his sword without falling. After that, the guy turned around and told the Golden Eagle that he was still as naive as he was. The protagonist looked menacingly at Blood Eagle and told him to get away from him. Blood Eagle gave Golden Eagle a stern look and told him to be serious. The protagonist prepared to defend himself. He looked at his opponent carefully. Ifei started waving his arms to activate his fighting skills. The protagonist performed magical movements with his hands to increase his power. After that, Ifei maximized his inner strength to defend himself. The protagonist got into a fighting stance and told the brave Blood Eagle to approach. The guy waved his battle sword around him in all directions. Blood Eagle then dropped the scabbard from his sword and prepared to attack. Blood Eagle concentrated. He prepared to defend himself against the protagonist. The protagonist stood in front of his opponent. He was ready to fight. The protagonist remembered his general training during his combat service. Berkut was very tired after a hard training session. He was drinking water while his colleague on the sidelines was still swinging his sword. Ife, sitting on earth, asked the Blood Eagle why he was swinging his sword all day. The Blood Eagle didn't like such irritating remarks from the protagonist. The soldier said that he was practicing with his sword to get stronger. He asked Berkut, why is he swinging the sword? The protagonist replied proudly that he was training to defend his homeland. The Blood Eagle was very interested in what Berkut had to say. He was immersed in memories. In a forest in Southeast Asia, the soldiers were conducting a military mission. Berkut ran at full speed towards the place where the Blood Eagle was carrying out his mission. By the time the protagonist arrived, there were only the dead around. Berkut called out menacingly to the Blood Eagle. The protagonist was very much astonished when he saw the scene before him. The soldier stood surrounded by the corpses of civilians. The Blood Eagle had killed all the peasants and crew members. The protagonist saw a soldier's body lying next to the Blood Eagle covered in blood. Next to the body of a boy lay the body of his mother. The Blood Eagle stood next to it. Then the Blood Eagle turned around and told the protagonist that there was no one here who was worthy of his protection. Yifei remembered that after the bloody incident, his colleague was brought before the tribunal. He kept remembering the look of the Bloody Eagle after the massacre. The protagonist realized that his opponent was now looking at him with the same gaze as then. Then Bloody Eagle began to spin rapidly in place, swinging his sword. Very abruptly, Blood Eagle pointed his sword in the direction of the protagonist's head. As Blood Eagle looked around, he noticed that the protagonist had bounced off to the side. Ifei at this time flew overhead to warm up his opponent. Blood Eagle thought that the protagonist disappeared very quickly. Ifei swung around and prepared to attack with his opponent's fist. The protagonist slammed his fist on the hilt of his opponent's sword with all his might. Then the Blood Eagle turned around on the spot to fight off the protagonist. Ifei looked at his opponent with great attention. He prepared to attack him. Then the protagonist pounced and pounded the Blood Eagle with his fist with all his might. The protagonist was surprised and worried. He noticed that his opponent bounced off of him. The blade of his sword flashed brightly in the air. The Blood Eagle prepared to attack next. At this time in the city, in the pedestrian zone, a cute sniper was following her fellow assassin. The sniper was laughing quietly and watching her fellow paired blade assassin with interest. Cutie watched the lynch and thought that the cop had fallen into their trap. Cutie decided that the killer aka Paired Blades was famous for her poisonous techniques. Paired Blades is number 1. She has a rank just below S. That said, she's been able to kill a lot of S rankers. The sniper decided that Paired Blades could very easily handle the police line. The assassin felt very bad and was very impatient. The assassin felt she had to let it all out right now. A group of people along with the female superheroes came to the door. They didn't understand why it was closed. Captain America started banging on the door at full speed. She demanded they be let out. The woman named Paired Blades felt very bad. She couldn't hold back any longer. Little by little yellow droplets started flying away from the woman. Yellow droplets from the woman flew sideways into the wind towards her coworker. The yellow droplets hit the pretty sniper's face. She got a little worried. The sniper thought to herself that the girl Paired Blades had shown herself. The sniper felt joy inside her. She even tasted one drop. The cutie thought to herself that she could smell the sweat from the girl Paired Blades. The sniperess watched carefully as the police lynx carried her colleague in her arms. The sniper wondered very much why the woman still hadn't done anything. Cutie ran out from around the corner and yelled for the assassin to hurry up and kill the Lin. The policewoman turned around and asked with interest, "Who was that lady who just screamed?" The Paired Blades felt that she was losing consciousness. At this time, one of the female superheroes yelled to her coworkers to step aside. The female Iron Man commanded that she be allowed to open the door. The female superhero then used a magic beam to open the door. The people rushed forward excitedly. They shouted that the door was finally open. The crowd of people shouted that they wanted out. Every one of them managed to hit the door in time. The woman didn't know what to do. She had to pee, but she couldn't stand it. The assassin's eyes began to close. She felt she was losing consciousness. The woman took a close look at the sniper's mouth. It looked like a container. Then the assassin realized she had to run towards the sniper's round mouth. After that, the woman jumped off and ran. The lynx excitedly asked the stranger where she was going. The sniper watched with great excitement as her colleague ran at her at high speed. The cutie saw a huge amount of yellowish blobs in front of her. The assassin Paired Blades gradually felt relief in her body. The shocked policewoman line looked at everything the woman unknown to her was doing. Soldiers appeared. They shouted that they had arrived to support their boss woman Paired Blades. The soldiers were very much surprised by what they saw. They couldn't believe that their boss could do such a thing to a cutie. After all that happened, the rating of Bloodfox's team dropped very badly. Cutie didn't drink tea drinks anymore from that time on. The woman received a message that Team 3 had been completely destroyed. At the same time, Team 4 had lost more than half of its members. The Bloody Fox walked towards her soldiers. She received reports of the destruction of the rest of her teams. The woman heard that gradually the members of the combat teams continued to die. The commander walked over and saw one of her soldiers tied to a cross. The woman saw a pile of bodies of soldiers lying near the cross. The bound soldier wanted to say something to her. At the same time, the woman heard someone silently approaching her from behind. The ex-Special Forces man swung around to strike the woman with his leg. The woman used her whip to block the blow from behind. The ex-Special Forces man then yanked with all his might the rope that was tied to the cross. Very slowly, the cross and the bound soldier began to fall. The woman jumped up on top of the pile of bodies. The man asked the woman with interest, "Did she really leave her comrades behind?" The woman said slyly in reply that she understood the man's desire to engage her reserve forces so that he would besiege them. The male Exu said happily to himself that he had finally met a worthy opponent. The woman looked up at the Exu man and said that she could not be the equal of the decrepit old man. The woman menacingly called her opponent a stupid Chinese soldier. The ex-Special Forces soldier was very offended by such words. His face turned stony. The man threateningly told the rival to take back her words. He threatened that she would be tortured under his fists. The woman swung her whip and asked if she would allow her rival to torture her. The woman gave the man another menacing look and said that he was really insolent. Then the woman swung her whip to strike her rival. The woman swung her whip and shouted menacingly that her rival was going to hell. The man looked fearfully at his opponent. He prepared to defend himself. The former Special Forces officer Shu covered himself with his arms to protect himself from the whip. The man received earlier severe wounds on his arm. He shouted that it was a whip technique. The woman asked her opponent in surprise, "Can't the man move?" The woman waved her whip sideways and shouted that she had blocked all possible areas for movement. The man barely defended himself. The rival said he would be defeated by her whip like so many men before him. The woman swung and shouted that she was delivering the final blow. Suddenly the man ducked and grabbed the whip with his hands. The bloody fox was very surprised. The ex-Special Forces man had a firm grip on the whip. The woman couldn't pull it out. The commander felt that her rival had become much stronger than her. She couldn't pull the whip out. The ex-Special Forces officer looked at the woman sternly and said that she was strong. The commander angrily shouted at her rival to stop talking. The woman decided to use a skill called the Silver Meteor Whip against the man. The ex-Special Forces officer Shu defended himself with his hands against the whip. The man resisted the blows. The woman could not hit him with the whip. The female leader asked her opponent if he was crying and wanted to surrender. The ex-Special Forces man threw the whip aside and shouted that he would never surrender. The man replied menacingly to the woman that he had been suffering from the whip ever since its owner began to misuse it. The woman was very much surprised and amazed to hear the words from the man. On the other side of the pedestrian zone, the protagonist continued to fight the Blood Eagle. The Blood Eagle used his sword to chop down everything in his path. At one point, Blood Eagle was able to pin Ifei against the wall with his sword. Blood Eagle swung his sword to finish off the helpless protagonist. The protagonist was very scared. He covered himself with his arm and prepared to fight back. Ifei made the most of his skills and threw his opponent aside. The protagonist watched with excitement as the Blood Eagle flew away from him. The blow was so powerful that the Blood Eagle flew to the side, tearing down everything in its path. Ifei thought fearfully to himself what could have happened if he hadn't used his internal energy. Suddenly the chief heard a calm voice behind him. Blood Eagle said that Burkett was very slow. Blood Eagle said that he didn't expect Ifei to stoop to this. The guy threw the sword out of his hand and said Ifei didn't deserve to die by his sword. Blood Eagle, menacingly looking at his opponent, said that he would defeat him with his fists. The protagonist was very surprised to hear the words from Blood Eagle. Ifei asked incredulously at his opponent, does he really want to defeat him with just his fists? Blood Eagle clenched his fist and said menacingly to his opponent that he was completely right. The eagle headed towards Ifei. He said that the latter hadn't misheard him. Blood Eagle stood closely with Ifei. He said that he would use the techniques that the latter was most proud of. After that, the opponent brought his face close to the protagonist. The eagle said very harshly and unequivocally that he would defeat Ifei. The protagonist dodged the blow. He wanted to knock the opponent, but Blood Eagle bounced aside. Blood Eagle activated his power and wanted to hit Ifei with a special move. Blood Eagle hit Ifei with a technique called 8 trigrams. Ifei was astonished. He couldn't understand how his opponent knew his moves. Chop was standing nearby. He was surprised to see his master using Burkett's moves. The protagonist received a strong arm swing to the body from his opponent. The protagonist was startled when the blow threw him aside. Ifei was carried far back after a professional punch from Blood Eagle. Chop said with surprise that his master's inner energy helped defeat Burkett. Blood Eagle asked the exhausted Ifei if he wanted to know where he got all his techniques from. Blood Eagle said that Burkett was a genius. He had practiced with his sword constantly and reached his maximum potential while doing so. Blood Eagle said that Ifei was very foolish to follow his ideology. After that, Blood Eagle pointed at Shan and said that there was no point in letting her live. In the forest thicket, the female blood fox kept attacking the man with her whip. She couldn't understand why the man didn't go down. The woman pointed at Shuya and said that he should have fallen a long time ago. The man turned around and looked menacingly at his rival. For a brief moment, she stopped hitting him. The former Special Forces officer asked his rival menacingly if she wanted to know the reason why he was still standing. Suddenly, the man dodged and managed to catch the whip with his hands. The woman was amazed and frightened because the man was able to grab her whip. Then the man swung and shouted to the woman that she should have used the whip the same way he did. The man hit the Blood Fox woman on the back with all his might. The female Blood Fox was suddenly overcome by a soul-stirring feeling. The woman felt as if an invisible pair of hands was giving her a soul-warming massage. The man continued to strike the woman with a whip with all his might. The woman wished that Shu would stop whipping her. She thought it would be bad for her if he continued. Suddenly, the woman felt as if she was going straight to heaven. The woman fell to the ground. She couldn't understand why she was feeling this way because of the whip's movements. The woman lay on the ground and couldn't get up. She wanted to ask the XU man something. In a crying voice, the woman asked the former Special Forces man why his techniques were so impressive. The woman looked at the whip in the man's hands and said that she would not accept the fact that she had lost to an amateur. After a brief pause, the man cheerfully agreed that he was an amateur. The man shouted that he knew an expert with superior whip skills. He remembered his girlfriend. Then the former Special Forces man Shu shouted that he had been practicing with his girlfriend to improve his whip techniques. The woman was very surprised. She asked, was the man really practicing with an expert? The woman huffed and asked in a confident voice, how could the expert pass on his skill to someone like Suya? The man was surprised at such a question. The man answered the woman formidably that she had underestimated his relationship with his girlfriend. The female commander was very surprised and could not believe that the man had been practicing the techniques for decades. The man decided not to answer anything more to his rival. He took out a cigarette and lit it. After that, the man exhaled the smoke and decided to leave. He was still silent. The woman said in a crying voice that she had lost. Shu left and told the woman that she was not experienced enough to match his girlfriend. On the other side of the city, the protagonist continued to fight against the Blood Eagle. Yifei was lying on the earth. The Blood Eagle said that he who is weak cannot live on. Blood Eagle said menacingly that he was going to kill Shan right now. Then Blood Eagle turned around and started walking away. Yifei lay on the earth. The Chop Warrior shouted very joyfully and enthusiastically that the master had won. The protagonist was silent. He had no more strength to resist any further. Warrior Chop bowed before his master and said that he had done it. Shan came to her senses. She watched with great excitement as the protagonist fought. Then she saw the Blood Eagle approaching her. Shan was very frightened and asked the Blood Eagle who he was. The Blood Eagle told Shan that he was very sorry. Shan was lying on the ground and couldn't get up. The guy kept walking towards her. The protagonist began to slowly regain his senses. He concentrated. Blood Eagle heard the protagonist yell to him to stop. Blood Eagle turned around and saw an Ifei behind him with burning red eyes. Blood Eagle asked angrily, does the protagonist really want to stop him? The master wanted to say something else, but the protagonist ran up to him and hit him. A very strong blow hit the Blood Eagle. He couldn't fight anymore. Then Blood Eagle dropped his sword and started to fall to the ground. The guy fell to the ground powerless. Opposite him stood the protagonist with burning eyes. Blood Eagle lay on the ground. He started to come to his senses. At this time, Warrior Chop began to approach his master. He timidly addressed Bloody Eagle. Warrior Chop told his master that he was frightened by the eyes of the protagonist. Chop said Ifei had the eyes of the Grim Reaper. The protagonist told his master that he would be finished if he touched the girl. Blood Eagle had already recovered. He grabbed the sword and said he was very curious. Blood Eagle swung the sword and said that he would agree to fight in that case. The master held the ball in his hands and told the Ife that they would fight right there. Blood Eagle looked menacingly at Ifei and said that they would decide who would be the winner. Chop looked fearfully at the red eyes of the protagonist. He realized that he couldn't be wrong. Warrior Chop remembered that there is an opinion that no one can be saved after seeing red eyes. Berkut's eyes are bloodshot when he's enraged. In doing so, the guy begins to perceive everything in slow motion. Shan fearfully called the protagonist's son-in-law. She looked at him with surprise. The girl remembered that she was kidnapped and Yifei saved her. The protagonist looked at his rival. The girl wanted to say something to the protagonist. Yifei replied to Shan to believe in him and not to be afraid of anything. The protagonist told the girl menacingly that he will get her out of here very soon. Shan looked at her savior amazed and delighted. The Shan girl was amazed and delighted that the guy was worried about her. The Blood Eagle eagerly asked the protagonist if he was finished. Then the protagonist kicked off the ground and bounced sharply to the side. Yifei prepared to defend himself. At the same time, Blood Eagle prepared to attack with his sword. Suddenly, a loud extraneous scream came from somewhere high up. A female voice strongly demanded to the protagonist and his opponent to stop. Yifei lifted his head up and saw a policewoman. Lin shouted menacingly for everyone to stay put. Suddenly, the policewoman slipped and started to fall. She couldn't keep her footing on the building. The policewoman started to fall down. She fell and covered herself with her hands. The protagonist saw the girl police lineman pitching at him from above. After falling, the police Linu pressed the protagonist to the earth. There was a loud noise because of the fall of the lean. The master turned around and started to walk away. Blood Eagle was moving away from the scene of the battle. Behind him, there were puffs of dust on the earth behind him. The protagonist asked the policewoman if she was all right. Lin asked fearfully, "Who is here with her?" Yifei put a bag over his head and asked in a stern voice to the policewoman, "Why is she here?" Lin, she was surprised to see the master. Lin thought she saw Yifei just now. She told the master cheerfully that she wanted to help. Lin shouted menacingly to Blood Eagle to stand still as the police had surrounded the place. Bloody Eagle decided not to stop anymore. He turned around and started to walk away. In parting, Bloody Eagle shouted to the Golden Eagle that he was just lucky. Blood Eagle turned around and started to walk away with Chop. Lin and Yifei watched them. Ling thought about it and decided that Berkut was the master's name. When she turned around, she noticed that the master had disappeared. Lin yelled for Blood Eagle to stay put. The protagonist was sitting next to the Shan girl in the evening. The police and medics were all around. The protagonist silently and heavily recalled all the events of the past day. Yifei remembered how Blood Eagle had called him very naive in a rough voice. The protagonist was disappointed that he could not fight his enemy to the end. The Blood Eagle said that very soon Yifei would cause the death of people around him. Yifei closed his eyes and thought about it. He realized that he had implicated the Shan girl and he would need to talk to her. Suddenly, something distracted the protagonist's attention. He saw a girl walk up to him. The Shan girl sat down and turned shyly to the protagonist. Yifei was startled and wondered why the girl was blushing and acting shy. He decided that Shan had feelings for him. The Shan girl looked sternly at the protagonist and said that she saw everything. Shan said in an accusatory voice that Yifei was on a date with several women at the same time. The protagonist was surprised at such words. After a short pause, the frightened protagonist decided to somehow justify himself to Shan. Suddenly, the protagonist heard someone calling him from the side. He turned around and noticed Ingen and the beautiful Su girl. Shu Yingying stood there looking at the protagonist very sternly. After a pause, Ingen asked Yifei with great suspicion, "What is going on here?" Ingen, looking at the protagonist, asked, "Why is Su girl and her father here?" Ingen came close to the protagonist and asked if he was on a date with someone else. The protagonist smiled and told his girlfriend that he would explain everything to her. At that time, Shu's father shouted threateningly at his daughter to shut up. Ingen was surprised to see her father here. The man said that he had seen everything. In the end, the protagonist found himself reflected from all sides. It was a three-way interrogation for him. Yifei realized that the man was watching what happened. Ingen told his father that it wasn't what he thought. The man turned to the protagonist. Yifei wanted to justify himself to the man. The man looked carefully at the frightened boy and said he trusted him. The protagonist felt glad that the trouble was receding. The man pointed to the girl Su and said that nothing could have happened between her and the protagonist. He added that Yifei was on a mission. The protagonist wanted to say something else. The man added that he believed in Yifei. Then the man pointed his finger at the beautiful Su and said that she had already confirmed his conclusions. Yifei thought reassuringly that it was very good that everything was kept secret. Shan's girlfriend came up from behind. She called out to the protagonist menacingly. Shan girl said she also had something she wanted to say. Shan girl told the audience that she could provide proof. Yifei remembered that he had forgotten that his sister-in-law could be very dangerous to him. The protagonist was horrified to imagine what might happen once the Shan girl revealed the truth. Yifei thought to himself with fear that Shan might have seen him with the beautiful Su Mengxin. The protagonist realized that he might end up losing his job, and people would think of him as an unfaithful scum. The worried protagonist couldn't understand how the sister-in-law could be an understanding person to his son-in-law. Yifei was frightened, and decided to himself that he would no longer help his sister-in-law Shan. Shan turned around and told the protagonist that he was a match for his sister Ying. She thanked Yifei for saving her. The main character's mood improved. He told Shan that they are one family. Yifei told the girl confidently to come to him for help if she had any problems. Suddenly, the protagonist heard someone asking him to sign. The police line brought the report. She was surprised to see that the protagonist was here again. The protagonist calmly asked police officer Lin what his friend she met looked like. Lin said that the friend looked like Leonardo. She said that he had even accepted her as a student. Yifei replied to the girl that was wonderful. To himself, he couldn't figure out where he looked like Leonardo. The main character turned around and said that he was happy for Lin and that he was leaving. As the guy was walking away, Lynx noticed that a paper bag had fallen out of his pocket. The policewoman yelled to the guy that he had dropped something. She picked up the bag and noticed that it looked like a mask. Lin stared at the bag. She thought to herself in wonder, can Yifei be a master? Half an hour later, the protagonist drove the girl Su Mengxin around the city in his car. The protagonist sat behind the wheel and looked at the girl with excitement. He felt that there was an awkward atmosphere around. The protagonist, together with the beautiful Sue, went up in the elevator to the right floor in the entrance. Ife thought he had something to say to the girl. He shouted after her to listen to him. The main character excitedly said that he apologized for today and asked that Sue listen to him. The girl Sue stopped in the hallway. She told the main character that there was no need to explain anything. Sue then turned to the main character and said that she understood everything. The protagonist smiled and thanked the girl for her understanding. The guy waved to his girlfriend and told her to have a good rest while he left. After that, the girl suddenly came up behind the protagonist and hugged him on the stomach. The protagonist was amazed and surprised. Sue stood and held him from behind with her hands. After a pause, the protagonist turned to Miss Sue with excitement and shyness. The beautiful Sue was standing behind the guy. She said that she had envisioned something before coming here. The girl excitedly told the guy that she was completely perplexed. Beautiful Sue was very excited. She wanted to say something to the main character. Sue told the main character shyly that she had feelings for him. The protagonist tried not to show his emotions. He thought about the girl's words. Ife was very much taken aback. He didn't expect such words from Sue's girlfriend. Beauty Sue, standing behind the protagonist, said that she had been watching him from the moment he pulled her out of the forest. The girl told the main character that he was calm, creative, and skillful. Beautiful Sue recalled the time of the military mission. She said Ife saved her life at the most important moment. Sue told the protagonist that girls are attracted to coolness and creativity. The girl told the protagonist that he was also very simple and reserved. Sue, standing behind the guy, told him that he was the perfect man a woman could only dream of. Ife replied calmly to the girlfriend that he was not as impressive as she described him. The hero told his girlfriend calmly that he was doing his job when he saved her. Ife lit a cigarette. He told the girlfriend that he has bad habits, and he is not as good as the girlfriend imagines him to be. Ife explained to his girlfriend that Sue had created the perfect image of the man who saved her, but her savior is not like the main character. Sue's girlfriend listened to the main character's explanation with very great excitement. In the end, the beautiful Sue, as calmly as possible, told the guy that she understood everything. Sue excitedly asked the main character if she could consider his words as rejection. Ife looked at the beauty girl and realized that he was an idiot after what he said. Beauty Sue told the protagonist in a humble voice that he already has a girlfriend Injin. The protagonist was very worried. He decided to explain everything to Sue at once. Ife explained his relationship with Shu Ying in detail for 10 minutes. Sue asked the protagonist if his relationship with Ying was fake. Ife explained that he often faced scrutiny from his sister-in-law Shan. Suddenly, the beautiful Sue laughed something of her own. Ife asked the girl, "What's wrong?" Sue turned to the protagonist and told him with a smile that she still has a chance. Ife told the girl not to fool around. Sue replied that she was only joking. Then the protagonist jumped outside. Ife thought excitedly to himself that he didn't realize Sue had feelings for him. The protagonist noticed people with a threatening aura outside the house. He figured these agents were guarding Miss Sue. The protagonist realized that he had an important decision to make because of the appearance of the Blood Eagle. Ife decided confidently to himself that it was time to visit someone. The next day, the protagonist was at his home chatting with his maid, Shui Yui. Ife had breakfast and told the maid to look after the house. Yui cleaned the house. Ife told the maid that he would not be back for dinner, and that she should only cook for herself. The maid thought sadly to herself that she knitted a scarf, but she doesn't know if it will fit the main character. The Yui girl decided to go out and buy croquettes first. The salesman at the fish shop greeted Shu Yui girl with the goods. After shopping, the girl walked home along with her bag. She decided that it was enough. Suddenly, Shu Yui heard someone from outside on the street calling her. Shu Yui was surprised and frightened when she saw her friend Cao Yue. Cao and her friend approached Yue, and she asked where she had been all this time. Cao asked her friend rudely, "Did she wear a maid's costume to seduce men?" Cao looked in the grocery bag and noticed a yellow scarf. Cao and her friend took the scarf out of the bag and looked at it. The girl said it was very ugly. Cao said with a chuckle that the scarf was meant for a homeless person. His girlfriend shouted that not even a bum would want such a scarf. Cao asked the maid rudely, "Is her boyfriend really very ugly?" Shu Yu replied in a frightened voice that her boyfriend was very ugly. Suddenly, a police Lin appeared. She spoke sternly to the girls. Lin asked Cao and her girlfriend what they were doing here and told them to stop. The main character arrived at Sinyoi Tea House. He asked if Joe Boyu is here. The receptionist replied to the protagonist that Mr. Joe was in room 403. The protagonist went up the floor and found the right door where Mr. Joe was. He opened the door and heard someone calling his name. Mr. Joe was sitting in a chair with glasses. He told Golden Eagle that he had finally come to meet him. The protagonist looked carefully at his interlocutor. He called him by the name of Joe Boyu. Yifei thought that the Soaring Eagle Squad is known as the elite of the intelligence services. Even political figures think so. That said, the influential people of Huaxia know that there is a more specialized service more powerful than the Soaring Eagle Squad. The team is made up of former Soaring Eagle leaders called Phantoms. There are only 10 members in the team. There are very few people who could be qualified to join the team. Mr. Joe said grudgingly to the protagonist to take his time, if he only saw him now. Yifei sat down in the chair and said that he always wanted to solve problems on his own. The protagonist, along with Mr. Joe, were sitting at a table with food. The man told the protagonist that if he settled down, he would die of boredom. Mr. Joe fixed his glasses and demanded that the guy tell what happened. The boy took the cup of drink and said he'd seen the blood eagle. Such words frightened Mr. Joe very much. He got very worried. Out of fear, a very exciting aura began to appear around Mr. Joe. Yifei told his interlocutor not to emit a murderous aura, as it was very frightening. Mr. Joe calmed down and asked for the protagonist to continue. Yifei revealed that he had accidentally ruined Xianzhen's plans. After that, the Blood Eagle came to look for him. The protagonist asked the man if the man had arrived in the city on a tip-off. Mr. Joe said that news of the main character's whereabouts had leaked out. Yifei became very worried. The man said that it was all arranged by the Saint and the Blood Eagle. He added that the branch and the Holy Martial Organization knew about the news. The protagonist got curious and worried. He asked again which saint was Mr. Joe talking about. Mr. Joe told the protagonist that he was a threat to the two organizations. The man told the surprised protagonist that a woman from the organization could sympathize with him and make his life easier. Yifei told an excited and frightened man that he had seen the woman a couple of times. Mr. Joe asked suspiciously to the protagonist, "So why is the man so tense?" The protagonist thought to himself. He remembered the mysterious woman. Yifei answered the man in a calm voice that it was all because of his mission. Mr. Joe told the guy that he would be an idiot if he believed him. At this time, the protagonist's cell phone suddenly rang. The guy took his phone out of his pocket and noticed that his girlfriend Ingen was calling him. The protagonist turned on the connection and greeted his girlfriend in a calm voice. Shu Yingying asked Li Yifei in a fierce voice where he had disappeared to. Yifei explained to his girlfriend that he had met a coworker. Ingen angrily demanded that the protagonist give the phone to his coworker. Yifei handed the man the phone and asked him to help him out. Mr. Joe took the phone and greeted Ingen's interlocutor. The man gave his name in a soft voice and identified himself as Yifei's coworker. Shu greeted the man. Yingying explained to the man that she was worried about the guy after he was kidnapped the other day. Joe replied to the girl that he would let Yifei go very soon. After the conversation, the man Joe said goodbye to the girl Shu Yingying. Joe said that the family was involved and targeted by the Blood Eagle. He asked why didn't Yifei say before. The protagonist angrily shouted that this is not how a man should behave just to protect someone. After a short pause, Yifei sternly asked the man what was the result of the Blood Eagle investigation. The man waited for a while and decided to tell the protagonist everything. 10 minutes later, the protagonist was walking down the street. There were a lot of people around him. The guy thoughtfully recalled his recent important conversation with Zhao. Yifei remembered Joe's words that the Blood Eagle had evaded investigation. The man told the guy not to worry about safety anymore. He added that he would assign a team to protect him. The protagonist suddenly heard a policewoman tell someone not to move. Yifei saw his maid along with the policewoman. Lin told the girls to apologize to Shu Yui. After apologizing, the girls ran away. Lin comforted the crying and scared maid. The policewoman said that Shu Yui should be brave and courageous. Lin said that she had been harassed by bullies as a child and had practiced to fight back. The maid thanked the policewoman very warmly for her help. Shui Yui bowed to the policewoman and said she had to go take care of business. The policewoman thought to herself, did she say something wrong to the maid? The protagonist listened as the policewoman told herself that she should have asked about the maid's business from him. In the evening, in an abandoned warehouse, the big boss was interrogating a woman. A woman called Blood Fox was sitting tied up. The big boss condemned her for failing. The boss reminded the Blood Fox of the consequences of failure, according to the organization's rules. The woman threateningly shouted to the boss that it wasn't all her fault. Blood Wolf had also failed. At that time, the warrior Blood Eagle approached the woman and removed the blindfold from her eyes. The woman saw the formidable Blood Eagle and the main boss in the chair. The woman was surprised and worried when she saw the Blood Wolf right in front of her. The Bloody Eagle told the woman that she had failed along with her underlings. The eagle said menacingly that the underlings had failed to kill even one member of the Burkut family. The Bloody Fox shouted in a frightened voice for the guy to wait. The Blood Eagle, with a formidable gaze, swung his sword to strike the woman. The deadly sword blade whistled over the Blood Fox's head. The woman was startled to realize she was alive. The boy spared her. Blood Wolf asked the boss to keep the woman alive so she could redeem herself. Then the guy put his sword in its scabbard. The woman was saved. The guy told the boss that people can be given a chance to redeem themselves and the woman can be given another chance. The Blood Fox asked, frightened and surprised, "Is she free?" Big Boss told Blood Wolf that he was free to go. The Blood Wolf silently turned around and headed for the exit. The woman was still sitting tied on her knees. The Blood Fox thanked the Big Boss for keeping her alive. The The head boss wanted to tell the girl why he had assigned the Blood Wolf to this mission. The man explained that he wanted to test the guy's loyalty, and the mission was a good opportunity to test him. The main boss said confidently that everything looked like Blood Wolf had passed. In the evening, the protagonist arrived at the luxurious house of the girl Shu Ying. Ying met the guy in a romantic outfit and greeted him. The protagonist was very frightened and embarrassed when he saw his girlfriend. The guy stood in the entrance. He looked at Ingen's girlfriend and couldn't say anything. After that, Ifei wanted to leave. He said he had the wrong door. Ingen demanded that the boyfriend come back. Ifei asked the girlfriend, why did she suddenly dress up? Ingen explained that it was her mistake yesterday and she was wrong. Shu Ying smiled at the protagonist and said she was dressed like that because of the Shan parents. Schumann hurried the protagonist to sit down at the table. After dinner, the man handed the protagonist a box and said it was a present for him. Yifei opened the box and asked what it was. The Manchu told the protagonist that it was a new whip. The protagonist and his girlfriend and Manchu decided to have a drink after dinner. At dessert, the guy and his girlfriend watched TV. They were having fun. Ying was getting more and more drunk. Shan watched her sister with excitement. At the end of dinner, Shungin's girlfriend said in a weak voice that she was already very drunk. Ying was lying on the bed the main. Hiro asked the girl why did uncle gave him a whip. Ifei turned around and started to leave. He told the girl that they would lie down early tonight. Shu Ying, lying on the bed, said excitedly to the protagonist if he wanted to sleep with her tonight. Ying looked at the protagonist with an excited look. Ifei was looking at Ingen's breasts intently and uninterruptedly. Ingen, lying on her side, said romantically to the guy to be bolder. The protagonist was surprised and amazed at the change in his girlfriend's character. The protagonist thought to himself that Shu Ying was not usually like this. Yifei couldn't understand where the usual icy and unapproachable Ying had gone. Yifei could smell alcohol in the girl's breath. Ingen told the protagonist that she thought he was handsome now. She asked if he wanted to sleep with her. Yifei was scared and excited, thinking to himself, is this the Ingen he knew? After that, Ying girl couldn't hold onto the bed and fell to the floor. Schumann said in a tired voice that Yifei could drink. Shan told her father that he had a bad tolerance for alcohol. He said that Ying is like we are a different person when he drinks. Shan recalled how Ying behaved when she got drunk in high school. The man heard some sounds coming from Ingen's room. She figured that the girl was already having fun with the main character. Gai Shu walked to the door. He figured he wouldn't even be surprised if he saw something. Yifei stood by the girl and asked why the girl was so frivolous. Shan and her father bounced sharply away from the door. The protagonist noticed that his whip was tangled. Schumann was very surprised and scared. He thought that the protagonist wanted to put the whip into Ying's mouth. After that, the XU man decided to look into the room to see how far Ingen would go with the main character. The man along with the girl saw Ingen sitting on top of the protagonist and demanding that he listen to her. He was very much astonished because of the fact that Ingen wanted to put the whip into Yifei from the other side. The guy thought it was outrageous and he ran away. The protagonist yelled at the man that he had it all wrong. On top of him sat Ingen. Late at night in the garden under the stars, the protagonist walked around looking for Manchu. Suddenly, Yifei felt excitedly that he had a sense of déjà vu. The guy heard some girl nearby scolding Shu Yui for seducing her boyfriend. Cao yelled at the maid to teach her a lesson. Shu Yui yelled for the attackers to stop. The protagonist noticed Cao's girlfriend and remembered that she had seduced him the other day. Cao pulled a scarf out of the maid's bag. She asked if Shu Yui knitted this scarf for her boyfriend. Cao asked the maid with a chuckle if she thought her scarf was ugly. Another girl asked Shu Yu menacingly, does she really like this scarf? Shu Yu's maid looked at the girl standing next to her with great excitement and fear. Her girlfriend was holding the scarf in her hands. The maid said that the scarf was really ugly. Cao and her girlfriend stretched the yellow balloon. Cao said angrily that the scarf was useless. Then Cao and her friend tore the yellow scarf to pieces. Shu Yu was frightened and hurt. The maid looked at the scarf she had tied with a tragic look. The guy pointed his finger at the maid and laughed. The girl yelled out that it was really funny. The guy pulled out his phone and offered to take some pictures as a souvenir. Cao confirmed that it was a great idea. He started taking pictures with his girlfriends next to the maid Shu Yui. The protagonist intervened. He hit the guy with a leg kick. The protagonist looked at the fallen guy with a fierce and glittering gaze. Yifei stood on earth. The frightened girl Cao and her girlfriend stood next to Shu Yui. The protagonist looked menacingly at Cao and her girlfriend and sternly told them to stop. 15 minutes later, the protagonist successfully beat up his maid's abusers. Yifei finished his work and walked up to his frightened maid Shu Yui. The guy saw the maid sitting on the earth. There was a torn scarf lying next to her. Yifei picked up the scarf and asked the maid calmly, did she tie it up? The protagonist told his maid Shu Yui that the scarf was very nice. The maid was still very scared. She couldn't say a word to the protagonist. Because of her emotions, the maid couldn't hold back and cried. The maid tearfully asked Yifei not to cheer her up. She asked, did she really knit an ugly scarf? The protagonist said excitedly to the girl Shu Yui not to cry. The protagonist calmed down a bit. He decided to say nice things to his maid Shu Yu. Ifei picked up the scarf and told the girl that he looked a lot like her. Protagonist said in a dreamy voice that he was adrift and couldn't say no to others. Ifei remembered how the beautiful Sue called him to keep her company on Saturday. There was an occasion when the protagonist apologized to the girl Injin since he was busy. Ifei said that he likes to be the center of attention and adapts to others to avoid the attention. Ifei recalled one of his many encounters with the cheerful policewoman Lin. The protagonist said he was making a point. He added that the scarf was definitely not a piece of trash. The guy smiled and wanted to say his opinion about the scarf from the maid. Ifei told the surprised maid that she had knitted a very beautiful scarf. Shui Yui still had tears in her eyes. The protagonist offered to mend the scarf for the maid he knew. They sat on the ground by the light of a lantern. Shui Yui was surprised to see the pieces of the scarf rise up from the ground and begin to swirl around. The maid raised her hand up in surprise. She was surprised that there was a breeze. Ifei was holding the end of the scarf at the time. Shui Yui tearfully told the guy that she would knit a new scarf for him. Ifei looked at the maid carefully and told her not to do that. The guy slyly told Shu Yui's girlfriend not to give up so easily. After that, the main character grabbed the ends of the scarf and started waving them around. The girl looked at Ifei with surprise. The main character waved the pieces of scarf in all directions, tying them together. Shu Yui sat on the earth. She noticed that the protagonist had completely recreated an entire scarf canvas. The maid watched with great surprise as the yellow cloth swirled around her in the air. Wei Yui noticed with great surprise as the protagonist took out 2 needles and prepared to knit. Ifei used a special service skill called Guanyin to knit quickly with the needles. The maid noticed with amazement how the protagonist created a new scarf very quickly from the fabric. Ifei held out the scarf to his maid and told her that he had finished knitting it. The protagonist held out in his hands a brand new and undamaged scarf for Shu Yui. Ifei, holding the scarf in his hands, told the girl that he knew who she wanted to give it to. The guy said that if the recipient of the scarf would not accept it, he would teach him good manners. Ifei thought happily to himself that it was very good that he had learned the skill of knitting in the army. He could not figure out to whom the maid had knitted it. After that, the maid took the scarf in her hands and hung it around the neck of the protagonist. The maid looked away in a shy voice and said that she wanted to give the scarf to Ifei. The protagonist was amazed. He couldn't believe that Shu Yu wanted to give him such a gift. The protagonist was happy. He came to his senses and decided to thank the maid. Ifei put his hand on the maid's head and thanked her for her effort. The maid looked at the protagonist with a very happy look. Ifei stood opposite the girl. There was an awkward and long pause. Suddenly, the protagonist heard his cell phone ring. Ifei picked up the phone excitedly. Mr. Joe was calling him. Mr. Joe told the protagonist seriously that he had a team sent to him. The professional fighters were on the plane. Joe told the protagonist that he would recognize them when they arrived. The next day, a plane was arriving at the airport. The protagonist and his girlfriends went to the airport to meet them. The protagonist was at the airport with Ying Ying and the girl Shan Shan. Ifei thought grudgingly to himself that the girls had insisted on following him in the morning. The guy stood in the airport building. Shan Shan and Ingen stood beside him. In the morning, Shu Ying Ying told the protagonist that she would go with him to see if he had any real co-workers. Ifei remembered how sober and cheerful Ying Ying had been sitting on him yesterday. The guy decided to himself that the girl had forgotten about yesterday and should not be reminded. Professional fighters came out of the airplane. They were heading towards the protagonist. After the fighters came out, they approached the protagonist. The head of the Soaring Eagles was named Zheng Menjue. He had the nickname Silver Eagle. The guest greeted Burkut. The protagonist asked with surprise, "Has the Silver Eagle arrived here?" Ifei told the Silver Eagle that he didn't expect the 5th brother to send him here. Silver Eagle said that he did not expect a day like this to come, when the protagonist would need his help. Shanshan girl looked at the meeting with admiration. She sensed the unusual atmosphere. The protagonist questioned Silver Eagle strictly. What did he just say? Silver Eagle looked sternly at his interlocutor. He wanted to repeat what he had said. Yifei and Silver Eagle embraced each other. They remembered their common military affairs. Shanshan, looking at the meeting, said that the protagonist scared the hell out of her. Yifei gave a military salute to his subordinates. The soldiers saluted the leader. Silver Eagle pointed at the Shanshan girl and asked the protagonist if she was his bride. Silver Eagle told Shanshan that very young and beautiful girl. Ingen got very angry. After that, Ingen came up and beat Silver Eagle. The fighter fell to the ground. Silver Eagle said conciliatingly that he apologized. He realized that Ingen's fiancée, Ingen's girlfriend, told her sister that it was time for them to leave. The main character stayed by Silver Eagle's side. Silver Eagle said with a smile that he was the perfect successor to the post of leader in the old days. Ifei smoked and told his friend that he had been a little tomboy, but now they were all grown up. The protagonist and his former co-worker looked at each other very angrily. Ifei told Silver Eagle that he was getting into a fight. Silver Eagle suggested they try fighting in virtual reality. The former soldiers watched their former leader compete with the Silver Eagle. In virtual reality, the protagonist found himself in the middle of an explosion. Ife was walking through a destroyed city. Everything around him was burning and exploding. Silver Eagle walked inside the virtual reality with the protagonist. Silver Eagle cheerfully said, "They will start a match and see who can shoot the most enemies." The protagonist, along with his colleague, started the battle inside the virtual reality. Ife told his friend that he was as annoying as ever. Silver Eagle told Golden Eagle that their score was even. Suddenly, in the middle of the fight, the protagonist ran out of ammo. Ife had no way to insert the ammo magazine. Silver Eagle said he still had a tube. Injin, looking at the guys, said that Blondie didn't look good to her. The girls looked with surprise at Silver Eagle, who was kneeling in front of the Ife. A surprised Injin asked her girlfriend Shan, "What are the guys doing?" Ife said angrily that he couldn't reload the machine gun. Silver Eagle held his pipe in his mouth. Suddenly a bullet whizzed by and struck Silver Eagle in the shoulder. The protagonist told his wounded kneeling friend that he would help him hide in a shelter. Silver Eagle dropped to his knees and grabbed the protagonist with his hands behind his back. The girl Injin was outraged. Shan and Ingen were very shocked. They looked at the protagonist and his friend with surprise. After that, Ying came over and beat up Ife and Silver Eagle with screams. The soldiers were talking amongst themselves. One of them said that it could be that both leaders are gay. After the airport, the protagonist moved to the hotel with the guests. Ife looked beaten up. He told the arriving soldiers that they had serious business to talk about. The warriors looked at the protagonist and said he had a battered face. Ife shouted to his subordinates to be serious. The warrior Silver Eagle turned to the Golden Eagle from the side with a laugh. Silver Eagle was also beaten. He said that he was a more suitable candidate to be the leader of the Soaring Eagles. After a brief pause, Silver Eagle said they needed to have a serious talk. Sitting in the chair, Silver Eagle said that they need to get rid of the traitor Blood Eagle. Silver Eagle then said with an evil smile that Blood Eagle was already dead. The protagonist seriously asked the warriors, "Did they really want to kill the Blood Eagle?" The Silver Eagle said judiciously that it is not necessary to leave alive the one who betrayed his country. The protagonist thought for a moment. He said that he wanted to give advice to the Silver Eagle. In a stern voice, Ife told the Silver Eagle to think twice before doing anything. The warriors and the Silver Eagle were very surprised at such words from the protagonist. Ife said excitedly that everything that had happened seemed implausible. He thought that the fifth brother was hiding something from him. The protagonist recalled his fight with the Blood Eagle with great attention. Ife told his colleague that they needed to investigate everything comprehensively. Silver Eagle told the protagonist to control his hostile aura. The warriors looked at Silver Eagle and decided that he would be their former leader. Silver Eagle stood up from his seat. He had something he wanted to say to the protagonist. Guy put his hand on Ife's shoulder and told him reassuringly that he would handle the matter. The Silver Eagle waved to the protagonist and told him they were coming. The warriors greeted Ife. The protagonist was left all by himself in thought. He thought about his colleague's behavior. He decided to take a walk down the street. He walked towards the store. In his mind, Ife wondered what Bloody Eagle might be doing now. Ife stood outside the store and decided to buy some new clothes. The protagonist picked out a t-shirt. He was still thinking about Bloody Eagle. At that time, some guy with glasses called the protagonist by name. The guy shook hands with the protagonist and said his name was Su Peng. Su reminded the protagonist that he had met their class beauty. Su Peng told the protagonist that they have a meeting today since their classmate is Tao and will be getting married. The protagonist agreed to go. After that, the protagonist and his friend arrived at the house where Tao lived. The protagonist walked with his friend to the meeting place. He went up with his friend to the right floor to the door. The guests were sitting at the table. They were surprised and happy that Su Peng and Li Yifei had come to meet them. The protagonist greeted his friends at the table and asked if they remembered him. At the table were Chao Inbo and the guy Zhao Xiaobao. There was also a girl Chan Fei Fei and a middle-aged uncle. Yifei told the guests modestly that he was accompanying his principal. The uncle was surprised at this answer. He asked, "Did the protagonist really start his own company?" Yifei modestly and calmly told the guests that he was just a chauffeur. Chao Yingbo thought suspiciously to himself that it had turned out that Yifei was just a chauffeur. He, sitting at his desk, heard someone calling him now. Chao's boyfriend said seriously that everyone in the next door was preparing for a wedding reception, and they were sitting around chatting. The protagonist picked up the phone and Yi gave his name to the person he was talking to. The main character was greeted by a girl. She was in the sauna. The girl asked the protagonist if he had been thinking about her lately. Yifei realized that Li Xinyue was calling her, while the Special Warrior Squad approached a factory on the outskirts of the city. There were thickets all around. One soldier said it looked like a terrorist base. Silver Eagle looked through binoculars. The commander said the base was well guarded. He asked the soldiers what ideas they would have. One soldier thought for a while and told the commander that he was suggesting Plan A. Silver Eagle asked, "Why does the plan sound so dangerous?" The subordinate replied that the commander might not come back alive this time. The subordinate told the commander that he was a hero. Silver Eagle said fearfully that everything sounded like he wanted to sacrifice himself. The commander got up from his seat and shouted to his subordinates that it was time to go on the attack. The soldier quietly swung his knife to launch it at the sentinel. The knife very accurately hit the sentry near the door. Another warrior was getting close to another guard with a knife. The soldier very quietly used the knife to neutralize the second guard. The soldier silently looked around at the dead guards. At this time, the Blood Eagle was silently walking through the territory of the base. There was silence and darkness all around. Suddenly, Bloody Eagle heard some suspicious noise. He stopped. Blood Eagle stood quietly in the darkness. He didn't notice the Silver Eagle hanging from the ceiling above him. Blood Eagle stood quietly and listened. His opponent hung from the ceiling silently. Silver Eagle prepared to attack. He held his knife in his hand. Silver Eagle looked carefully at his enemy who stood directly below him. The soldier waited for the right moment and rushed at full speed from above the enemy. Silver Eagle flew downwards. He wanted to grab his opponent in flight. The soldier landed from the ceiling to the ground. Blood Eagle calmly turned around. Blood Eagle calmly looked at his rival and called him a rat. Silver Eagle held a knife in his hand. He asked with interest, why was he only called a rat? Blood Eagle looked away silently. He was thinking about something. Blood Eagle took his sword in his hand. He told his opponent that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but he was making progress. Silver Eagle didn't notice that behind him came a formidable chop warrior with a big sword. Silver Eagle heard a noise and started to turn around frightened. The chop warrior swung his sword with all his might to strike his opponent at once. The soldier dodged the blow very quickly and in time. He bounced away. The Silver Eagle decided to attack the chop warrior from behind. The soldier in flight quickly pulled out his combat knives from his backpack. With professional movements, Silver Eagle slashed the chop with the knives. The warrior chop was quickly neutralized. He started to cough up bloody cough from the severe cuts. The soldier stood in front of the Blood Eagle and said that no one would interfere now. The warrior said that he needed to bring the Blood Eagle alive, but didn't know how to do it. The soldier said in a calm voice that he couldn't be naive. The opponent looked at him silently. The Silver Eagle took out a knife and said he will bring the head of the Blood Eagle. In the house of Tao, and Guy Tsao was telling a story when some vagrants came to them. Tsao said in an important voice he told the vagrants the name of his father, Tsao Gang. Tsao said that the vagrants turned pale and ran away. The people listened to Tsao's story in fascination. Tsao was very pleased with himself. One of the Gordo boys said that the elder Tsao was a tough guy. The Tsao guy thought proudly to himself that all the attention was on him and not on the protagonist. Tsao angrily remembered that the protagonist was popular during his schooling. Tsao's boyfriend looked at Ife angrily and thought that now there would be a party on their street. The main character was talking to Li Xinyue's girlfriend on the phone. He told her that he didn't have time. Tsao's boyfriend listened to the protagonist's conversation with great surprise. Tsao and the other guests were surprised that the protagonist knew Li Xinyue's girlfriend. The protagonist thought to himself that he would just shout out a couple of names first. After that, Ife would refuse the girl on the phone and say he didn't have time. The protagonist confidently told girl Li that he didn't have time. He wouldn't come even if Ling Yao Sung begged him. The guests were surprised at this kind of talk from the protagonist. They thought he was a snob. Tsao Guy looked at the protagonist with admiration. He thought Ife was giving off a diamond glow. Ife thought irritably that if the guests came, they would finish him off. The guests looked at the protagonist with great admiration and interest. The guy rushed towards Ife and asked excitedly, "Does the guy really know the leading Shinyu?" At this time, the man accidentally bumped the Chao Guy's face with his fist. Chao Guy was very unhappy. He didn't like Ife being the center of attention. Tsao thought irritated to himself that the main edge was still cool. Tsao decided to himself that something didn't add up in the main character's story. He turned to Li Yifei. Chao asked strictly from the protagonist, how could the protagonist know the leading Li given his status? Tsao asked strictly the protagonist to introduce the leading Li Xinyue in front of them. The man cheerfully said that the protagonist has an ordinary girlfriend, Li Xinyue. Chao's boyfriend told the guests that his father could arrange a meeting with the real leading lady Li Xinyue in one day. Yifei noticed that the people around him didn't want to listen to him. The main character decided to smoke. He realized that he didn't have to worry about presenting an explanation. Tsao looked proudly at the protagonist and decided that he had completely won. The protagonist threw his pack of cigarettes on the table. This attracted the attention of the other guests. Tsao and the other guests were amazed to see a pack of special panda cigarettes on the table. The man asked the guy with interest, where did the guy get the special cigarettes that are supplied to the central leadership? Yifei was surprised that he had the rare cigarettes. Yifei remembered that the block of cigarettes was given to him by Su Mengshin's girlfriend. He told those around him that they were mistaken. With the gift of expensive cigarettes, Su's girlfriend thanked him for his help. The man said he couldn't be wrong as he had been smoking for 20 years. Tsao was very angry. At that time, the doors opened and a guy in white came running in. He yelled that he had bad news. The groom named Tao and told the excited guests that the host had an accident. Yifei asked, "Do they need to get involved with any other celebrity now?" The groom asked the guests. "Do any of them have a celebrity they know?" The KO guy thought to himself very happily that he had a good chance. Cao cunningly suggested to the protagonist that he invite his acquaintance, Lin Xinyue. At the same time, in the hangar at the base, the Silver Eagle Special Forces soldier continued to fight. Standing behind the soldier was a Chop warrior. Blood Eagle told his opponent to attack more boldly. Chop thought to himself that all the members of Soaring Eagle are very intimidating. He remembered about Burkett and Master. Silver Eagle, holding the knife in front of him, prepared to attack. The SWAT man accelerated and jumped up to attack his opponent from the air. Silver Eagle, with knives in his hands, flew overhead at Blood Eagle. The Blood Eagle bounced off the opponent's attack very quickly and deftly. The Silver Eagle looked angrily at his opponent. He prepared to attack again. Then the Silver Eagle swung his knives to strike his opponents. The SWAT team swung their knives in all directions. Blood Eagle dodged in time. After another attack, the SWAT team was able to strike his sword with his knife. The Chop warrior was very surprised and excited that the Silver Eagle was able to hit his master. The Silver Eagle liked that he was able to hit his opponent. The SWAT man crouched down and prepared for another attack. He looked at the Blood Eagle with a piercing gaze. The Silver Eagle accelerated and began to attack his opponent with quick movements, pushing him backwards. The commando swung his knives and shouted menacingly for Blood Eagle to go to hell. Blood Eagle jumped up on the spot to defend himself from another attack. Blood Eagle then ran away from his opponent to a safe distance. The warrior looked at his clothes and noticed that they had been damaged by the knife strike. Silver Eagle licked his knife and said that he definitely wouldn't miss next time. SWAT Silver Eagle looked at his opponent from a distance. Chop was surprised that his master had been hit. He didn't believe that such a thing was possible. SWAT told his opponent that he was very weak. He added that Burkett fought against Blood Eagle not at full strength. Blood Eagle was silent. He examined the damage on his clothes. After a short pause, Blood Eagle asked his opponent, "Is that one a fan of taunting?" Silver Eagle grinned and said he should be more serious. Silver Eagle added that he couldn't fight his boss Burkett, so he tested his skills on Blood Eagle. After that, the SWAT man grinningly told Blood Eagle that he was weak. Bloody Eagle told his rival in a calm voice that he hadn't changed at all. Then the Blood Eagle looked at his rival menacingly and said that he was a jerk. Suddenly, the Silver Eagle received some very bad news over the comms. A subordinate informed the commander that explosives had been found in the warehouse. The detonation would take 30 seconds. The Special Forces officer asked sternly to his opponent, how dare he play with him? Bloody Eagle said that he couldn't stall for time if he didn't pretend to be weak. After saying that, the Blood Eagle calmly turned around and headed towards the exit. Silver Eagle shouted to his subordinates that it was time to retreat. A powerful explosion rang out in the building. Silver Eagle was blown aside. The commander and his subordinates stood on a hill and looked at the destroyed building. The SWAT officer angrily shouted to his enemy Blood Eagle to take care of himself. At this time, in a fancy house, the guy Tao told the protagonist to show his capabilities. Cao told Tao's fiancé and not to despair. He added that the protagonist would solve the problem. Tao and excitedly asked the protagonist to get the protagonist to help him. The groom reminded him that he had even treated him to soup once. The protagonist thought about it. Tao's boyfriend looked at him with great attention from the side. After a short pause, the protagonist told the groom Tao and to just wait. Yifei called a girl he knew. The lead Lin asked the guy how she could help him. The protagonist asked the girl if she was free and said that they needed a wedding host. The guy Cao thought angrily to himself how long Yifei could pretend. Cao was very surprised after the two girls arrived at the party. The guests arrived in gorgeous outfits and greeted all the guests. People were amazed to see Lin Xinyue and Sun Lianyao in front of them. The girls said hello to the boys. The groom Tao and was astonished to see the leading Ling along with her girlfriend. Annoyed, Tao convinced himself, looking at the girl, that it must be just a coincidence. Chao's boyfriend greeted the Lin Sung girl and introduced himself. He asked if she knew his father. The girl listened attentively and silently to the conversation from the Sao guy. The girl smiled and replied to Guy Cao that they don't know who his father is. Cao asked excitedly to the girls if they were passing by chance. At that time, the girls hugged the main character and said that they were not passing by accident. One of the girls told the protagonist that they had something to ask him too. The girl offered Yifei to go inside with her, followed by Tao's fiancé, and Tao's boyfriend was crushed. At the same time, a festive ceremony was taking place in his hall, led by Ling Shui. The bridegroom Tao Yi stood next to his bride in her festive attire. Hostess Lin told the guests to welcome the bride and groom. The guests were very excited. Someone was very surprised because of Lin Xinyue and Sun Lianyao being the hosts. The guy next to the main character in the audience clapped and said that everything was really beautiful. Cao grasped his teeth with his handkerchief not to give away his emotions. At the wedding party, Cao's boyfriend was shocked by the arrival of beautiful Lin to the protagonist. The inadequate Cao was led away by his friends. He was still screaming that there must be a mistake. The protagonist silently waved goodbye to the young Cao master. At the same time, one of the girls approached the protagonist from behind. The girl said that everything was fine. Ife asked the girls, why were they looking for him? The guest said in an agitated voice that young Master Sun had come to see her. He wants the girls to keep him company tomorrow. The girlfriend asked the protagonist for help. The protagonist was amazed and excited by the request of the girls he knows. The protagonist met the warriors at the hotel after the battle with the Blood Eagle. If questioned his subordinates. Did the Blood Eagle leave because those failed? Silver Eagle was bandaging a wounded soldier. He said that he hated Blood Eagle even more even than when they were in command. Ife said judiciously that he had envisioned such an exodus. The protagonist wanted to say something important. Silver Eagle was all ears. Ife said judiciously that they wouldn't be able to find the Blood Eagle so easily now. The guy simply said that the Blood Eagle had no trouble hiding. He added that it was a shame that they couldn't capture him. A soldier said sad that the leader almost sacrificed himself. Another soldier said that they are guilty since they didn't use Plan A. Silver Eagle shouted to his subordinates that it wasn't even Plan A. The protagonist thoughtfully addressed the Silver Eagle with a question. Ife demanded that Silver Eagle tell him more about Blood Eagle. The Silver Eagle listened attentively to the protagonist's demands. The party began at young Master Sun's house. He greeted the guests. The door opened and the invited beautiful girls entered the house. Master Sun, standing with his guards, welcomed the two girls. Master Sun shouted to the servants to bring the wine. Sun greeted the incoming ladies. Some of the guests said that young Master Sun has good connections. Both girls were excited. They were silent and did not respond to the greeting. Sun told the guests that the girls Lin Xinyue and Sun Lianyao had come to see him. One of the men said that young Master Sun was very influential. The guests began to ask the Lin girl to have a drink with one of them. Guy Sun asked for the girl and told Xinyue to come closer to him. After that, Sung grabbed Xinyue's girlfriend roughly and wanted to hug her. Ling shoved the guy away and said grudgingly to stop. Sun angrily shouted to the girls, "How dare the girls behave like that?" The guests asked the guy to listen to them. Sun shouted angrily to the girls, "How dare those dare to insult him because of some bodyguard?" The men angrily asked the girls how can they leave after insulting young Master Sun. Sun called the girls mean names. At this time, the main character came up behind him. Sun started to say that he is the ruler of a city. At this time, Ife poured a drink from a glass on the guy's head. The main character sternly told the guy's son that he should be more polite in front of the lady. Master Sun was very much astonished to see the protagonist. He jumped up from his seat. Sun shouted to the waiter that the protagonist had come uninvited and asked him to deal with him. The waiter said he would do it. The waiter asked Ife for his membership card. He added that it was a high-end club. The protagonist reached into his jacket pocket to get his membership card. The protagonist held out his gold VIP card to the waiter. The waiter was very much surprised to see an ordinary guest with a VIP card. Sun and the other guests were amazed at the gold VIP card in the main character's hands. Sun said that VIP cards are only given to important politicians and powerful billionaires. Ife thought surprised that the card he received was really that important. Sun then ran up to the protagonist and snatched the card from his hands. Sun held the card up and shouted that it must be a fake. At this time, the club administrator came from behind and called out to Sun. The administrator said that he was issuing all the cards personally. He also warned that Sun should watch his language. Sun waved his hands and said he didn't mean it. He thought he was having a hard time getting into the club and couldn't get out of here. The receptionist bowed to the main character and apologized. Ife replied that it was okay. The receptionist smiled and thanked the protagonist for understanding. Ife pointed at Suna and said that kind of rabble shouldn't come in here. The administrator said he would see to it. Young Master Sun was very angry and disappointed. He glared angrily at Ife. Young Sung banged his hand on the chair in anger because of the frenzy of emotion. Angry Sun asked the protagonist how dare he provoke him. He added that he was taking the entrance test for the banquet team. Sun then pointed his finger at the protagonist and said he was challenging him one-on-one. Zhao's manager sternly demanded that the guy leave immediately. Ife calmed down the manager. Ife grudgingly said that young Master Sun was boasting about the Soaring Eagles team. The protagonist pointed to the approaching people in the back and said Sun should see them. The Silver Eagle who approached said unhappily that someone was misusing the name of the Soaring Eagles team to cheat. After that, the SWAT officer sternly asked Sun, was he the one who was such a bastard? Young Sun was very shocked. He didn't expect to meet the leader of the Silver Eagle team here. The SWAT officer told the guests that it was Sun's boyfriend who wasn't on the invitation list. He had inexplicably gotten a spot in the qualifying test. Silver Eagle reported that Sun was eliminated in the first round. Some of the guests started talking to each other. Some of them said angrily that Sun got his place only because of his connections. A SWAT officer walked up to the guy and put his hand on his shoulder. He asked sternly, How dare Sun use their team's reputation? Silver Eagle threw the guy to the ground with a professional movement. The SWAT officer looked at the guy angrily and said that they needed to have a good talk. The battered Sun turned to the leader and said fearfully that he could explain everything. Silver Eagle ordered his subordinates to carry the Suna away. The SWAT officer shook the main character's hand and thanked him for his help. Sun was carried out of the room. He shouted that he was wrong. One of the guests said in shock that it was the end for young Master Suna. The manager said that even the people of the Soaring Eagles respected Ife. The overjoyed girls approached the protagonist. They hugged him and thanked him. Both girls kissed the embarrassed protagonist. One of the girls said it was a reward for Ife. One of the beauties asked the protagonist to tell the story again. The next day, Ife arrived at the Su Yingying Company building. He was greeted by the receptionist at the entrance. Afterward, the protagonist saw a woman, Su Yingying, approach him. The woman grabbed the protagonist without any words and pulled him with her. She told him to follow her. The guy shouted excitedly that they were in the office now. He suggested to talk at home. Ingen told strictly protagonist to shut up and come in. Already in the office, the guy asked grudgingly, "Why did the woman drag him in here like that?" Ingen replied that she had great news for the protagonist. The director told the surprise guy that people targeting her company had started disappearing. Ife couldn't understand in this situation why the woman was smiling back at him. Ying Ying asked cheerfully to the guy, "Does he seriously dislike her smile?" Principal Shu smiled to herself and thought about the answer. Ying Ying looked at the guy and said she should smile more often since her problems were solved. The main character smiled and told the woman to smile more in the future. At this time, suddenly the woman turned around and leaned over the table. Ife looked excitedly at the headmistress's figure. Ingen said that she wanted to reward the guy. The main character was excited and thrilled to see the woman in such a pose. Ife imagined Ingen lying on the bed in a romantic pose and calling him to her. The guy excitedly remembered the erotic video with the female principal. The protagonist decided that he was left to get naked in such a situation. The woman took the documents from the desk and said that she had prepared a transfer for Ife to the administrative department. The guy started to undress. He told the headmistress that she could not do so, for they were colleagues and were in the office. The woman was astonished at such a vulgar suggestion from the main character. Shu Yingying pounced and beat up the subordinate. She yelled at him not to even think about transferring to the administrative department anymore. The beaten guy realized he'd lost his chance for a promotion and a pay raise. When he went outside, the angry Yifei reproached himself for saying the wrong thing. At that time, a red car pulled up and a girl called out to him. The beautiful Sue smiled. She looked out of the window and said she had something for Ife. Sue handed the guy tickets to a luxury cruise and told him to take a break for a couple days. Ife asked the girl why she gave him 3 tickets. Sue decided to explain everything to the guy. Beauty Sue, in as calm a voice as possible, said that she would be competing for the main character. The boy was silent. He wondered what the girl Sue had said. Sue told the main character that if he had no questions, she would go. Ife held the tickets in his hands and looked at his girlfriend in silence. The protagonist looked at the tickets in his hands thoughtfully and attentively for a long time. Director Sun arrived at the building of Suntian International and was greeted by his subordinates. Sun walked unhappily down the corridor. He rudely responded to all the greetings of his subordinates. As he approached the door, the director told the employee not to be disturbed. The subordinate said that everything would be fulfilled. In the principal's office, Suna saw the Blood Eagle standing silently. The head boss sitting in the chair asked Sunya how is he doing. The guy dared to ask the guests menacingly, why haven't they gotten rid of Li Yifei yet? The boss said in an important voice that Li Yifei was a Berkut. He added that because of this mistake, they were almost killed by the Soaring Eagle team. Sun was surprised that the protagonist was a Berkut. The headman then said in a cryptic voice that the mission had failed and they were preparing to retreat. Sun shouted that his guests claimed to be very strong. Now they can't just bail. The guy added that Li Yifei was going on a vacation cruise. He reported that they could get rid of the main character there. At this time, Blood Eagle silently drew his sword and pointed it at Suna. The warrior sternly interrogated, "Will Berkut definitely be on the cruise?" Sun confirmed that it is definitely so. The boss said angrily that he had a plan that required the help of young Master Sun. Meanwhile, in Sunny Suburb, a policewoman was catching up with a criminal. Ling ran after the intruder at full speed and shouted for him to stand still. The lynx ran and began to gradually catch up with the perp in the green sweater. The policewoman angrily accused the guy of breaking into the locker room at the police station. The perp yelled in defense that he was just promoting sales of hair removal cream. The lineman swung her baton at the perpetrator with all her might and asked what the hell was going on. The suspect ran toward the locker room to try to escape. The perp thought angrily to himself that he had no choice and would have to rush inside. The bandit turned around and told the policewoman that if she was brave, she should follow him into the men's locker room. Lin was startled to see one of the assassins appear behind the criminal. The assassin, nicknamed the Bloody Fox, struck Ling with her whip. From the forceful blow, the lynx began to sway and lose consciousness. Then the exhausted policewoman collapsed unconscious on the ground. The killer, nicknamed Paired Blades, said that because of the policewoman they lost their honor. The terrified criminal looked fearfully at the women standing next to him. The bandit begged not to be killed. Paired Blades asked, "What are they going to do with this crook?" Bloody Fox said, "They will take the crook with them." The Bloody Fox walked over and put her foot on the Lin girl's head. The woman said angrily that the policewoman had brought them a lot of trouble. The main character, along with his girlfriends, arrived at the big cruise ship. Along with Yifei was also his boss, Xu Yingying. She was also preparing to set sail. Shanshan happily pointed the protagonist to the big cruise ship. Yifei couldn't understand why Shanshan's girlfriend was so excited. He couldn't believe that she hadn't been to such places before. At that time, Miss Su appeared. She greeted the protagonist. People looked at the girl with admiration. Miss Su stood in a big hat and smiled as she looked around at all the guests. Xu Yingying greeted Miss Su. The beautiful girl said she had just arrived. Su told her companions that they needed to go up to the ship. The guard told the protagonist that it was now his responsibility to keep the beauty Su safe. The protagonist overheard some of the guests marveling at the sheer size of the ship. A boy named Yi Tianlin arrived on the cruise with his girlfriend Laura. Laura told her friend that this time they should definitely buy back a bottle of wine. Yi Shingai said with confidence in his voice that this time they will definitely take the upper hand. The girlfriend told his friend not to yell. Yifei, looking at the new passengers, thought those were very strange. Yi Tian said that he is a gold-class wine taster. The girlfriend yelled for the guy to shut his mouth. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend Yingying and told her to hold his hand. Xu Yingying looked at the protagonist silently and with great disbelief. After a short pause, Ingen took the guy's hand and said they had to go. The subordinate asked the headmistress, "What is his personality this time?" Xu replied cryptically to her companion that it depends on how he shows himself. Yifei told Ingen that it was time for them to board the ship. Shanshan watched the couple from the side. The main character on the ship met a couple of travelers, Yishin and Laura. Yifei took a picture of the guy and girl as they stood at the front of the ship. Laura had her arms out to the sides and the guy was standing behind her saying something. Yichin was cheerful and smiling and took a picture next to his girlfriend. The guy happily thanked the main character for helping him take the picture. Yifei said goodbye to his new acquaintances. Laura didn't like her friend's behavior. Suddenly, the protagonist heard some suspicious noises in the distance. Yifei looked around and saw a stranger quickly disappear around the corner. The protagonist smelled something suspicious. Ingen told the protagonist that she had found the room. The subordinate told his headmistress that he was coming. There was an assassin lurking around the corner. The servants opened the door to the boy and the girl and invited them inside. The room was full of guests. Yifei said admiringly that this ship was really nice. Yifei heard a special forces man talking from behind. Silver Eagle was telling how he saved his captain. There was a girl standing next to the commando. She said, "Is his captain really that weak?" The warriors greeted the protagonist. Silver Eagle told his girlfriend that the captain had given him his position. Special forces heard the question, "Is Yifei such a fool?" Silver Eagle shouted happily that the companion had not seen his captain at that moment. Yifei called out to his friend Zhengmin Jue in a formidable voice. Silver Eagle was frightened. The protagonist beat up his subordinate and said that he had lost all fear. The beaten SWAT officer wanted to introduce Yifei to the guests present. Zheng said that Captain Li Yifei was standing next to him. The girl bowed to the protagonist. The protagonist asked with interest, "How did the commando end up on this ship?" Silver Eagle said he completed his mission and just took a vacation. Yifei told Zhen that he laid eyes on the girl without using force. The SWAT officer replied to the commander that he would study in him. The conversation was interrupted by the host saying that the auction was starting. The host pumped into the microphone that on this beautiful night the auction would begin. The guy sitting next to his girlfriend Laura was very excited for the auction to begin. The main character was not happy to see a couple of young travelers again. There weren't many people in the auction room. The protagonist, together with Aichian and Laura, was on the balcony above. Yiqian was very excited. He said that this place often holds such shows. Suddenly a girl called out to Yifei from outside. He turned around. The beautiful Su said that she had a box seat. She suggested that the protagonist go along with her. After a short pause, Yifei agreed to go with his girlfriend. The protagonist said goodbye to the boyfriend. Yiqian waved back. Laura told her friend that only oligarchs or government members sit in the box. She added that the protagonist is not that simple at all. At this time, the bidding at the auction was going boiko. The presenter barely had time to bang his gavel. The auctioneer pointed to the big vase and told the customer that it belonged to him now. Beauty Sue told her friends to go into the VIP lounge. There they could relax and enjoy the view. The main character liked the view from the VIP box where he was. His girlfriends were next to him. At this time, the auctioneer loudly announced the next item. A bottle of vintage gold wine from the wreck of the Titanic. The vintage bottle was shown to all the bidders present. Yiqian shouted happily to his girlfriend that this was the bottle of wine. Beautiful Sue told the protagonist that this bottle of wine had a very interesting story. The woman Xu Yingying said judiciously that there was no point in buying this bottle for a lot of money. The protagonist listened to his girlfriend's opinion with great attention. Su asked the protagonist if he was interested in the bottle of wine. Su said that she could buy this wine for Ife. The servant informed that the Mengshan girl has the right of first refusal. The guy excitedly waved his hand to Mengshan and said she shouldn't worry about him. The protagonist felt tension in the air. His two girlfriends were standing nearby. The guy told Su girl that he didn't need her help. Excitedly, Ife told the girls that he would go out for a moment to get some air. At this time at the auctioneer yelled that the item had been sold and banged the gavel. The auctioneer pointed to Yitian and said he had bought a bottle of wine. The guy happily told his girlfriend that he had finally gotten the bottle. Laura reminded her friend that it was their director Tan who had instructed them to buy the wine. A huge liner was sailing in the evening twilight. At that time, uninvited guests showed up. A uniformed soldier kicked the captain with all his might in the wheelhouse. The captain asked the strangers who they were. The sailor asked the commander if he was all right. The soldier pointed his gun at the captain and told him to listen to his boss. Blood Eagle stood nearby. Blood Eagle calmly told the captain that the ship was captured by them. The commander of the ship was silent. He was sweating and shaking very badly from fright. The protagonist went to the empty outer deck to smoke. Yifei stood under the evening sky and wondered what his friend Mengshan was doing. A knife-wielding assassin silently approached the protagonist from behind. The woman called Parney Blades didn't hit the protagonist in time. He dodged. The assassin jumped aside to protect herself from the protagonist's attack. The protagonist looked fearfully at the assassin who had suddenly appeared. After calming down a bit, the guy asked the stranger who she was. Paired Blades. She stood in a fighting stance and said that she had come for Ifei's life. The assassin, nicknamed Paired Blades, pulled out her combat throwing knives. The woman jumped up sharply to make it easier to attack the guy. The twin blades flew over the protagonist, who was standing on the deck. After that, the woman launched a whole swarm of dangerous blades towards Ifei. The protagonist looked up and realized he was an assassin very quickly oriented. Ifei activated a skill called Dragon Power Summoning to enhance his abilities. Thanks to his skill, the protagonist was able to quickly repel all the blades flying at him. The assassin landed from above on the deck. Ifei was preparing to fend off another attack. The paired blades pulled out a large number of small throwing knives. The woman rushed out of her seat to attack the protagonist at a breakneck speed. The guy managed to fend off all the sharp and dangerous blades flying at him. Ifei thought to himself that the woman against him was getting faster and more dangerous. The assassin pulled out a dangerous knife and said she was about to use a shuriken. The woman wanted to stab her opponent with the knife. The protagonist ducked just in time. The assassin launched another set of dangerous blades against the guy. Paired blades with hatred, she shouted at the protagonist to die soon. Ifei, holding a knife in his hands, told his rival that it was her secret weapon. The protagonist shouted that the assassin's knives were useless against him. He launched the blade at her. The knife flew past the woman and almost hit her. Paired Blades was very surprised. She asked the protagonist, amazed, if he could throw daggers. The protagonist didn't say anything to his rival. He hit her hard. The assassin fell on her back on the deck. The woman was lying on the ground. She couldn't fight back. Ifei was on top of her. The doors opened and out came the Yeshin guy. He shouted, very happy that he was able to buy wine. The guy thought to himself that his task was over. Suddenly he saw something interesting. Aichin saw a strange woman lying on the deck in front of him. On top of her was an Ifei. The guy was very much amazed and embarrassed to see the protagonist with the woman. Ifei defiantly turned away and said loudly that he wasn't looking and couldn't see. Suddenly Idian realized that the stranger on the deck was not any of the girls who were with Ifei. He clearly remembered the main character's girlfriends he had seen on the ship. Ifeon was outraged. He called the protagonist an animal and prepared for a fight. The protagonist and the assassin were very surprised. Ifei got ready to jump aside. The guy smashed his fist into the deck of the ship. The protagonist bounced back. Ifei, standing at a great distance, asked the opponent who he is. Yidian Lin said menacingly, he will not allow the protagonist to molest another man's woman if he already has 3 girls. Ifei asked the guy strictly if he is an accomplice with the assassin. Yitian calmly replied to the main character that he can't watch him using girls. After that, Idian told the stranger that he could blow off steam with her. Ifei yelled to his rival that there was a misunderstanding. The angry guy ran full speed at the protagonist. In one of the ship's cabins, a policewoman woke up. She opened her eyes and saw a dim light. She didn't know where she was. She felt a headache. The policewoman was tied up. She looked around frightened, not realizing where she was. She saw around her an empty room with a table and chairs. She couldn't understand what this place was. There was a crook in a green sweater hanging nearby. The policewoman said she could smell the sea. She thought they had been kidnapped. Lin noticed someone was next to her. She said hello and asked where they were. The girl was angry when she saw a thief she already knew was nearby. The crook was also displeased when he saw the line nearby. The policewoman said she got caught because of the guy next to her. The crook shouted that there was a misunderstanding. At the same time, a voice was heard from outside the door. Someone was inquiring about the people in the room. Another soldier said that the prisoners were still in a coma. Lin, listening to the conversations outside, she realized that she had to think of something. The policewoman asked the crook if he had any idea how to get out. The crook said he didn't know anything. Then the liar turned to the guy and said she had a plan, but he had to cooperate. The policewoman leaned to the side. She put her feet in the direction of the crook. The disgruntled guy with the big nose yelled loudly that he was hurt. The crook yelled menacingly that his back hurt. Lin yelled to the captive to try to bite her rope. Lin grabbed the guy by the hair and pulled him up to her. She told him to bite her rope. The rogue yelled that he was in a lot of pain. The rogue yelled that he couldn't reach to bite the ropes. The Lin heard with consternation how someone outside the door realized that the room was noisy. The soldier commanded someone to go inside and check what was going on. 2 soldiers came in. One of them asked sternly, "Why is it so noisy in here?" The soldier asked sternly, "What's going on here?" He saw the prisoners hanging silently. The door slammed shut. The soldier said they would drink now and then deal with the girl. Lin was thinking excitedly what she should do. At the same time, on the deck of the ship, the protagonist fought against Yitan. The protagonist calmly dodged the attack his opponent was launching at him. Ife blocked the blows that the guy wanted to kick him in time. The protagonist activated his skill called Dragon Return. Ife kicked his opponent in the head with all his might. Ishin was hit very hard, but he was able to withstand it. He prepared to attack back. He swung his fist. Ife held out his palm in his direction. The protagonist used all his strength to deliver a powerful punch against Yitian. The assassin was sitting next to him. Pair Blades noticed that Yitian fell down after 3 hits. She realized that the guy was very weak. The assassin realized that the protagonist had used his skills to block her attack. She decided that he wasn't called Burkut for nothing. Ichin told the woman excitedly that he would protect her and everything would be fine. Suddenly the guy saw that the woman's clothes were torn. The holes in her clothes showed her breasts. He was very shy and embarrassed. Yitian shouted that he didn't feel well. The hair on his head suddenly started to turn red. Ife asked the guy, "Why is he helping the assassin and are they in on it?" There was a loud noise and Yitian prepared for another attack. The guy quickly jumped up behind the protagonist. Ife didn't even notice the attack. At the very last moment, the protagonist noticed that his opponent had swung around to attack. The transformed Yitian swung his fist. The protagonist barely had time to dodge. The paired blades was very surprised at the speed with which the guy attacked. Ife realized excitedly to himself that his opponent had become much faster. The rival grabbed the protagonist with his hand and prepared to strike. The evil Ishin swung around to hit the protagonist with all his might. Ife looked at his rival and noticed that he had a more dangerous appearance. The protagonist noted to himself that his opponent's speed had increased. Ife was unable to defend himself and fell to the ground. The force of the main character's fall was very strong. Shards flew around. The assassin was amazed that the guy was able to take down Burkut with 1 punch. Yitian swung around to land a huge number of punches on his opponent. Ife looked at his opponent with great fear. He couldn't defend himself in time. Yitian continued to throw a huge number of punches at the protagonist. Yitian continued to beat his opponent systematically on the ship's deck. When the guy swung again, he noticed that the protagonist had disappeared somewhere. He saw only a huge hole in front of him, through which the starry sky could be seen. He looked around frightened and couldn't figure out where Yifi had gone. Suddenly, the protagonist came up from behind and elbowed his opponent. Ife then ran up at full speed to attack from the other side. The protagonist swung around to hit his opponent with his arm. Ife struck his opponent's arm with a huge swing. At the end, the protagonist swung to kick the guy. Ife suddenly noticed that his kick didn't finish his opponent. The protagonist noticed with excitement that his opponent's defense had also increased. Yitian grabbed the guy's leg with his hands as if nothing had happened and shouted that he had caught him. The protagonist couldn't get free of the hold. His opponent wanted to throw him over. Yitian spun Yifei around by his leg and threw him far away. The protagonist flew sideways at high speed and smashed the wall with him. Yitian shouted happily to his opponent that he had gotten what was coming to him. The guy swung his fist to finally finish off the protagonist. Yitan used a special skill called Youthful Shockwave. At this time, elsewhere in the ship, the soldiers were listening to what was happening in the room with the prisoners. A guard said excitedly that he heard something. His colleague replied that they should go on drinking. The police Lin continued to hang tied up next to the crook in the green sweater. Lin angrily thought to herself that if she had a little more time, she would have succeeded. The policewoman twisted her arms but could not free herself from the rope. Lin yelled angrily to the crook that they were in this situation because of him. The guy said in a sad voice that they should rest for now. Lin asked the crook with interest, "Why does he do illegal things?" She reminded him that the first time he went to the police was because he stole women's underwear. The crook thought dreamily and for a long time and remembered his first time. The guy said it all happened when it was a beautiful morning. A beautiful red-headed girl was on the roof hanging out her laundry to dry. A crook watched the girl standing around the corner. She didn't see him. The guy stood and waited for the girl to leave. There was no one else around. Then the intruder ran over to the rack where the girl's underwear was hanging. Then the guy quickly and carefully took the underwear hanging on the rack. Then the intruder put the girl's underwear on his head. The policewoman angrily yelled at the guy that he was a pervert. Then the girl swung around and hit the crook on the head. The policewoman angrily called the guy a pervert. The crook asked the girl to hear the rest of his story. The crook wanted to tell the girl what he noticed in the girl's underwear. The guy came to the girl and told her he was her neighbor from the 3rd floor. The intruder sternly asked the neighbor if it was her underwear he was holding. The girl angrily replied to the guy that she remembered him. She asked if the guy was a real pervert. The guy explained that he had always had a very good sense of smell. Thereupon the neighbor, holding his lower oxen in his hands, accused the girl of stealing his laundry powder. The guy said with a chuckle that he was able to smell his powder because of his nose. The policewoman got sympathetic. She asked the guy if he was still a bachelor. The crook replied that he was actually still a bachelor. He asked the girl how did she know. In a subsequent conversation, the crook explained how he got into the women's locker room and assaulted a woman in the park. The policewoman asked the guy how come he needed money all the time. Lynn told her that she had seen the crook's file and he was a law-abiding man. He had only recently started breaking laws. The crook decided to tell her the sad story of his life. The guy's name was Ekuan. He grew up on his own, surrounded by his siblings who were once sheltered. Ekuan had no one but the children around him. He wanted to raise them to be good people. Her sister's name was Jin. Her older brother was an idol who could do anything for her. The girl saw an advertisement on TV for a toy hair for 5,800 yuan. Ekuan saw his sister watching the TV commercial with great interest. The older brother told his sister Jin that he would soon buy her such a toy. The girl happily replied to the boy that she didn't need a toy except her favorite bunny. Ekuan found the toy bunny at a dump and gave it to her sister for her birthday. The crook asked the policewoman if she thought he worked so hard for a doll. While Ekuan was working very hard, the weather suddenly turned bad. His older brother came home and noticed that his sister Jin was very sick. The doctors diagnosed the girl with an autoimmune disease. She was in the hospital. The doctor told the boy that he would need a bone marrow transplant for a large sum of money. Ekuan looked at the medical bill. He realized it was a very large sum of money. The girl lying on the bed came to her senses. She called out to her brother in a weak voice. Ekuan told her sister that everything was fine and they would go home. The girl's voice motivated him. The boy had no way out. He kept borrowing money, but few people would help him. To survive, Ekuan had to work several jobs. He had to take his little sister out of the hospital because he couldn't pay the hospital bills. Ekuan carried the girl in a wheelchair. Jin called out to her brother and touched him with her hand. The girl told her brother that she was very happy that he had done so much for her. Police Lin listened to Ekuan's story with great attention and excitement. The boy reported that when his sister had a couple of days to live, he took a crooked road. Ekuan started committing crimes and knew he would be caught for his actions. It was very hard for the guy to tell his life story. Tears came to his eyes. Lin looked at the crook and visualized his life story realistically. Ekuan told the policewoman that he wanted to make more money before his sister died. The big brother wanted to give his sister Jin a beautiful bunny. Meanwhile, on the ship, the main character continued to push Yitian around. Yifei managed to catch his opponent's fist with his hand and stopped him from hitting him. Yitan thought excitedly to himself that his rival had caught his punch. Pearblades thought surprised to himself that such a powerful punch would not have been repelled even by an elder. After that, the protagonist with all his might struck Ishin and he flew far away to the side. The woman looking at the lying guy decided that things were getting interesting. Yifei shouted menacingly that it was time to start the third round. The eyes of the god of death glowed at him. The protagonist stood opposite his opponent on the ship deck. Yifei told the guy menacingly that the guy was not so simple. He added that he would show his true strength. The guy smiled happily and told the protagonist that this was his boring death speech. After that, the fighters rushed out of their seats to fight once again. Yifei and his opponent swung to finish each other off. A harsh voice came from outside and demanded that the boys stop. The girls Injin and Laura came out on deck. One of them sternly asked Yifei and Tianlin what they were doing. The guys were very surprised to see their girls standing side by side together. The assassin got worried. She realized that it was very bad if the girls knew each other. The Pearblades decided it was time for her to retreat. She immediately fled. The girls explained to the guys how they came to be like this. The frightened Tian interrogated Laura. Is Yifei a good person? Xu Yingying looked at her friend very sternly and suspiciously. Laura demanded her friend to apologize as he was reckless. Tian Guy calmed down. He no longer looked threatening. He extended his hand to the protagonist. The former rivals shook hands. Yifei said he would remember that Tian was very good. After that, the whole group went to a night bar to celebrate. Tian said with a smile on his face that he was very refreshed by the beer. Yifei asked him, "Why is his hair red?" Tian explained that it happens when he is excited. He laughed out loud. The girls watched their boyfriends from the sidelines. Ingen looked at Laura and decided that this girl was no ordinary person. Laura sensed Ingen's strong temperament. She decided that Shui was a very strong woman. The bartender was pouring drinks for the protagonist. Yifei was asking about the wine auction. Yifei suddenly looked at the bartender with great attention and interest. The bartender on the ship was Hu's brother. Yifei asked the bartender if he'd seen him anywhere. The man told him he'd been mistaken. Hu's brother happily thought that the protagonist didn't recognize him. At the same time, Yifei continued to drink with him. Suddenly, the guys heard someone from outside calling out to the girl Injin. Cao and Sun ran up to the girls. They offered them a drink. Sun told the girl Injin that she was very beautiful and they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The guy Cao Bing offered to have fun with a smile to the girl Laura. The protagonist said that he didn't have enough fun during the fight. Tian said that he was angry. Meanwhile, in a dark room, a crook was telling a policewoman about his life. The guy with tears in his eyes said he wanted to fulfill his sister's last wish, but ended up here. Ling angrily shouted at the prisoner not to speak discouraging words. The policewoman sternly demanded that the boy be a man. Lin angrily asked the guy how the guy could put his hands down in such a situation. The crook replied fearfully that he was a thief, but there was no need to be very worried. The policewoman yelled to the guy that when they got out, she would help him. Lin angrily asked the guy to help her untie the rope. They shouldn't give up so easily. The crook remembered his sister telling him to live as long as possible. The guy felt empowered. He yelled out that he knew what he had to do. The rogue was able to quickly free himself from his rope. Lin asked if he could help her. Ikuan was able to free himself completely and found himself on the floor. There was a policewoman standing nearby. The policewoman looked at the guy with great excitement. The rogue was sitting on the earth. Afterward, the rogue said in a tired voice that he had been through a lot. The guy thought and said confidently that he couldn't be modest anymore. The older brother said with hope in his voice that his sister Jin Jin was waiting for him. The policewoman turned around and tapped the crook's foot with all her might. She asked him menacingly, "Why is there pulling here?" The guy said in a frightened voice that he was just trying to show off. The yin hurried him up. After that, the crook released the girl from the ropes very quickly. Lin asked the guy, how on earth did he manage to break the rope? The crook replied that he always had a file with him. Lin told the guy that there are 2 guards standing outside. They need to think about how to deal with them. The policewoman told the crook that she would really need his help. The guards near the door heard some suspicious moaning inside the room. One of the soldiers wondered what it was and decided to open the door. The soldiers went inside to see what was going on. A naked crook with loose hair shouted to the men that he loved them. The soldiers were frightened. They did not realize what they were seeing in front of them. At this time, the policewoman prepared to stun the guards with a fire extinguisher. After the powerful blow, the guards lay unconscious. Lin told the crook that he had potential. The policewoman commanded her companion where to go. The crook shouted that they were on a ship. Suddenly, someone blocked the escape route of the freed prisoners. Assassin-paired Blade stood on the deck with her colleague. Sniper Cutie, looking at the fugitives, said that the main criminals wanted to escape. Meanwhile, in the ship's bar itself inside, the fun continued. The guy Cao was having a lot of fun turning to the girl Injin and saying that they haven't seen each other for a long time. The guy reminded the girlfriend that his name is Cao Bin. He is the son of the director of Cao. The guest excitedly spun around and shouted to the Injin girl that she was still as beautiful as ever. Laura asked with great surprise to Yingying if she knew Cao. Zhu Yingying, without emotion, looking at the Cao guy, replied that she knew him. In the end, the Cao guy decided to himself that the Yingying girl was enchanted by him. He decided to invite her for a drink. The guy thought happily to himself that he was the center of attention. Suddenly, he was called from the side by the main character. Yifei smiled at the guy and said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Cao was amazed to see the protagonist. Cao Bin was very much astonished. He didn't expect to see the main character here. The Cao boy's tongue was slurred with excitement. He asked Yifei what he was doing here. The protagonist said he had come with Yingying. Cao remembered that the protagonist had always been the favorite of the girls. He remembered an incident from 10th grade. Luck was always on Yifei's side. Cao remembered 11th grade. When the protagonist appeared in class, all eyes were on him. Suddenly, a hunch struck Cao Bin. He decided to go to Yifei. The guy excitedly asked the protagonist what his relationship with Ingen was. Yifei hugged his girlfriend and said in a confident voice that Ingen is his girlfriend. Cao Bin was completely amazed by this answer from the protagonist. The protagonist quietly told his girlfriend that this time he had the role of his boyfriend. At that time, Sun's boyfriend came up. He turned angrily to Mr. Cao. Sun sternly threatened the protagonist that people will come and deal with him. Then Sun calmly approached the girl Lore. She looked at him silently. Sun called the girl beautiful milady and wanted to ask her out. Suddenly, an angry Tian appeared behind the guy and told him to get out. Tian, standing behind him, had his hand on the young guy Sun's shoulder. Sun said to the viciously approached rival, "Does he know who he is?" Tian said threateningly that Sun would be in trouble if he dared to touch Loru's girlfriend. The protagonist was watching everything that was happening. He noticed that he had some feeling again. Sun thought irritably to himself that he would not allow himself to be underestimated. Then he swung around to hit his assailant with a hand punch. Aishin reacted in time to dodge the attack and hit Sun back. In the moment of a strong blow, Sun felt that his opponent was attacking him fast and hard. With a powerful blow, Sun's boyfriend flew back to the bar and knocked the chairs apart. Sun turned to the bartender and demanded that he help him. He reminded him that he was a friend of the captain. Chaobin's boyfriend was shocked and frightened when he saw his battered friend. The bartender thought excitedly that he would like to help the guy Sun Shao, but he couldn't do it. The bartender saw two identical, intimidating strong men standing in front of him. Cao grabbed his beaten friend and said they had to get out of here. In parting, Sun threatened his abusers that they would not survive tonight. Ifei continued to calmly drink the drink and watch the guy pull. The friend approached Lore and asked her calmly with a smile if she was okay. Ifei looked at the departing guests and thought he needed to find out more about them. Chaobin led his battered and weakened friend Sun Xiaoko to the front door. Suddenly, the people in the bar heard a suspicious sound like a gunshot. Ifei began to realize what had happened. The main character said excitedly that they heard the sound of a gunshot. There was a man with a gun in the audience near the stage. He loudly greeted all the guests. The man turned to those present and said that he was about to introduce himself. The invader said he was a member of the Shishenshi organization, and his name was Keir Hofude. The soldiers shot one of the guests. They shouted for everyone to keep their hands behind their heads. One of the gunmen commanded the guests to put out money. Shan and the Su girl watched the takeover from the balcony. The girls were very scared. They didn't know what to do. Yifei told Tian to take the girls to their quarters. Tan asked his friend what he would do. The protagonist pondered and concentrated menacingly before answering. Yifei took his clothes and said menacingly that he would go deal with the invaders of the ship. On the other side of the ship, a police Lin was fighting off two assassins. First, Lynx decided to attack the assassin named Couple Clinics. The policewoman's blow missed the target as the woman defended herself with her weapon. The assassin bounced back to defend herself against the cop's attacks. The assassin reminded the policewoman of the last time they saw each other. Paired Blades reported that Lin had made some progress since last time. The woman shouted angrily to her rival that she would pay for all the evil she had done. Lin yelled that she didn't know what the assassin was telling her. Pair of Blades shouted angrily that her rival was playing dumb. Suddenly, the police line heard some suspicious noises from the side. Sniper Cutie kicked the policewoman and said there was more of her. The sniper looked at the Lin with a smile and said they wouldn't let her die so quickly. There was a scared rogue standing behind her. The policewoman yelled for him to run away and she would cover him. The assassin was very surprised by the policewoman's words about a possible escape. The women sternly said that they would not let go of the Lin after Ta ruined their image. The policewoman fearfully asked her rivals what they were talking about. Cutie resentfully interjected, "Did the policewoman forget everything?" The sniper resentfully shouted that the policewoman made her drink her colleague's urine. After that, the image of the blood foxes fell very hard to the bottom. Lin frightenedly shouted to herself that she remembered her rivals. Sniper Cutie threateningly shouted to her rival to shut up. Sniper Cutie then took her rifle and said it was time to wash away the shame. The cutie shouted angrily, "What must be done is to make sure that there's not a trace left of the lion and her companion." The crook was very frightened when he saw the weapon. The policewoman shouted for him to hide. The sniper opened school rifle fire and shouted for her rivals to die soon. The crook, along with the policewoman, hid fearfully behind a crate. The rifle bullets tore apart the boards of the crate. Sweetie asked angrily to the policewoman and her boyfriend, "Did they think they could just hide like that?" Lin noticed that the assassin decided to attack her opponents by jumping over the crate. The paired Blades jumped over the crates and grabbed her sword to attack the policewoman. Lin managed to dodge the first attack of the paired Blades quickly and in time. The girl ducked at the last moment before the sword nearly caught her. The assassin then launched another attack to finish off the Lin. The policewoman looked over and noticed that the paired Blades had caught her in the arm with her sword. To waste no time, the Lynx kicked off the ground and rushed to attack. Lin swung around to kick her opponent's legs and yelled at her to get away. With a powerful kick, the policewoman was able to knock the assassin down with a pair of blades. Ling saw her rival fall down and prepared to lunge at her. The policewoman Lin pounced from above on the hired unit lying on the earth. The Lin demanded of the woman that her partner immediately stop shooting. At the same time, in another part of the ship, soldiers grabbed the girl Loru. The girl could not resist on her own and screamed for help. The soldiers were very angry and rude and demanded Laura to play with them. The girl, together with the kidnappers, was on the second floor at the entrance to the VIP lounge. Quiet and calm footsteps of the protagonist were suddenly heard. The soldiers were surprised. They couldn't understand who had just approached them. Ifei cheerfully asked the kidnappers what they were doing here, and what happened. After that, the soldiers looked at each other very slyly. They were up to something. The kidnapper said that the protagonist was right. He asked him to come closer to them. Laura's girl shouted in a frightened voice to the protagonist to leave. Suddenly, Ifei hit one of the soldiers with a very strong and powerful punch. The main character looked at the rest of the kidnappers menacingly and with hatred. The soldiers were very much frightened by the look of the protagonist. Laura was also surprised. The kidnappers started shooting at the guy haphazardly with their guns. The protagonist snatched the gun from one of the slain invaders. Ife disarmed one of the soldiers with a very quick and strong kick of his foot. He opened fire on them. The guy was hitting the soldiers one by one with his pistols in a professional manner. Laura looked at the protagonist with amazement. She sensed that Ife had awakened. The protagonist kept looking for his girlfriend. He opened the door of the room. The guy saw that there was no one inside the VIP lounge. He called out frightened to Mengxin. Ife saw the dark room in front of him. It was completely empty. The guy looked around in surprise. He couldn't understand where all the people in the room had gone. The protagonist heard a noise and saw a light from outside. He realized he had found the people. Ife went out to the balcony and noticed the invaders along with the hostages from below. The ringleader shouted to his subordinates that they need to get the girls to the boss as soon as possible. The guy angrily thought to himself that for him it's all happening again. Suddenly there were shouts from behind. Soldiers were looking for the protagonist. Someone shouted that he was inside. Armed soldiers ran through the ship to get to the protagonist. The invaders ran and shouted that they had to surround Ife as soon as possible. The protagonist started bravely shooting back, killing the soldiers dead. The boy used his pistol to hit the invaders with precision. Ife had enough of a pistol to professionally kill soldiers with assault rifles. Gradually, more and more dead bodies of invaders appeared around the protagonist. Soon the protagonist found himself almost alone in a cloud of gunpowder smoke. One of the soldiers decided to throw a grenade at the protagonist. He pulled the pin. Ife calmly saw the grenade flying in his direction. The guy calmly stopped the grenade from rolling towards him with his foot. After that, the protagonist calmly tossed the grenade and it flew back. The soldiers were frightened by the grenade. They didn't have time to defend themselves. There was a huge explosion. All the soldiers near the grenade were killed and scattered. The protagonist looked around. He saw the leader with his subordinates. The leader commanded his subordinates angrily to go and check what was going on. Ife absolutely calmly staggered across the carpet, approaching the stairs. The soldiers angrily climbed up the stairs to attack Ife. The protagonist looked around. He grabbed his gun and started shooting at the soldiers. Ife turned sideways very sharply and hit one of the invaders with the gunfire. The guy professionally fired in all directions with 2 pistols at the same time. Suddenly the protagonist noticed the danger from above. He turned around. Ife quickly turned around and hit the soldier from above with his pistol. The shot from the protagonist hit the invader very accurately in the head. The soldier crouched down and took cover from the fire. He was outraged, not realizing who the guy in front of them was. A huge, pumped-up big guy named Big B came up with a machine gun. He yelled for the main character to give way to him. Big B said he'd take care of it and started firing his machine gun. Ife, at this time firing 2 guns, hit another invader. The protagonist shot back and gradually retreated to the big box. The guy jumped up and lay on the crate on his side. He kept firing. Ife hid behind the big crate to protect himself from the machine gun fire. Big B kept firing and shouted angrily to the Golden Eagle that he was a piece of junk. The protagonist remained silent. He waited and prepared to attack once again. At the same time, on the other end of the ship, a policeman was fighting against a hired assassin with paired blades. Lin demanded that the assassin order the sniper to stop shooting the cute little sniper. Pair Blades looked at the cop angrily and told her she was finished. Suddenly, Lin heard a very dangerous noise from outside. A hired killer called the Bloody Widow appeared. She sawed through the box with a chainsaw. The Bloody Widow laughed angrily and lunged at the policewoman with the saw. The woman shouted angrily that she had come to take revenge on the policewoman. The policewoman turned to the crook and shouted excitedly for him to hurry up and leave. The crook sat there and covered his ears out of fear so he wouldn't hear the noise. The policewoman turned to the guy again. Yuan was very frightened. He didn't know what to do now. The policewoman shouted at the boy to go away. She reminded him of his little sister. Yuan sat there with his ears covered in fear, so he couldn't hear anything. Suddenly the crook jumped up and ran away with all his might. He apologized to the policewoman. Lin was distracted from the battle for a moment. She looked after Akuanu. The chainsaw-wielding assassin angrily asked Lin where she was looking. Then the Blood Widow swung her chainsaw to hit Lin. At the same time, the assassin called Pair Blades appeared behind the policewoman. Lin turned around and kicked the knife-wielding assassin. Shots rang out behind her. It was the sniper. Lin took cover behind a crate. The policewoman didn't know what to do. There were already 3 terrorists around her. At the same time, the crook was running at full speed down the deck of the ship. Yuan thought to himself fearfully that his little sister was waiting for him at home. To himself, the boy apologized to the police Lin. He wouldn't be able to handle it. Suddenly, Akuan realized that this was the same situation now as it had been once before. The crook remembered how he was once beaten up by hooligans and fell to the ground. A group of hooligans demanded that the guy give them protection money. His terrified younger siblings stood around Akuan. Jin shouted at the hooligans to stop. The crook grabbed a rock. He was angry and ready to fight off the hooligans. The leader with the bat asked the hooligan with surprise. Does he still want to resist? Suddenly, the crook dropped the brick from his hand. He didn't want to fight back. Then Yuan gave the hooligan the money. He was surprised that the guy was so stubborn. The hooligan angrily apologized to the policewoman that he had given the bandits the money that was supposed to be used for a toy. Yuan thought unhappily to himself that he was always running away and everyone always did so in past times. He thought he was pathetic. The policewoman glanced to the side and noticed that the assassin was heading towards her. Lin prepared to turn around to fight off the woman with the knives. The policewoman hit the paired blades over her head with a powerful elbow strike. The woman was unhappy because she missed the blow to the head. Then Lin swung with all her might to finish off the assassin. The policewoman accelerated and grabbed her baton to continue her defense. Lin, baton in hand, decided to try to hit the Blood Widow. The chainsaw-wielding assassin was able to use it to stab the police Lin in the stomach. Lynx felt she was very badly wounded. She couldn't fight anymore. The Blood Widow laughed very wickedly. She was glad that she was able to hit her rival. At this time, a pair of blades attacked the policewoman from above to finish her off. Lin turned her head to the side and noticed that she was in the crosshairs of the cutie sniper. On the other side of the ship, the main character continued to fight against the terrorists. Ife took cover behind a large crate while bullets whistled above him. Big B continued to fire indiscriminately. The soldiers suggested surrounding the protagonist and swatting him. At this time, the protagonist remembered his past encounter with the Blood Eagle. The Blood Eagle told the protagonist that if he continued to behave like this, he would eventually suffer. The Blood Eagle told the protagonist that he would suffer just as he did. The words he had heard earlier had a profound effect on the protagonist. He decided to act immediately. Ife grabbed his gun and prepared to attack. He remembered the Blood Eagle. The protagonist rushed to the attack. Shots were heard all around him. He thought to himself that he was completely different from his rival Blood Eagle. Ife began firing mercilessly in all directions with his pistols. With his pistols, the guy hit the soldiers in the head. Bigby was frightened when he saw how quickly Ife was able to neutralize the soldiers. The main character was preparing for a further attack. He replaced the ammunition magazines in his pistols. Big B yelled that the protagonist could go at him. He would show him his skills. The ringleader ordered a subordinate to get the women out of here. The soldier turned to the commander named Roger and said he would do everything. Suddenly, there was a very strong explosion from the side. Commander Roger turned around. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a puff of smoke. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a puff of smoke. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a puff of smoke. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a puff of smoke. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a puff of smoke. The commander was very surprised. He saw a strange figure in a